was Yu Hansol. At just 19 years old, he was on the verge of making history. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. A human with this much power. This was a World Powerlifting Congress event. All eyes were on him as he took a deep breath, ready to lift. He focused everything he had into this one moment. He did it. He actually lifted it. The announcer screamed that at 19, Yu Hansol was about to become the strongest human to ever live. But then, something snapped. He lost his balance, and the weight came crashing down. He just stood there, completely out of it, with blood running from his nose. People started screaming for medics, telling him to hold on. The voices around him grew distant, begging him to get up as everything started to fade to black. When he came to, he wondered if he had blacked out again. He remembered his doctor telling him to be careful. Even while he was out, his first thought was that he wasn't muscular enough. The system responded, creating an epic skill just for him, limitless growth of muscle. Then he started worrying that girls don't like guys who are too muscular. So the system created another skill based on that thought. He was stuck on one of life's hardest questions, fashion or muscle growth. But then he remembered what really mattered, protein. That focus unlocked two more skills for him, Hawkeye and Calm. And with all those conditions met, the system announced he had become a legendary species, a bodybuilder. His first thought was whether he remembered to order his chicken breast. He finally opened his eyes to the sound of chickens. He was lying in a field, completely surrounded by them. He shot up, screaming and totally confused about what was happening. The last thing he remembered was deadlifting at the gym. Just as he started to panic, his new calm skill activated, forcing him to relax. He looked around, trying to make sense of it all. He was in a huge field, surrounded by giant chickens. He sat down, trying to piece everything together, and then it hit him. He figured he must have ended up in hell as punishment for eating so many chicken breasts. He decided that must be why they were attacking him. The giant chickens were here for revenge, and they started pecking at him relentlessly. He'd had enough. With a furious shout, he punched one of the chickens right in the chest. He was already on edge. He hadn't gotten enough protein for the day. But then, something strange happened. The system kicked in. His Hawkeye skill activated, and it began analyzing the protein content of his opponents. The system window showed him the chicken had 68 kilograms of protein. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't a curse. It was a message from the gym gods themselves. A huge, hungry grin spread across his face. He leaped into the air, thanking the chickens for their help. They just screamed in terror. A short while later, all that was left were bones. He let out a satisfied burp. After finally getting some protein in him, Hansol felt a lot better. He sat by the fire, completely full. But as he rested, something started to bother him. He looked down at his arm. It seemed way too thin. Then he felt his chest. His muscles had gotten smaller. For a bodybuilder, this was a total nightmare. He reached back and scratched an itch. It was a simple thing, but he hadn't been able to do it since he was a kid. His muscles were always too big. He stared at his reflection in the water, trying to reassure himself. All that effort couldn't just disappear, right? But as he looked closer, the horrible truth started to sink in. He let out a scream of pure horror. He scrambled out of the water, completely freaking out. All his muscles were gone. He looked down at his stomach. The abs he'd worked on for years had vanished. At that moment, being in some strange fantasy world didn't matter at all. He had only one mission now. He had to get huge again, no matter what it took. So he got to work immediately, starting with the basics. He punched a tree with everything he had. Then he found the biggest log he could manage and hoisted it onto his back. He started doing squats, one after another. He kept reminding himself not to worry. He just had to start over from the beginning. He believed his effort would pay off, because hard work never, ever betrays you. He kept at it, moving from squats to jumping squats, day after day. 3 months passed, just like that. And after all that time, he was still going, pushing himself to the absolute limit. He took a moment to appreciate all the effort he'd put in, but it was all a lie. After 3 months of non-stop training, he hadn't gained a single ounce of muscle. He tried to look on the bright side. At least he still had plenty of protein walking around. He decided he would just start over from the beginning, with the heart of a true gym lover. But that's when he looked up and saw what was towering over him. He blinked, confused for a second. Then the realization hit him. The massive creature let out a deafening cry that shook the entire forest. He ran for his life, screaming about why this was happening to him. All he ever wanted was to have huge muscles. He screamed in frustration, wondering why he couldn't just get the massive muscles he'd always wanted. The giant chicken slammed its wing down, and the force of the impact sent him flying. He knew the creature was fast and strong, and that one hit could be the end of him. But as he ran, he realized something else was even more dangerous. It was the monster's chest muscles. They were so incredibly well built that he just couldn't look away. A thought suddenly hit him. He wondered if the wing movement was like a cable crossover, a chest exercise he'd been ignoring. He had been so focused on pure strength that he'd forgotten to train his smaller muscles too. He called himself an idiot, realizing that's why his own chest looked so pathetic. With the monster closing in, he screamed that he couldn't die yet. He had a new goal, to build chest muscles just as impressive as the chickens. He finally found a place to hide and watched as 2 much smaller chickens wandered by, completely unaware of the chaos. He cursed the chickens as he ran. His Hawkeye skill activated, but he yelled that he didn't need it. The system just told him the little monsters had about 68 kilograms of protein. But then, a much bigger chicken appeared. It was enormous and terrifying. Hansol screamed. immediately apologizing to all the chickens he'd ever eaten. The Hawkeye skill activated again, this time targeting the giant monster. He screamed for it to stop. He didn't need a stat breakdown right now, but the system ignored him. It identified the creature as a cockatrice with 12,000 kilograms of protein. More importantly, it said that eating it would grant him a rare skill, amazing muscle recovery. Suddenly, all the fear was gone. He just stood there, thinking about what that meant. Muscle recovery. The monster's giant foot came crashing down, ready to crush him. But even then, all he could think about was a simple fact. Most people are wrong about how you build muscle. He remembered that exercise doesn't build muscle. It destroys it. It tears the fibers and actually makes you weaker for a little while. The real growth happens after, during rest, with the right food, that the damaged muscles grow back even stronger. A process called super recovery. So, if he could recover faster, he could grow his muscles faster. And if he could do that, he could finally stop being a weakling. The monster smashed into the tree, sending him flying. But Hansel had already made up his mind. There was no way he wasn't going to risk his life for this. He pulled himself into a posture he'd repeated countless times to build his chest. A warning popped up. His power was surging beyond what his skill could handle. The system asked if he wanted to deactivate his muscle skill. He didn't even hesitate. The skill was deactivated. The system confirmed he had surpassed his limits and unlocked a new unique skill, changing skeleton. His entire body began to warp and grow. The giant monster could only stare, completely shocked by what it was seeing. His body had completely transformed. He looked at the giant monster and saw only one thing, an one-armed dumbbell. His eyes glowed with raw power. He was about to perform an one-armed dumbbell press. He lifted the entire monster into the air with just one arm. The creature was completely stunned, having no idea what was happening. Then, with all his might, he pressed. The force sent the monster flying through the air, but a warning flashed from the system. His muscles were completely worn out. The creature crashed hard into the ground. At the same time, the system announced his recovery skill was kicking in. He didn't care about skills or warnings. All he could see was a giant chicken breast, ready to be eaten. He collapsed, completely spent, but satisfied. After eating his fill, the system gave him a reward, a new skill for amazing muscle recovery. Hansel thought back to that night. He was just sitting by the fire, eating, with no clue what was about to happen. He was trying to figure out where he was. More importantly, he couldn't understand why his muscles kept disappearing, and it made him question everything he knew. He had no idea what was lurking in the darkness, or that he was already surrounded by monsters. The creatures hiding in the dark were starving. One of them couldn't even control its drooling, and another had to tell it to stop. The ghoul apologized, explaining it had been so long since they'd even smelled meat. The others agreed. They were all desperate. Then, one of them nervously wondered aloud about the one who had defeated Cockatrice. He looked over at the campfire and asked if it could possibly be the human sitting there. One of them wanted to go ask him directly, but another one panicked, warning that he could be a dangerous monster. That's when Hansel stopped eating. He'd heard them. He turned and saw the three creatures just sitting there, waiting. He looked at them, confused, and asked what they were. One of them nervously tried to speak. He almost called them meat before correcting himself, explaining that they were the ghouls from the Ali Mine region. Suddenly, Hansel's Hawkeye skill kicked in. He wasn't seeing a monster anymore. He was seeing its stats, specifically its protein content. The ghoul panicked, trying to assure Hansel that he didn't see humans as food. Hansel just looked at his food, completely unfazed. He'd never even heard of a ghoul before. The ghoul then explained why they were there. He said they were searching for the one who defeated a monster named Cockatrice and asked if Hansel knew anything. Hansel realized they were talking about the giant chicken he was eating. He admitted that he was the one who killed it, then apologized, thinking it must have been someone's property. The ghouls were ecstatic. They started celebrating right there on the spot. They had found him. The ghoul went on to explain the bigger picture. Ever since Cockatrice died, a massive turf war had broken out between all the different species in the area. But Hansel wasn't really paying attention to the details of the war. He was just looking down, thinking about how incredibly thin the ghoul's leg was. As the creature continued talking about Cockatrice's territory, Hansel was completely lost in his own head. He seriously wondered if the ghoul's leg was so weak it would just snap if he hit it once. The ghouls all bowed low. They formally asked for a favor from the man who had defeated Cockatrice. Hansel was a little thrown off by how serious they were. But then, he got this weird look on his face. He asked them to say it again, pretending he didn't hear them. The ghoul looked completely exhausted. He pointed out that they'd already asked him 9 times. That's when Hansel's real reason came out. He started laughing, yelling that they had to do at least 10 sets. He got super intense, pointing at the ghoul and explaining his philosophy. If you're going to do something, you have to do it at least 10 times. The ghouls just stared at each other, completely speechless. They had no idea how to respond to that. Finally, one of the ghouls had enough. He told the others they should just leave, convinced Hansel wasn't going to help them at all. Hansel just laughed. He told them he was sorry, but he was way too busy growing his muscles to help out. He even told them to stop wasting time and get going. The ghouls didn't argue. One of them just patted his friend on the back and said it was okay, that everyone had their reasons. But as they walked away, Hansel called out to them. He realized there was no way he could eat that entire giant chicken breast all by himself. They stopped. One of them said they should take some, admitting that none of them had eaten any meat in a very long time, so they came back. The ghoul apologized for bothering him earlier and thanked him for the food. For a moment, they all just looked at the massive piece of meat sitting in front of them. One of the ghouls leaned forward, but then he paused, just staring at the food. Hansel watched him closely. Suddenly, he wasn't so sure if he should just let this happen. He realized something was off about that ghoul. The ghoul bent over to pick up the giant chicken breast, but his form was terrible. Hansel screamed at him to stop, warning him that he was about to break his back. The creature just looked back, having absolutely no idea what was happening. Hansel got right in his face, absolutely furious. He started yelling about how dangerous deadlifting is if you do it with the wrong posture. He told the terrified ghoul that he almost said goodbye to his back forever. The creature apologized, still completely lost about what he'd done wrong. Hansel's expression softened. It was starting to make sense. He calmly asked them if they even knew what a deadlift was. The ghouls just looked at each other, totally bewildered. They admitted they'd never even heard that word before. Hansel just put his hand over his face. It all clicked. This was exactly why their bodies were so weak. Then he remembered something his teacher told him way back in elementary school. It was a lesson about moving heavy things together. He remembered his old instructor telling him that you only really learn something when you teach it to someone else. Of course, he also told Hansel not to talk to him while he was working out. The man had told him that if his muscles ever stopped growing, he should try teaching others to break through. Teaching others. The idea clicked in his mind. The ghouls worked together, carrying the massive piece of meat through the forest. They looked to him, unsure of what to do next. Hansel made up his mind. He told them that after they finished eating, he would go with them to their home. The ghouls were thrilled. Hansel agreed, but said they had to wait until tomorrow. He explained that he needed plenty of sleep for his muscles to grow properly. This was the ghoul village. Inside, a huge, out-of-shape ghoul sat on a throne. He looked down at Hansel and welcomed him. The creature introduced himself as the Ghoul Lord, the ruler of this place. As he spoke, Hansel's Hawkeye skill activated, but he instantly shut it down. He wasn't interested in this guy's protein content. Hansel figured he was basically their tribal chief. He politely told the Ghoul Lord that the journey here was no problem. The Ghoul Lord seemed pleased with his answer, but all Hansel could see was the leader's body, thin limbs, and a massive gut. It was a classic case of zero exercise. While the Ghoul Lord thanked him for the food, Hansel was already sure this guy loved alcohol and greasy meals. The leader mentioned he'd sent the other ghouls to bring the rest of the meat. He casually added that it would probably take them a while. He suddenly burst out laughing, mocking Hansel for even worrying about such lowly creatures. Hansel was getting tired of this guy and just wanted him to get to the point. That's when the Ghoul Lord's tone changed. He leaned in and said they were in trouble, all because Hansel had killed Cockatrice. The Ghoul Lord explained that his people were the weakest in the area. He said they were terrible at physical fights, and he was the only one who could even use a skill. Because of that, they were forced to eat rotten corpses just to survive. Hansel stopped him, completely confused. He asked what a skill even was. The Ghoul Lord's friendly expression vanished. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked if Hansel was joking. Hansel insisted he wasn't kidding. The Ghoul Lord just stared for a second, then started snickering to himself. His face twisted into a nasty grin. He ordered his guards to bring him the ghouls who had brought Hansel here. The ghouls who found Hansel were dragged forward. The Ghoul Lord looked down from his throne and commanded them to kneel. With their hands tied, the terrified ghouls dropped to their knees. One of them nervously asked their lord why he had called for them. The Ghoul Lord just smirked. He told them they probably didn't even realize the sin they had committed. Then he stood up from his throne. He gave one last order to bring him that. The Ghoul Lord dragged a massive club behind him. He explained that for monsters, there was one simple rule: be loyal to the strong. He said it was a divine rule that had been followed for a very long time. That's why he wanted to find the one who beat Cockatrice and make them his follower. But now, he believed he had been lied to. He roared that they would pay for their sin with their lives. Then he activated his skill, Heavy Blunt, making the club glow with a dark energy. With a wicked grin, he brought the glowing weapon crashing down, but the hit never landed. A voice cut through the tension, asking what the hell he thought he was doing. It was Hansel. He'd stopped the massive club with just one hand. He called out the Ghoul Lord for wasting time and picking on the weak, asking if that was the culture of their village. The Ghoul Lord stared in disbelief, completely stunned that his attack had been stopped. He angrily demanded to know what was going on. He tried to make sense of it, wondering if his skill had even activated. He decided it must have been a mistake. There was no way someone so weak could block his full power. He figured Hansel just got lucky. With a nasty grin, he decided to show him what a real skill looked like. The Ghoul Lord's club began to glow with a purple energy. He explained that his skill, Heavy Blunt, could multiply an object's weight by up to 10 times. Hansel's eyes widened. Multiplying weight? The idea immediately caught his attention. The Ghoul Lord bragged that since he had a lot of mana, he could easily multiply the weight 5. He explained that his club already weighed 32 kilograms. He asked Hansel to imagine what would happen when that weight was multiplied and combined with his monstrous swing speed. Then he activated it, shouting as he multiplied the club's weight by 4. The other ghouls could only watch in terror. The super heavy club came crashing down. Hansel just raised one hand and caught it, shattering the weapon instantly. The Ghoul Lord was completely stunned. He admitted Hansel's skill was amazing, saying it was a shame they had to be enemies. But Hansel wasn't listening. His eyes started to glow as he suddenly grabbed one of the other ghouls. He wasn't just grabbing him. He was using the ghoul as a weight for an one-arm front raise. Before the ghoul lord could even react, Hansel was right in his face, grabbing him by the chin. Hansel looked down at him, his expression cold. He asked if the ghoul lord really thought he was strong enough to decide who lives and who dies. The ghoul lord couldn't do a thing. He was completely at Hansel's mercy. Then, with a dead serious look, he asked the most important question he could think of. What were the ghoul lord's big 3 lifts? The ghoul lord was completely confused. He thought Hansel was asking for permission to hit him 3 times. Hansel calmly explained that the big 3 wasn't about fighting. It was about the 3 most important exercises: the bench press, squat, and deadlift. The total weight lifted in those 3 was a person's score. He couldn't believe it. He asked the ghoul lord if he'd really never heard of it. And just like that, a simple question turned into a full-blown strength showdown. They set up a massive barbell made of rocks. The ghoul lord looked at it nervously and asked if he really had to lift it. Hansel just nodded. The ghoul lord agreed, but reminded Hansel of the deal. If he lost this challenge, he had to become Hansel's subordinate. Hansel gave him some honest advice, warning him to keep his posture right so he wouldn't hurt his back. But the ghoul lord just laughed to himself. He thought Hansel was a fool for not realizing he could use his skill to make the weight lighter. He activated his heavy blunt skill, secretly cutting the barbell's weight down to a quarter of what it should be. The ghoul lord grunted, pulling with all his might. He managed to lift the 200-kilogram weight, completing the deadlift as the other ghouls clapped. Hansel wasn't impressed at all. He just calmly told the ghoul lord it was his turn now and gave him a quick tip: use his glutes more next time. Then he turned to the rest of the ghouls. He told them to watch closely, because if he won, he was going to make every single one of them do this exercise. With that, Hansel got into position. He explained that the deadlift is a full body exercise that truly measures a person's raw strength. He started doing some warm-ups. He said that most people think it's all about back muscles. The real power comes from the lower body. He stressed that proper posture is everything to avoid injury. The first step was simple: stand up straight with your feet shoulder width apart. Second, he opened his chest and straightened his back, explaining how to tighten the back, core, and glutes to create a solid base. For the final step, he explained that you lift the barbell straight up, keeping it close to your body, driving all the power from your feet through your entire frame. Hansel was explaining the last step of the lift, but the ghoul lord wasn't going to let it be that easy. He grabbed the barbell and activated his heavy blunt skill, making it magically heavier. Then he dared Hansel to try and lift it. Hansel's eyes started to glow. He gripped the bar, his muscles tensing for the lift. With a single pull, he didn't just lift the barbell, he launched it straight into the sky. It just kept going, flying so high it became a tiny dot above the entire village. The ghouls could only stare, completely speechless. Hansel just admitted that he might have used a little too much strength. He apologized and said they just have to make another barbell. The ghoul lord was so shocked he couldn't even speak. That one lift changed everything. The ghouls all dropped to the ground and started bowing. They begged Hansel to become their new lord. Hansel had no idea what was going on. That's when a system window appeared, telling him he had achieved the title of Ghoul Lord. After losing the strength contest, the ghoul lord became completely obedient. He now followed Hansel's every word. Hansel started asking questions, and the ghoul lord explained everything. Turns out, this wasn't just some strange place. He was in a completely different world. The ghoul lord also mentioned a legend about people being able to return to their own worlds. But Hansel wasn't interested. He couldn't go back home looking like this. He'd lost some of his gains. He learned this world was called Laisha, a place where only the strong survive. That's why the ghoul lord pledged his loyalty. To make things easier, Hansel decided to give him a new name, Ghoul Lord. Ghoul Lord led the way, eventually stopping and announcing they had arrived. This was the place where the ghouls trained their warriors. Hansel had already seen how skinny the ghouls were. He had a very bad feeling about this. He looked out at the so-called training ground. It was just a patch of dirt with a few broken sticks scattered around. He couldn't believe how bad it was. He turned to Ghoul Lord and demanded to know what kind of training they'd been doing here. The former lord just stammered nervously, admitting they didn't have any knowledge of how to train at all. He decided it didn't matter if they had no equipment. A real trainer could make his own. With a look of pure intensity, he yelled for all the ghouls to get into 5 rows. The ghouls quickly lined up. They looked totally lost, a little scared. Hansel stood before them and laid out the hard truth. He told them he knew they were considered the weakest, forced to eat the scraps left behind by other monsters. Then he asked a simple question. What did they think they needed to change their situation? He shot down all the usual answers, like teamwork or speed. He roared that the only thing they needed was a strong body. With a confident smile, he made them a promise. Starting right now, he would turn them all into warriors in just 3 months. The ghouls were instantly fired up. 3 months? They couldn't believe it. The thought of finally earning some respect filled them with energy. Hansel saw their excitement and his expression hardened. He told them if they were ready, they could start right now. He ordered them all into a push-up position. The ghouls just stared back at him, totally lost. They had no idea what a front-leaning position even was. So Hansel showed them himself, dropping to the ground and roaring at them to get down. They tried to copy him, but their bodies were too weak and clumsy. They didn't know what they were doing. Hansel's eyes started to glow with pure intensity. He announced that they would warm up with some push-ups. The first goal was 100 push-ups. He yelled for them to start. 3 hours passed. The ghouls were completely broken. They lay on the ground, shaking and groaning, unable to move another inch. But Hansel was still going, not even breaking a sweat. He was counting his reps out loud, and he was already past 24,000. While doing one-handed push-ups with a massive rock on his back, Hansel looked over at the broken ghouls. He asked if that was really all they had in them. With a grin, he announced that after just 100 more push-ups, they could finally have their meal. The ghouls were horrified. After already doing 700 push-ups, he wanted them to do 100 more. They started collapsing, complaining that they'd die if they continued. Some even mumbled that things were better when the ghoul lord was in charge. As they whispered amongst themselves, they wondered if the old ghoul lord would ever come back to challenge this new trainer. Finally, Hansel pushed himself up. He looked at the exhausted crowd and told everyone to stand up. The ghouls sighed in relief, thinking it was finally over. They stretched their aching bodies, complaining that they felt like they were about to shatter. Just as one of them started talking about food, Hansel slammed his fist into the ground. He roared that their weak attitude was the exact reason they were called the weakest monsters in the wilderness. He looked down, his voice low but intense. He asked if they were really fine with being called the weakest. The ghouls just stared as his voice boomed. He reminded them that this was the wilderness, where only the strong survive. He yelled, asking if they were just going to be cowards who run while their families get killed. He pointed at them, telling anyone who was that kind of trash to just get out. He said he refused to train cowards. But then, his tone changed. He clenched his fist and promised that for anyone who stayed, he would give them the strength to protect what they cared about. All they had to do was trust him. He then asked them a question. What makes a trainer the best? Is it the one who knows everything about muscles, or the one who pushed their own body to its absolute limit? He admitted that trainers like that could definitely produce great results for some people, but he declared that those weren't the best trainers. He said the best trainer is someone who can do one thing. They can motivate the people who have absolutely no desire to exercise in the first place. Then he started screaming at them to push like their lives depended on it. He told them to use all their strength to push away the weak people they used to be. He yelled at them to protect their parents, to imagine holding their father with their right hand and their mother with their left. He screamed that this was for their families, for their tribe, and for themselves. This was their chance to change everything. And something inside them just snapped. The ghoul let out a huge scream, pushing with everything he had. Hansel roared right back at him, his own muscles straining as he yelled for them to push. And just like that, every single one of them pushed up at the same time. They were finally working as one. With just a little motivation, the ghoul stopped complaining. Turns out, Hansel was right all along. He might not have even known he had it, but at that moment, one of his trainer skills leveled up. The system notified him that Hawkeye had evolved to level 2. 3 months passed. A group of lizard men were marching through the woods. One of them asked if they were on the right path to the ghoul village, and his partner confirmed it. They spotted the village in the distance. One of the soldiers asked if they should get into formation before the attack, but their leader just scoffed at the idea. He yelled back, asking why they'd need a formation for a bunch of weak ghouls. He ordered them to just attack. He declared that the lizard men would take this place as their first colony. With a war cry, the army charged forward, but up on the hill, Hansel and one of the ghouls were already watching. The ghoul pointed them out, identifying them as lizard men. Then he added that they had really nice leg muscles. Hansel didn't wait. He started shouting orders like a drill sergeant, telling the bench press group to open their chests and brace their stomachs. He told them to tighten every muscle, keep their eyes on the enemy, and wait for his signal. Then he gave the final command. The ghouls pressed, sending massive rocks crashing down on the charging lizard men. The impact was devastating. One hit, and it was over for the first soldier. The lizard man leader stared at his fallen men in disbelief. He screamed, demanding to know who was responsible for the attack. A voice answered from above. It was Hansel, calmly looking down at the chaos. He told the lizard man that the attackers were the ghouls, and that they weren't the weakest monsters anymore. These weren't the skinny, weak creatures they expected. They were absolute monsters, built for a bodybuilding competition. The lizard men army was in total chaos. The rocks crashed down, crushing soldiers left and right. The leader knew his army was about to be wiped out. He had to change tactics. He decided that if he could just take out their boss, the battle would be over. He looked up and focused on one of them. He could feel a strong mana coming from the chubby one. He figured that had to be the leader. And since he was just a ghoul, the lizard man was sure he couldn't lose. So he tore off his ruined armor and roared up at the cliff. He called out the ghoul lord, telling him to stop hiding behind his men like a coward. He demanded they finish this with a one-on-one battle. The ghoul chief immediately looked over at Hansel. He nervously asked him what he was going to do. Hansel didn't answer. He just looked down, thinking it over. Hansel thought back to when he was younger. He remembered raising an iguana as a pet. Well, it wasn't exactly an iguana. It was a rare species called a sea crocodile, and it was always trying to play. And the thing about this pet was its incredible bite force. The pressure was insane, like 2 tons clamping down on his arm. The crocodile had latched on tight, but even with all that power, its teeth couldn't even break through his trained muscles. He remembered what people say you should do when a pet doesn't listen. The crocodile immediately sensed the shift in the air. It started to whimper, suddenly looking very nervous. He snapped his fingers. That's when he remembered exactly what he was supposed to do. Back in the present, Fatso watched as one of the lizard men hit the ground hard. Hansel stared down at the lizard man leader. He yelled, calling him the ghoul lord, and asking if he was ready to give up. He didn't wait for an answer. He just grabbed him. With a huge roar, Hansel slammed the lizard man leader straight into the ground. He pinned the creature down, sitting right on its back. Then he put the lesson from his childhood into practice. The first step was intimidation. The lizard man screamed for Hansol to let him go, but Hansol just remembered the old advice. When dealing with an animal, you have to show it that you're stronger. With his eyes glowing, Hansol repeated one thought over and over in his head, forcing the idea into the lizard man's mind. He was stronger. The lizard man leader screamed for Hansol to let him go, yelling that he was shaming a warrior, but Hansol didn't even blink. He just kept staring, his pressure never letting up for a second. That's when the lizard man's spirit finally broke. He started sweating, completely terrified. He threw his head back and finally gave in. He surrendered. Hansol grinned, thinking to himself that the advice he'd read in that book was actually right. With the lizard man leader begging to be let go, the ghouls on the cliff cheered like crazy. The fight was officially over. They had won. Meanwhile, not too far away from the alley mine, something else was happening. The story shifts to the Wordo Duchy, a kingdom built on a hill overlooking a quiet town. Inside the castle, a lord addressed a group of kneeling warriors. He told them it was an honor to have such talented people in his country. This was Count Wordo, and the feudal lord. He officially gave them their mission, a second-class assignment to investigate the disappearance of Cockatrice. Without a moment of hesitation, the warriors shouted back that they would do as he commanded. With their orders received, the three warriors turned and walked out of the throne room. After they left, a woman approached the count. She asked the general if he was sure about sending such baby chicks on an important mission, but she just laughed and told the count not to worry. She explained that even though they were young, they were all considered geniuses. She started with Liper, explaining that he was known for his flashy swordsmanship. His technique was so good, he was better at tricky attacks than even a swordmaster. Then she talked about Hendard, who was the complete opposite. He used a tough, powerful style, cutting down opponents and their weapons with a single, heavy strike. She said that when those two were together, nothing could beat them unless a dragon showed up. The count agreed they sounded dependable. The count then asked about the innocent-looking warrior who was with them, assuming he must be just as skilled. The woman hesitated. She admitted he wasn't really talented with swords, but he did work hard. Confused, the count asked why they'd send him along. She explained that the three of them had been friends since they were kids. And besides, she added with a smile, the two geniuses just liked having him around. Miles away, the three warriors were already making their way through the forest, their mission underway. But they weren't alone. A goblin was hiding in the trees, taking aim. It had a clear shot at the three of them, and they had no idea. The goblin let the arrow fly, but in a flash, Liper was already moving. He deflected the arrow just inches from his friend's face. The man froze, stunned. He was sweating, realizing just how close he'd come to death. That's when the rest of them appeared. Hendard shouted a warning. There were hobgoblins mixed in with the smaller ones. The creatures closed in, ready to strike, but Hendard was faster. One punch, and the first goblin was completely destroyed. Liper was just as fast, cutting down another goblin with his massive sword. Liper shouted to Hendard that Blog's safety was their top priority. Hendard agreed instantly. He wouldn't let anyone lay a finger on him. They both screamed that they would protect Blog, no matter what. He just stood there, stammering, completely overwhelmed by the chaos. Finally, he managed to shout out a thank you, his voice full of emotion. After the fight, Liper checked on Blog, apologizing for letting a goblin get so close. But Blog just shook his head, saying he was grateful they were all safe. But Hendard wasn't satisfied. He grabbed Liper, angrily accusing him of not taking the fight seriously. Liper just apologized, admitting it was his fault. Watching them, Blog felt helpless, envious of their strength. He wondered how someone like him, with no talent, could ever get stronger. The memory of his harsh training came flooding back, being kicked and called an useless bastard. He prayed for an answer, feeling like he couldn't go on any longer. That's when a new voice cut through his thoughts, questioning his despair. A pair of bare feet stepped into view, belonging to someone with insane leg muscles. The muscular man looked over with a smirk. He announced to the others that their friend couldn't do it anymore. A bald man with pale skin just nodded, saying they didn't have a choice then. With a grunt, he lifted a massive green creature off the ground. The muscular man was forcing Blog to do push-ups with the entire lizard man on his back. He shouted that they were starting the count all over again. Blog screamed in disbelief, having no idea what this insane exercise was even supposed to be. After everything, Blog thanked the lizard men for their help. The pale man standing with him offered another training session, but Blog immediately shut that down. He was done, but the zombie builders weren't going to let them leave without a proper goodbye. They all struck a pose, flexing hard as they shouted their farewells. The lizard man just stared, completely speechless. He had no idea what he was even looking at. With that strange farewell, the lizard men turned and headed out. Blog and his group waved them off. Once they were gone, Blog turned to one of the zombie builders. He admitted that he was just as surprised as they were when he first learned about their methods. He started to explain the idea of deloading. When you exercise, your muscles get torn apart. They only grow bigger when they have time to heal. But if your central nervous system gets too tired, you can't exercise as well, and you might even get hurt. To avoid that, you have to rest properly. He remembered the 9th week of training. Everyone, even the ghouls, had hit a wall. Their growth had completely stalled because they were just too worn out. Blog remembered their performance dropping from thousands of reps to just a few hundred. He decided to give them a day off to rest. The results the next morning were amazing. The next day, one of the zombie builders waved cheerfully. He shouted out a good morning, full of energy. Blog looked them over, a little surprised. He wondered if they'd actually gotten taller and bigger overnight. The ghouls just wanted to know what exercise they were doing today. That's when his Hawkeye skill activated. The system told him the ghouls had evolved into something called a gid builder with only 8% body fat. Blog was shocked, realizing they probably didn't need to deload anymore. He turned to the group and announced that the lizard men were back. It was time to go prepare a meal for them. One of the zombie builders spoke up, asking Hansel if it was okay for them to go hunting on their own. Hansel's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly what they were really asking. He accused them of trying to skip their exercise. The zombie builder nervously explained that it wasn't about skipping exercise. The truth was, they had never actually defeated one of the big monsters on their own before. He explained that they had only ever moved the creatures Hansel had already killed, but now, flexing his new chest muscles, he said that maybe they finally stood a chance. Hansel's face lit up. He immediately agreed, excited that this meant he could increase his own exercise time. Watching them, Fatso quietly wondered if the Goid builders could actually win. Hansel overheard him and turned, asking what he meant by that. Fatso immediately panicked, waving his hands and telling Hansel it was nothing. He quickly tried to explain that he was just wondering if the Gid builders could surpass Hansel if they all worked together. He insisted it was a mistake and begged his master to just ignore it. But Hansel just laughed. He put a hand on Fatso's shoulder and told him not to worry about it. He looked at his trainees and made a declaration. He wasn't going to lose to anyone in deadlifting. So, Hansel had them all marching through the woods, carrying heavy packs. One of the zombie builders was already exhausted, asking if this was really necessary. Hansel just watched them, analyzing their form. He noticed that one of them actually had a pretty good lunge posture. But then, one of them took a bad step. He went down hard, grabbing his ankle. The other stopped, staring in shock. He was in a lot of pain. Hansel's eyes went wide. This wasn't part of the plan. Their entire march had come to a dead stop. While everyone else was resting, one of them was still training. He couldn't stop thinking about his friends. Leiper and Wenderd were still upset about that one goblin they missed. And he knew it was his fault. He felt weak, unreliable, like he was the reason they were always so worried. He decided right then that he had to get stronger. He would just have to train harder than anyone else, even while they were sleeping. Suddenly, another hand gently corrected his grip. It was Leiper. He stood behind him, guiding his swing and telling him to put more strength into his thumb. Blog turned around, surprised. He asked Leiper if he had woken him up. Leiper just smiled, telling him of course not, and playfully called him stupid. Leiper explained that they knew Blog was training secretly every night. They just pretended not to see because they wanted him to succeed. He called it feedback, just a little push to help his friend get better. Blog was completely speechless, a single drop of sweat running down his face. Leiper just smirked, teasingly asking if he was blushing. Blog tried to play it off, saying it was just from practicing. Leiper burst out laughing. That's when another voice cut in, asking what they were doing without him. It was Hendard. He was standing there with his arms crossed, looking like he'd been left out. Blog quickly tried to explain, stammering that he was just practicing when Leiper came over to help. Before Hendard could even get a word out, Leiper put a finger to his lips. He angrily poked Hendard in the face, asking how he dared to show up after putting Blog in danger. Suddenly, Hansel's voice cut through the argument. He told them it was late, and if they didn't sleep now, they'd be slow tomorrow. He then added that Blog needed to sleep during peak skin regeneration hours, so his skin could get softer. Blog had no idea what he was talking about. Leiper actually considered it for a moment, admitting he hadn't thought of that. Hansel just gave him a stern look, telling him to be more careful. Hansel told Blog that was enough for one day. Finally, Blog snapped, shouting at them and asking why they were fighting over his sleeping schedule. Just then, something moved quickly through the dark woods. Leiper just smiled and gave a thumbs up, explaining it was because they were friends. Blog just couldn't understand why friends would fight over something so strange. A creature was watching them from the bushes. Down below, Blog just sighed, completely done with the conversation. He figured they'd just say they were joking anyway. He tried to get everyone to just go to sleep for the night, but Hendard wasn't listening. His eyes snapped open as he spotted movement in the dark. He yelled for everyone to get ready for a fight. It was the lizard man. Hansel didn't even flinch. He just drew his massive weapon, ready to protect his friends. But this wasn't a fight. They were running for their lives, trying to get away from the horde of creatures. But something was off. Turns out, the lizard men weren't chasing them. Their leader was screaming at his own kind to run, because something was chasing them. The creatures screamed in terror, running as fast as they could. That's when they finally saw what everyone was running from. A stampede of giant, angry chickens. A strange sound started to build. It was coming from one of the muscular ghouls. Its hand reached out as it finished the word, and then all of them started shouting it. They wanted protein. The ghouls charged straight for the giant chickens, which were now running for their lives. Hansel, completely lost in his own world, didn't notice a thing. His training had completely flipped the food chain upside down. The weakest creatures in the forest had just become the top predators. From the bushes, a group of onlookers watched the whole thing unfold. They looked completely stunned by the chaos. One of them turned to Hansel, nervously asking if his ghouls could really handle this. He pointed out that the chickens looked like their muscles were even better developed than the ghouls. The man tried to play it cool, telling Hansel it was probably just balloon muscles. Hansel was furious. He demanded to know where he learned such a disrespectful word. Meanwhile, one of the giant chickens spotted a worm on the ground near a tree. It tried to squeeze between two trees to get to it, but its body was just too big. Stuck and angry, its eyes began to glow. It let out a furious cry as its muscles tensed up, veins popping out all over its body. With one massive flex, it completely shattered both trees just to get to a tiny worm. The giant chicken had done all that just for a tiny worm on the ground. Turns out, the worm looked just like a miniature version of the chicken itself. Hansel watched from the bushes, looking a little concerned, but his ghouls weren't scared at all. One of them stepped forward, looking like he had something to prove. He walked over to two trees, just like the chicken had. He got into position, ready to show that he could do it too. He let out a huge grunt, pushing with everything he had, but the trees didn't move. The ghoul said he'd try again after a minute of rest. Hansel immediately corrected him, saying he needed a full 3 minutes between sets. Then he started giving him tips on his form. He told the ghoul to adjust his back foot, explaining that this wasn't a proper bench. The ghoul listened carefully, getting ready for his next attempt. With his form corrected, the ghoul tried again. The rest of the group watched, waiting to see if it would work this time. He focused all of his strength, completely determined to break through. He let out a huge roar, putting every bit of his strength into the push. And this time, the trees actually started to move. He forced the trees apart, creating a path. Hansel calmly told him to step out, but Hansel wasn't celebrating. He explained that while their training had built up their fast twitch muscles, there was a problem he hadn't noticed until now. He pointed to the chickens down below. They were all doing their own version of push-ups. One of the chickens flapped its wing, barely pushing itself off the ground. Hansel looked completely disgusted. He couldn't believe how weak their form was. The ghouls were just realizing how much their own muscles had grown. One of them turned to Hansel, confused about why he was so upset. Hansel covered his face, completely ashamed. He apologized, saying it was his fault they couldn't keep up with the chickens. The ghoul asked him what they should do, wondering if their posture was wrong or if they needed to train a different muscle. Hansel shouted that it wasn't their fault at all. The real problem, he explained, was that their muscles had just gotten used to the same old routine. The ghouls looked worried, asking what they were supposed to do. Hansel told them the answer was simple. They just had to change the routine. He grinned, then ordered them to stop standing around and line up in 5 rows. Once they were all assembled, he looked over his new class, checking to see if everyone was ready. He pointed towards 2 trees with straps tied between them. He called it a cable machine, explaining that he'd built it just for them. Then he told them to give him 3 claps. The ghouls immediately started clapping. Hansel explained that from now on, they'd be doing cable crosses to build up their inner chest. He promised that with this one exercise, they'd easily beat those chickens. The ghouls went wild. They started cheering, shouting that their master always had the answer to their problems. And they all agreed Hansel was the best. Hansel smiled and told everyone to quiet down so he could explain the new exercise. He got into position for the cable cross. He explained that this exercise was designed to build up the inner chest muscles and improve their quality. He warned them that it was a hard exercise for beginners because proper posture was everything. He promised to go slowly, and the ghouls all shouted their agreement. First, he told them to lean down a little and bend their knees slightly. Second, he instructed them not to extend their arms completely. The goal was to keep constant force on the muscle so it couldn't move. For the third step, they had to stand in the center, push their chests out, and bring their hands together with steady force, like a bird trying to fly. Finally, he explained that changing the height of the cable and their leaning angle would work different parts of the muscle. The most important thing was to stiffen their body and not use momentum to cheat. With the lesson finished, he smiled and asked if anyone had any questions. He told them it was their turn. He'd set up more of the cable machines on other trees so everyone could get a chance to try it. The ghouls roared with excitement. It was total chaos. They all started fighting to be first, yelling at each other not to cut in line. One of them screamed that his chest muscles were about to get a serious workout. Watching from a distance, a man with purple hair just smiled. He thought the gym-obsessed ghouls were actually kind of cute. One of the ghouls was already hard at work, his chest muscles straining. The nearby chickens just stared, having no idea what was going on. One of the chickens watched them closely, as if it was taking notes. The ghouls all started flexing, proudly yelling that after following Hansel's instructions, their chests had gotten bigger. The chicken's eye went wide. It couldn't believe what it was seeing. Their chests were practically sparkling with new muscle. The chickens stared, completely fixated on their gains. Suddenly, the chickens started glowing. They were making strange noises, like they were powering up. The man with purple hair and one of the ghouls were completely lost. They had no idea what was happening. One of the chickens glowed brighter than all the others. It let out a huge cry. The transformation was complete. The man was stunned, realizing the chickens had gotten even bigger. But the ghouls weren't scared. They got pumped up and told Hansel not to worry. They would handle this. But the chickens didn't attack. They looked absolutely terrified and immediately started to run. The entire flock stampeded away, screaming in fear of the ghouls. That's when a system window popped up. One of the ghouls had activated a skill called Hawkeye to get a better look at their fleeing meal. The system analyzed the chicken, now identified as a cock. It had a protein content of 132 kilograms with only 12% body fat. But the hunt was over. The chicken spun around and slammed its wing into the ghoul, launching it into the air. The blow was devastating, and the ghoul coughed up a spray of purple blood. Hansel watched as a new message appeared. The system explained that the chickens had just evolved because they felt excited. Then came a clear warning. If he wanted to stop the chickens from evolving, he had to avoid making them feel threatened. Meanwhile, one of the ghouls named Ghoulord was having a great day. He stretched and commented on the nice weather, thinking that guarding an empty house wasn't so bad after all. He and the others celebrated, overjoyed to finally be free, but his stomach started growling loudly. He admitted that while Hansel was a good guy, their tastes in food were completely different. That's why he decided to prepare something himself, announcing his own little cooking show. Today's menu was fried cock skin. The ingredients were simple: trimmed cock skin, flour, dried fruits, spices, salt, and oil. First, he sliced the cock skin into big chunky pieces. He explained that to prevent any bad smells, you had to add salt and spices and mix it all together. Next, he mixed more spices into the flour to create what he called a magical powder. After coating the skin, he dropped the pieces into hot oil. He pulled the golden pieces out of the pan. The fried cock skin was finally complete. A loud crash echoed through the forest. The man with purple hair watched the training from a distance, unfazed. One of the ghouls was on the ground, completely defeated. He couldn't understand why he lost, even after training his chest, just like Han Sol taught him. He wondered if his form was bad, but quickly decided that wasn't the problem. He was sweating, desperate for a real explanation for why he failed. That's when the purple-haired man walked over, asking if the ghoul really didn't know the answer. He explained that the answer was simple. There was a huge difference in the effort they had put in compared to the chickens. The ghouls had only trained for a short time, while the chickens had been building their strength their entire lives. The ghoul looked them down, completely crushed. The man was right. The trainer told the ghoul that achieving a chest like that wasn't easy. The chicken stood there, flexing its massive chest to prove his point. But then, he gave them a spark of hope. He told them that just because it was hard didn't mean there was no way for them to win. The ghoul looked up, asking if they could really win. The trainer just crossed his arms and told them to remember how far they'd already come, and it hit him. He remembered they had gotten to this point together. He remembered the endless marches, carrying heavy rocks, while the trainer counted out every single painful step. Even back then, the trainer had looked over with a smile and asked if it was hard, and the ghoul had screamed back with everything he had that it wasn't hard at all. The trainer was impressed with his spirit. He told him that was good, but the most important thing was to train regularly, without fail. Hansel told them that just because they'd gotten a little stronger, it didn't mean they'd escaped weakness. He explained that on the earth he came from, squatting 500 kilograms was just the bare minimum. The ghouls were completely blown away. He told them that to draw out real power, they had to train their roots first. They had to keep at it, no matter how tiring it was. The ghouls roared in agreement and immediately started running in formation. One of the ghouls stopped and knelt on the ground. He muttered to himself, finally understanding where real strength came from. He declared that it all came from the roots, his legs. Hansel grinned, pleased that the lesson had finally sunk in. He asked the ghoul what would happen if he combined the strength of his chest with the power of his legs. The ghoul got into a ready stance, his body glowing with a new energy. With a huge burst of power, he shot forward. The ghoul flew through the air like a missile, aiming straight for the chicken. Hansel grinned, proud of his student's progress. He told the ghoul that he'd endured enough, and now it was time to show his true effort and spirit. The ghoul and the chicken both let out a massive roar as they rushed towards each other, but the chicken was faster. With one powerful swing of its wing, it sent them all flying. The ghoul was completely stunned. He had no idea how the chicken could be that strong. It turned out the whole group was wiped out. They were all collapsing on the ground, completely exhausted. Hansel looked down at them, and it finally clicked. He asked them if their legs were just tired from running all the way there. Hansel yelled that they were too late to realize their mistake. Far away, the ghouls slammed into the ground, their attack a complete failure. The flock of chickens had stopped running. They started walking together, making strange noises. One of them paused and looked back, as if it was confused about something. Turns out, Hansen was standing right there waiting for them. Steam rose from his body as he stared the chicken down. The chicken's eyes suddenly started to glow. It looked absolutely furious. It let out a huge, angry scream. That's when the whole flock turned around. They weren't running anymore. They were ready to fight. Hansen stared back, completely surprised. This was not what he expected at all. Hansel thought of a specific exercise, the one-arm dumbbell press. The chickens, who were ready to fight just a second ago, were now screaming in absolute terror. One of them, a cock, just stared in disbelief. Its entire life flashed before its eyes, from hatching as a chick to growing up and joining the flock. It remembered its family. Then it saw Hansen watching, and then a giant hand came out of nowhere. One hit, and it was over. Back at the camp, Hansen held up a piece of the cooked chicken. He told the ghouls not to be too hard on themselves, because the most important thing was that they had grown stronger. He told them to get their protein in, because tomorrow they would have to try and catch one all on their own. Then he raised a piece of meat and started a new cheer for them all to yell together. Gains! They all raised their food and cheered together. Gains! But for Hansel, the celebration was just the start of the next workout. He ordered everyone holding a chicken leg to immediately looked over the ghouls. He asked them if they finally understood that they were nowhere near his level. He told them to remember everything he taught them and to hunt carefully. After all, you can't work out if you get hurt. One of the ghouls asked if he was coming with them on the hunt. Hansel grabbed a thick strap and explained that he would join them later. He had to finish his workout first. Turns out, his workout involved using a giant tree as a resistance machine. He told them that today's workout was more important than any battle. The ghouls wished him luck and immediately took off, leaving him to his training. As he pulled, his muscles tensed, but he realized it was a shame the tree was so light. He stared out at the mountains, wondering if he should have brought the former lord to use as a weight instead. Meanwhile, the ghouls were having a meeting. One of them confidently said that after all their training, they were finally strong enough to take on a cock. But another ghoul was worried. He reminded them that the creatures could evolve again, just like they did yesterday. The ghoul in the skull helmet shot back, asking if he was suggesting they just quit and go home. The worried ghoul clarified that wasn't what he meant. He pointed out that Hansol never actually told them what the condition for winning the battle was. He started doing the math, remembering that even with the stronger Kokas, Hansol had managed to catch 27 of them all by himself. That's when he came up with an idea. He proposed that while Hansol had his guard down, they should all spread out and catch 50 cocks in total. The other ghouls thought it was a great plan. The ghoul leading the discussion laid out the strategy. They would split into 3 groups, and if anything went wrong, they'd send a signal by flexing their chest muscles. The others were amazed by his genius. With the plan decided, one of the ghouls got down into a runner's stance, ready to go. He called it their joyous rebellion and yelled for everyone to move out. The whole group charged into the forest, determined to make Hansol proud. Meanwhile, another group of adventurers stumbled upon a massive skeleton. One of them recognized it as a cockatrice, shocked by its incredible size. The leader of the group examined a piece of bone. He noted that the head was missing, concluding it was killed by a single powerful magic spell. One of his companions started to panic. He realized that whoever killed the cockatrice was as strong as a great wizard, and he questioned if they were really up for this mission. The leader put a hand on his shoulder and told Blog not to worry. He promised he wouldn't let him get hurt and urged him to just focus on the mission. Suddenly, they all heard something approaching. They spun around, trying to figure out what it was. The leader told Blog to stay behind them. He warned that the mission was getting dangerous and that something was coming right for them. A giant chicken monster burst out of the trees. The leader just glanced at it, completely unimpressed. He figured a single cock was no problem at all, but it wasn't just one. It was a whole stampede of chickens being chased by Hansol's ghouls. In the middle of the chaos, one of the ghouls looked up and was shocked to see a human standing there. The leader of the adventurers yelled at his companion, Hendard, telling him to stay close to Blog. He warned that they'd never seen a monster like this before, but his companion was furious. He yelled that he was already right there and didn't need any help, telling them to get lost. The ghouls, however, were more worried about the humans. One of them warned the others to stop, saying humans were brutal and you never knew what they might do. His companion agreed, realizing that rushing in could be dangerous. The whole field fell into a tense standoff. That's when one of the ghouls started flexing its muscles. The adventurers just stared, completely confused, wondering if it was some kind of performance before an attack. But it wasn't a performance. The ghoul was getting ready to call for backup. He decided they needed to bring in the other teams to get an advantage. A system message appeared, explaining this was a special signal to gather allies, but it had a side effect. The signal didn't just call the ghouls, it also triggered the chickens. Instantly, the chickens' eyes began to glow. One of them let out a furious scream, but one of the chickens was different. It was huge, and it was glowing with a powerful energy. One of the adventurers recognized it immediately. He stammered that it was a kokas, a monster as strong as a wyvern, and it wasn't just one. The entire flock started charging forward, a stampede of angry chickens. The ghouls watched them coming and knew they were in trouble. They thought it was over, that they were completely doomed. But just as they were about to give up, backup arrived. The leaders of the other 2 teams flew in from above. They landed with huge smiles, asking if they were late. The ghoul on the ground grinned back, relieved to see them. One of the leaders rallied the troops, asking if they were ready. With their full team assembled, they all roared back, prepared to fight. That's when one of them started gathering energy, a blue aura swirling around him. He announced it was time to use the secret technique they learned from Hansol. The secret technique wasn't some magic spell. It was a memory of a lesson from Hansol. It started with one of the ghouls struggling to finish his set on the bench press. Just as he was about to fail, Hansol's hand caught the bar. He told him to watch his posture. He explained that it was okay to get help when you can't keep the right form anymore. But then he asked them a critical question. What should they do if they want to safely feel their own true strength? The answer was his secret bodybuilding technique, Goody Builder. Back in the present, facing the flock of angry chickens, they knew exactly what to do. One ghoul grabbed a chicken and held it like a barbell. The other got right behind him to act as a spotter. This was the accessory muscle bench press. Hansol's voice echoed in their minds, telling them to forget the consequences and use every bit of muscle they had. The chicken was completely crushed. The ghoul's eyes glowed with power. He screamed, putting all the strength of their combined chest muscles into one final push. The impact was massive, sending out a huge blast of energy. With a final, desperate yell, the 2 ghouls completed the press. It worked. The chicken was defeated. The ghoul cheered, thinking they had finally won. But when he looked up, his celebration stopped cold. One of his friends was running straight for the rest of the flock. He seemed to be saying that he couldn't do it, but he was grateful for the chance. He smiled, at peace with his decision. He was thanking them for everything. His friend could only scream, watching helplessly. Then, a strange message appeared. It was about the amount of time it takes for a person to realize they like someone. The system announced that it had been 486 seconds since they all met. It said that was just enough time for the three swordsmen to be touched by the BODYBUILDERS. And these guys are seriously strong. They tore through the flock of chickens with ease. But then, something massive slammed into the ground, stopping them cold. One of the swordsmen was knocked flat on his back, barely managing to block the attack. He looked up, completely stunned by the sheer force of the blow. Unfortunately for them, they were staring at a chicken the size of a building. This was a completely different level of threat. And it wasn't just the one giant chicken they had to worry about. The attack had also triggered the Kokas. The monster let out a furious scream, its eyes glowing with pure rage. The hooded man could only stare, completely stunned. He had no idea what he was looking at. It was enormous, bigger than anything they had ever seen. Down below, the swordsman and the others braced themselves, staring up at the monster. The creature let out a strange sound, and suddenly, the story of its origin came to mind. It all started with the first dragon. This dragon was obsessed with his reputation. He was terrified that future dragons would become stronger than him, so he did something extreme. He decided to scatter his power, and that's how the cockatrice, a species closely related to dragons, was created. He knew this thing wasn't a real dragon, but it was still absolutely massive. He charged forward anyway, screaming that this was his chance to finally make his master proud. At the same time, one of the swordsmen tried to draw its attention, yelling insults. Below, Hansel let out a furious roar, ready to join the fight. But the story jumps away from the chaos of the battle. It goes to Hansel, who was thinking about his own progress. He felt that even though beginners get stronger fast, his own muscle growth seemed slow compared to the BODYBUILDERS. Still, he was proud of them. He thought about how well they followed his instructions, even though they were complete beginners. It had already been 3 months since he started. He remembered how they were at the start, just a bunch of skinny weaklings. He had to teach them everything step by step. They wanted to give up, but they kept pushing through, and not a single one of them gave up, no matter how hard it got. Watching them grow stronger made him feel amazing. It was their bodies, but he felt just as proud. The story cuts away from the battle. Hansel was thinking about his own master and how much he missed him. That's when he remembered something strange. His master had also disappeared when he was about the same age. He wondered if there was a connection, but before he could finish the thought, one of the ghouls came running up, shouting his name in a panic. The ghoul gasped for air, explaining that there was a huge problem. The cocks had evolved, and now everyone was in serious danger. He warned Hansel that if they didn't do something, everyone could die. Hansel didn't need to hear anymore. He told the ghoul to just point him in the right direction. Terrified, the ghoul showed him the way. As he got ready, a system warning suddenly flashed. It detected an insane level of energy, something far beyond normal muscle power. The system asked if he wanted to cancel his muscle-enhancing skill. He was furious. He roared that no one was allowed to touch his kids. Without a second thought, he canceled the skill and prepared to jump. He shot into the air like a cannonball. The ground where he stood completely shattered from the force. Miles away, a massive explosion of dust and rock erupted. Fatso could only stare in shock. The ghoul looked up at a bright light in the sky. He knew Hansel had arrived. Meanwhile, the swordsmen were still fighting for their lives against the giant chicken. One of them yelled for his partner, Hendard, to distract the monster. He was going to aim for a weak spot. Hendard unleashed his secret technique, kicking up a huge cloud of sand to blind the monster. He screamed for his friend, Blog, to run while he had the chance. But Blog was furious, yelling that he should have attacked instead of just buying time, putting their other friend in danger. The distraction didn't work at all. The massive chicken swung its wing, sending Hendard flying through the air. Even after getting slammed, Hendard just gave a thumbs up. Blog couldn't believe it, telling him to stop messing around and get back to fighting. Liper saw the gesture and thought Blog was the one trying to encourage them. He was touched that his friend was still looking out for them in this mess. Feeling a new sense of hope, Liper told Blog they could still win this. But just then, a massive shadow fell over them as the giant chicken's foot came straight down. Blog looked up, terrified, but he agreed. They would give it one last shot. But a second later, Blog admitted he didn't think he could dodge it. From the ground, Hendard screamed back that it was too early to give up. They remembered another one of Hansol's secret techniques. The BODYBUILDER was all about supporting your friends when they needed it most. Putting it into action, they formed a massive pyramid of bodies. This was their final secret technique, the comprehensive auxiliary set. The ghoul, at the bottom, took the full force of the attack. He screamed for everyone to hold on, telling them to trust the friend who went to get Hansel. He was sure their master would arrive before they were completely crushed, but the pressure was just too much. Formation shattered. The giant chicken, Kokorik, slammed its foot down, sending the ghouls flying everywhere. One of the swordsmen rushed over to a fallen ghoul, asking if he was okay. But as the ghoul looked up, his face was filled with a new kind of fear. Unfortunately, bad things have a way of happening all at once. The giant chicken wasn't their only problem. Kokorik let out a furious roar, its eyes glowing with power. It was just getting started. Suddenly, a massive beam of energy sliced through the air. The ghouls on the ground were in shock. One of them pointed, screaming that someone had arrived just in time to save them. A huge figure appeared, and the ghouls cried out in relief, sure that Hansel had come. But Fatso was confused. wondering what the former lord was doing there. The other zombie builders just stared. This definitely wasn't their master. While they were trying to process this, another beam of light slammed into the ground far away. A huge explosion went off in the distance, far from the actual fight. When the dust settled, a huge crater had been formed. A figure was standing right in the center. It was Hansel. He looked around, annoyed, and stated that he'd gone the wrong way. The zombie builders were getting crushed. This new, powerful ghoul had appeared right in the middle of the chicken army, and he was already taking them down. He let out a slow breath, completely calm. He looked at the giant chickens and mocked them, asking if this was really the best they could do. The two swordsmen watched from a distance. One of them recognized the creature as a ghoul lord, impressed by his powerful attack, but his friend just told him to keep looking. One of the ghouls proudly announced that this wasn't just any monster. This was their boss, the ghoul lord. The chickens looked at each other, confused, calling out for their leader. Kokorek. The ghoul lord stared down the entire flock. He asked them if they seriously thought he'd show up without a plan. Hearing this, his ghoul followers went wild with excitement. They knew their lord had a plan, and they believed it was the only way they could possibly win. The ghoul lord grinned, then screamed that he had the chickens' attention. He yelled for Hansel to come out and wipe them out now, but there was no answer. The ghouls looked around frantically, wondering where their master was. This wasn't going according to plan at all. The silence was terrifying. Their big plan had a very serious problem. Turns out, the whole mess had started hours earlier, back at the ghoul village. Fatso was getting restless, wondering why the hunting team was taking so long to return. His stomach growled loudly. The village was out of food, and he started thinking about going to find them himself. He made up his mind. He told the guard that since the big chicken monster was dead, there shouldn't be any danger. He was completely wrong. There was still plenty of danger out there. Suddenly, the ghoul lord froze. He recognized the screams coming from the distance. They were his goody builders. His face twisted with rage. He screamed, demanding to know who would dare lay a hand on his and Hansel's people. He declared that no one was allowed to bully the Goody Builders, except for him and Hansel, of course. The thing is, the Ghoul Lord never joined in on the bodybuilding sessions. While everyone else worked out, he just stood back and watched. But even so, his position as their leader never weakened. It made you wonder, how did he manage to stay on top while everyone else was getting stronger? So, were the trained Goody Builders just weaker than him? The answer was no. They had clearly surpassed him in raw strength. So had the law of the jungle just stopped applying? Of course not. The strongest was still supposed to be the one in charge. Turns out, there was one simple reason he kept his position. During a training session, one of the humans carrying heavy weights suddenly looked back, confused. He mentioned that he thought the weight had just gotten lighter. The reason was simple. He had no choice but to keep using his skill to help with the weights during training. Without him even noticing, his heavy blunt skill had reached its maximum level, making him insanely strong. His hand began to glow with a powerful purple energy. He let out a furious roar and charged forward. He shot through the air like a missile, leaving a trail of energy behind him. But looking down at the chickens, he screamed that they were about to die. He unleashed his maxed out skill, sending a massive blast of energy straight down. The attack slammed right into the giant chicken, Kokorek. The explosion was huge. Back in the present, the ghouls were still in shock. One of them admitted he thought they were doomed, but then he realized something. Their leader had taken down that monster in a single hit. He started to wonder, could the ghoul lord actually be as strong as Hansel? The ghoul lord was feeling pretty good about himself. He figured not just anyone could take down a monster like that in one hit. He must have some kind of special talent, different from the other ghouls. Full of confidence, he challenged the rest of the chickens, yelling that he would take them all on at once. But the chicken he thought he'd beaten, Kokorek, wasn't down at all. A giant foot slammed down, and the ghoul lord looked up in pure shock. The other ghouls watched as their leader was sent flying into the distance. It was over. They were completely doomed. Seeing this, Blog gave a sad smile. He apologized to his friends, Hendard and Liper, for not always taking their jokes seriously, but they told him they weren't joking around. Blog just laughed, saying they were still trying to be funny, even in a situation like this. He figured he'd have to take them seriously in the afterlife. At least in this last moment, he wouldn't be alone. The zombie builders watched the humans. Inspired, they decided they would also fight to the very end, using every last muscle cell they had. The zombie builders faced their end with no regrets. They were thankful for everything their master had taught them. They remembered how hard the training had been. But through all that pain, they finally got a glimpse of what it felt like to be truly strong. Knowing this was the end, they had only one last request. They screamed that if there was a next life, they wanted him to be their teacher all over again. With that, the horde of chickens swarmed over them all. The forest fell completely silent. Turns out, Hansel wasn't even at the fight. Fatso had finally caught up to him, panting for breath. He desperately tried to tell his master that all their friends were in danger. Hansel listened as Fatso, barely able to speak, begged him to save the others. With his last bit of strength, the ghoul collapsed, pleading one last time before passing out. Hansel's body tensed. The system tried to activate his calmness skill, but it failed instantly. His emotions were just too strong. Again and again, the skill tried to kick in, but it was no use. His rage completely overrode it every time. In his mind, he could see them fighting for their lives. But then, in the middle of the chaos, something strange happened. One of the ghouls looked up, totally confused. The chickens just stopped. They turned around and started walking away, leaving the ghouls completely stunned. and wondering where they were going. Turns out, they were following him. Without saying a word, Hansel had started walking, and the entire horde was trailing right behind him. The system activated his calmness skill. Hansel tried to get the chickens to stop following him, telling them that was enough. But the chickens just looked at him, completely confused and scared. They had no idea what was going on. He tried to tell himself he was calmer than ever, but it was a lie. The system detected an emotion so strong, it completely overpowered his calmness skill. A second later, it announced the skill was being shut down for a full day. His anger was just too much. Far away from Hansel, the ghouls and the humans they'd saved were running for their lives. Suddenly, one of the ghouls felt a familiar vibration in his chest. He knew instantly it was Hansel. The human he was carrying just asked who that was. The ghoul tried to explain, saying Hansel was their master and had the most sensitive muscle tissue of anyone. The human was not impressed. Another ghoul chimed in, saying it was useless to explain. He'd just have to see for himself. Tired of the weird answers, the human demanded they just summarize it for him. One of the ghouls looked up, ready to give him the simple version. He pointed ahead to a man with an unbelievably muscular back. He explained that this was Hansel, their new ghoul lord. The human was now more lost than ever. Hansel stood completely still, facing the giant chickens that had followed him. With a furious cry, one of the chickens lunged forward, ready to strike. The chicken's beak came down hard, but Hansel caught it with one hand. He called it an one-arm dumbbell press. With a single motion, he tossed the huge creature into the sky. The other chickens just stared, not understanding what they were seeing. It slammed back into the ground, creating craters from the impact. Hansel didn't even flinch. Seeing their chance, two more chickens leaped into the air, diving straight for him. He just reached up and caught both of their beaks, stopping them dead in their tracks. He held them above his head like they were a barbell. He called this a military press. Then, he started to lower them slowly, counting each second of the negative rep. His muscles strained under the immense weight. He wasn't fighting them. He was using them for a workout. The rest of the horde could only watch in horror as their strongest warriors were turned into gym equipment. With a huge burst of power, he shoved both chickens straight up into the air. He called it a BB push press, treating the two giant monsters like they were just a barbell. He didn't give them a moment to recover, immediately moving on to the next attack. Someone was watching from the sidelines, completely stunned. Hansel shot forward like a cannonball, staying low to the ground. He announced his next move, a flying lunge. He soared through the air and slammed feet first into another chicken's head. The impact took the creature down instantly. He stood over it, while the other chickens watched, frozen in place. But instead of finishing them off, he started talking. He told them that his ancestors believed you could measure muscle growth by the vibrations in your chest. He flexed his chest and explained that this was exactly why he brought them here. He told them they had come to the right place. He looked up at the giant chickens and asked them a simple question. He could build his chest muscles, but could they do the same? He didn't wait for an answer. He just went straight into what he called his CrossFit mode. He shot forward and landed a solid punch right on one of the chickens. The creature went flying. From the other chicken's point of view, Hansel's back muscles bulged out, forming the shape of a massive kettlebell. His muscles swelled to an impossible size as he announced his next exercise, the kettlebell swing. He grabbed the dazed chicken and swung it straight up into the sky like it weighed nothing. It flew through the air like a cannonball, crashing into two of its friends and sending them tumbling. The one on the ground just stared, completely terrified. Without even pausing, he grabbed a huge log and started doing jumping squats. The chickens could only watch, totally confused by what was happening. He unleashed a flurry of kicks and punches, hitting the chickens from every direction. He grabbed two more chickens by their legs, ready for his next exercise, the cable tricep extension. He swung them down hard, smashing them into a third chicken on the ground. That one hit was enough to finish it. From a safe distance, a group of people watched the whole thing unfold. One of them couldn't believe his eyes, asking if that was really the ghoul lord they were told about. They stared at the chaos, wondering how a single person could be causing so much destruction. Meanwhile, one of the trainees was already feeling the strain. He knew he'd used too much energy just to get there, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep this up. He knew if he gave up now, it was over. He pushed with everything he had, thinking that at this rate, the training was going to kill him. The trainee's hands were shaking. He begged Hansel to just let him die, feeling too ashamed to face the former ghoul lord who had helped him. But Hansel wasn't listening. He decided to finish this with one big move. He lunged forward with everything he had. He called out his next move, bench press. He slammed his hands into the ground and pushed with all his might. This was his 1 rep max. As he pushed, the system activated his amazing muscle recovery skill. The system announced that 15% of his muscle had recovered, but it immediately sent a warning. His legs couldn't handle the power of his upper body. It urged him to loosen up his upper body before his legs gave out. The system was sure that muscle damage was coming, but Hansel ignored the warnings, standing firm in front of the entire horde of chickens. But he wasn't alone. Suddenly, everyone was behind him, lending him their strength for this final push. The trainee turned around, stunned to see all his friends there. They were all calling out to their master. The zombie builders were grinning from ear to ear. To them, this wasn't a desperate fight. It was just time for an extra set. The other trainees roared in agreement, ready to give it everything they had. With their combined energy, Hansel slammed his hands down. The entire ground erupted in a massive explosion. The blast was overwhelming. As the dust settled, the trainees had one last thing to say, a thank you for everything he'd taught them. Every single chicken was wiped out. And so were all the trainees, lying on the ground, completely spent. Standing over them, Hansel announced that the day's exercise was officially over. The trainee on the ground sadly said he was going to miss the Ghoul Lord. The other zombie builders agreed, talking about how he used to be violent before Hansel came and turned him into a good guy. He was so wiped out, he couldn't even stand on his own. He looked around, asking if anyone was going to help him up, but the zombie builders just turned and walked away, completely ignoring him. He yelled after them, calling them a bunch of ungrateful jerks. He finally sat up, sarcastically thanking Hansel for the hard work. Then he muttered under his breath that he was going to kill them all when they got back. That's when he noticed something. The other ghouls had stopped and were looking back with confused faces. Turns out, one of the ghouls had just woken up. He asked what was wrong, explaining that he'd taken a nap because he wasn't feeling well. The trainee and the other zombie builders looked at him with huge, terrifying grins. They all rushed him at once, ready to make up for his missed workout as he screamed for them to stay away. They tackled him in a massive dog pile. He yelled for them to get off, but it was too late. His special training had just begun. The trainee, now the new Ghoul Lord, smiled. He accepted his new role, promising to take care of everyone from now on. Meanwhile, in a place called Wardo Duchy, news of Hansel's actions was starting to cause a stir. Inside the castle, a lord listened to a report. He asked for confirmation, finding it hard to believe that one person had defeated all those monsters alone. His man confirmed it was the same person. The lord, Count Wardo, realized the Ghoul Lord wasn't the real problem. He knew the kid with him was the truly dangerous one. He worried that there was no telling when they might decide to turn on his people. The Count decided he had to think carefully about how to deal with him. Then he turned to the woman and asked where Blog was. The woman stammered, unable to give a straight answer. Turns out, Blog was in serious trouble, held captive by a dark figure. The grip on his shoulder was tight and merciless. Two men were holding on to Blog, but it wasn't what it looked like. Their friend Hendard didn't see it that way. He rushed forward, sword drawn, accusing them of trying to hurt the kid. But Hansel wasn't even paying attention to the sword. He was looking at Blog's form, and he was genuinely impressed, complimenting his perfect posture. That just made the two warriors even angrier. They lunged at Hansel, yelling at him to stop treating Blog like some kind of object. Hansel blocked their attacks without even trying. He looked straight past them to Blog and asked if he'd ever thought about getting stronger. The two attackers struggled against his grip, yelling that he was completely missing the point. He held them in place easily. He asked Blog again if the thought had ever crossed his mind, certain that it had. With a huge grin, Hansel made his offer. If Blog really wanted to be strong, he should come exercise with him. The warrior in the background just looked confused, wondering what exercise even was. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the situation was desperate. One of the men was on his knees, explaining that they had no choice but to let the monsters take Blog. The entire group begged their master to do something. They pleaded with him to save Blog from the ones who took him, but the master was hesitant. He argued that they knew nothing about this exercise. For all they knew, it could be dark magic. He felt for the guy who was caught, but he wasn't willing to take a risk on something so unknown. He tried to calm the young man down, telling him his own master wouldn't be so reckless. But the warrior wasn't listening. He interrupted, declaring that they were going to teach them a lesson. His energy flared as he drew his sword. He ordered two of his companions to get ready for battle. The master was furious. He yelled at them for being so emotional and questioned why they weren't listening to him. But the young warrior's mind was made up. He stated that they had crossed the line by touching his student. He pointed forward, his decision final. He called out to his friends, Hendard and Leiper. They were going to the alley mine to save Blog, and they were leaving now. Meanwhile, in the ghoul village, the situation was a little different. Hansel announced that they had a newcomer. To get things started, the first exercise would be squats. Blog looked completely lost, asking what a squat even was. Hansel just smiled and told him to come over so he could teach him. He explained that squats are the best exercise for building strong thigh muscles. But just a moment into it, Blog was already on his knees, completely out of breath. Hansel put a hand on his shoulder, asking if he needed to lie down. Blog just stayed there, trying to catch his breath. Hansel told him to stop and take a break. He explained that Blog's form was all wrong, and that he needed to focus the weight on his thighs to avoid getting hurt. Hansel then showed him how to position his feet, and Blog nervously tried to copy him. Hansel demonstrated the proper technique, telling him to move his hips as if he were about to sit down. He showed the full movement, explaining that pushing up with your hips and thighs is what makes a squat. He gave Blog a thumbs up, telling him he did great for his first time. He asked if he'd ever exercised before, and Blog admitted he'd only learned some swordsmanship. Hansel told Blog to try the squat again, but this time, he grabbed a heavy barbell made of stone and told him to raise his arms to hold it. The moment Blog touched it, he could feel how heavy it was. He wasn't sure he could even lift it off the ground, but with a huge effort, he managed to get it over his head. His whole body was shaking from the strain. Hansel yelled at him, telling him not to mess up his posture and to just squat. Blog screamed as he pushed through the movement, giving it everything he had. He did it. He completed the rep. As he stood there, the entire group of ghouls started clapping for him. Hansel watched, completely impressed. He couldn't believe Blog was keeping perfect form, even with that much weight. He started counting the reps. That's when he knew for sure. His first impression of the kid was right. Hansel looked proud. He explained that what Blog just did was called powerlifting. He turned to Blog and asked him if the reason he came along was to get stronger. Blog nervously agreed. Blog then shouted that he wanted to be strong, just like his friends. But Hansel told him something he wasn't expecting. He said that Blog could never be strong like his friends. Blog looked down, admitting that he already knew. He felt like no matter how hard he tried, he could never keep up with the genius. He started to thank Hansol for the training anyway, but Hansol cut him off, asking what he was even talking about. He put a hand on Blog's shoulder and explained. He said Blog would be strong in a different way, strong enough to protect the very friends he looked up to. Hansol told him that he had a rare talent, something he had never seen before. Blog's hands trembled as he took it all in. Blog was overwhelmed. This was the first time anyone had ever truly acknowledged him, but Hansol just laughed and told him not to cry, joking that he'd lose his muscle. Suddenly, a notification popped up. The system announced that his Hawkeye skill had just been upgraded to level. Time later, Blog walked up to Hansol, holding 3 little baby cocks. He asked him why he'd brought them back alive. He then turned to the ghouls and laid out his idea. He explained that if they hunted the cocks too recklessly, there wouldn't be any left. So, he proposed a new plan. They were going to raise the cocks themselves before they disappeared for good. One of the ghouls thought about it. He told Hansol that since cocks grow up so fast, raising them shouldn't be a problem. But then, he brought up a serious issue. There weren't many monsters in the mine that could beat a cock. If these babies evolved, none of the ghouls would stand a chance. Only Hansol could stop them. The ghoul looked right at Blog and asked if he thought he was strong enough to handle it. He waited, letting the question hang in the air. That's when Hansol stepped in. With a cold look, he repeated the ghoul's own question back at him. The ghoul started sweating. He quickly stammered that it wasn't like that, and that they could probably handle it after all. Hansol laughed, telling the ghoul he was almost disappointed in him for underestimating his own kind. The ghoul quickly apologized, looking embarrassed. With that settled, they all headed to the training ground. Hansol's voice echoed as he guided them, telling everyone to use their main leg muscles to support the weight. Blog was completely into it, a huge grin on his face as he pushed through the reps. But somewhere else, a different kind of training was happening. A man gripped a barbell, while his partner, a bald man with strange powers, activated a skill called Heavy Blunt, causing the weights to glow. The bald man asked if he was ready. The lifter roared back that he was, and told him to bring it on. With a determined look, the supporter prepared to increase the weight. He activated his skill again, but this time it was Heavy Blunt X2. The purple energy around the barbell flared up intensely. The lifter screamed, his body shaking under the crushing weight. His partner yelled words of encouragement, pushing him to finish the rep. Blog was counting out the reps, a huge smile on his face. He and the ghouls were all squatting together, pushing themselves hard. Every single one of them was giving it their all, pushing past their limits. But just as they were in the middle of their workout, something interrupted them. A bright flash of light appeared right in the middle of the training ground. Before anyone could react, a huge blast of energy sent the ghoul chief flying. The ghouls were thrown to the ground, completely stunned by the sudden attack. The chief looked up, trying to figure out what just hit them. That's when they saw her. A woman stood over them with a wild look in her eyes. She demanded to know if they were the monsters who kidnapped her student. The ghoul chief was terrified. He tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, telling her he didn't even know who she was. He also added that he wasn't the chief anymore. She told him he should have just answered with a yes or no. Then she swung her sword right at the ghoul chief. The strike hit the ground with incredible force, kicking up a huge cloud of dust and rock. But when the dust settled, she looked confused. Her blade hadn't hit its target. Turns out, Hansol had stepped in and blocked her sword with his bare arm. He looked annoyed and asked what her problem was, explaining they were just working out. The woman was stunned that he blocked her blade with his body. Hansol, on the other hand, was more worried about his muscles getting hurt. He saw the cut on his arm and realized this woman was seriously dangerous. She turned and shouted to 2 men behind her, asking if Hansol was the guy they were looking for. The men yelled back, confirming it was him. Then they shouted for Blog, telling him their master was here to save him. The woman faced Hansol with a smug look. She apologized for interrupting his training, but then accused him of trying to steal her student. Hansol turned to Blog, confused. He asked why he didn't just say he already had a trainer, since that would have avoided this whole mess. Blog looked down, struggling to find the right words. He didn't know what to say. Hansol just grinned. He asked him straight up if he thought exercise was better than swordplay. He told him to just be honest and stop hesitating. The pressure was clearly getting to Blog. That's when Blog made his choice. He bowed deeply to his old master and apologized, admitting he liked exercising more than swordplay. He told her he was sorry she came all this way, but he had a new master now. The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable. She said if that was his choice, then there was nothing she could do. The woman's smile turned cold. She wasn't taking no for an answer. She said if he wouldn't come willingly, she'd just have to take him by force. And just like that, she lunged forward, her sword glowing as she swung it right at Hansol. But Hansol didn't even try to block it. He just flexed his chest muscles as hard as he could. The sword hit him and just bounced right off. She was completely stunned. Her powerful strike had done nothing more than leave a tiny scratch. She couldn't believe the attack had failed so badly. Blog looked at Hansol with total awe. Seeing this, the woman changed her plan. She proposed a competition. She and Hansol would fight, and the winner would earn the right to train him. She looked at Hansol with a smirk, saying that the winner's martial arts would be proven superior, but Hansol just calmly corrected her. He explained that exercising isn't a martial art. It's simply training and building your own body. She challenged him, bringing up the fact that he'd killed a cockatrice with his exercise. Hansol didn't deny it. He just said he only did it to get protein and survive. She smirked, asking him if exercise was really useless in combat. Hansol's face darkened. He was clearly angry. The woman just laughed, mocking him for getting his pride hurt. She asked what the point point of building muscle was if it couldn't be used in a fight. Then, with a wide grin, she called his entire way of life trash. That was it. A huge wave of energy exploded from Hansel. His muscles swelled to an insane size. He looked at her and said he was about to show her exactly what exercise was for. A notification popped up. The system announced that his cock's leg mode had been activated. As everyone watched, one of the ghouls wondered aloud who was stronger, Hansel or the woman. Another ghoul scoffed, pointing out the huge size difference, but Blog quickly spoke up, telling them not to judge by appearances. He revealed that his former master was one of the 10 strongest people on the continent. Hansel's eyes narrowed. A system window appeared, announcing that his Hawkeye skill was activated. It identified the woman as a human sword master. The skill gave him a full breakdown of her body composition. Looking at the numbers, he was confused. He couldn't understand how someone with her muscle mass could have possibly left a scratch on him with a sword. The woman looked down at Hansel, calling him alien. She asked him just what kind of martial art he was teaching, preparing to explain what real swordsmanship was. A quick vision showed a master swordsman unleashing a powerful strike. She explained that her martial art was a technique so strong it could cut enemies into pieces using chi. With a smirk, she told him she would teach him a few things as his elder. Then she lunged forward, unleashing a rapid series of strikes. She continued to call him an alien, asking if he knew why. She said that even though he looked human, something was clearly different about him. Hansel just waved his hand, yelling that he didn't care. He didn't even touch her, but the force of his swing sent her flying backward. She landed on her feet and finished her thought, explaining that it was because the mana around his body was red. She claimed that red mana was a sign of demonic blood. The redder it was, the closer you were to being a demon. She pointed her sword at him, yelling that no human technique could change the shape of the body like he did. As she spoke, Hansel stomped the ground, cracking it with a move called power leg press. Hansel yelled back at her, completely baffled. He told her it was just common sense. The more effort you put into your body, the more it changes. But she wasn't convinced. She just insisted that this kind of change was only possible for aliens like him. To prove her point, she powered up, her body glowing with a golden aura. She declared that this was how humans were supposed to use chi mana, and the swordswoman activated her own combat skill, a technique called a mountain of swords and a forest of sabers. Suddenly, hundreds of glowing swords filled the air, and Sol just looked up, completely confused by the magic. She explained that this was the human way of fighting, using skills to make up for what their bodies lacked. The swords rained down, and he screamed as they all hit him at once. She stood over his fallen body, calling his martial art useless. She said for a human, it was nothing but trash. She kept mocking him, questioning how his weak style could ever hope to beat a true swordsman who only thinks about winning. But Hansel, lying on the ground, just looked up at her. He asked a strange question. Were her opponents stagnated? She had no idea what he meant. As he struggled to get up, he asked how much stronger those opponents get the next day. The swordswoman just smiled, thinking it was a ridiculous question. She scoffed at his question, saying her opponents never survive long enough to get stronger. She activated her skill again, ready to end it. But Hansel wasn't down. He shot back up, his body glowing with power as he hit a perfect front double biceps pose. He started to scream, his voice echoing with raw power. He declared that people who work out will always come back the next day and beat the person who is stronger than them before. It was the core belief of a bodybuilder, constant, daily improvement. He let out a final roar, screaming about doing 10 reps. His body just kept swelling, getting bigger and bigger with each imaginary rep. He towered over the swordswoman, a giant of pure muscle. He told her it was his turn to teach her a lesson. But just as the fight was about to start, someone called out to Blog, asking to speak with him. Blog was shocked to see his old friends, Leiper and Henderd. They both looked incredibly nervous. Leiper started to apologize. He explained that they thought Blog would hate them, so they went to their master for help. Blog was completely confused. He had no idea why they would think he hated them. Henderd explained their mistake. They thought Blog had left because they were pressuring him too much. Blog quickly corrected them. He said he was only staying to learn from Hansol and planned to return home when he was done. Hearing this, his friends' faces lit up with relief. The whole thing had just been a big misunderstanding. With that settled, they got excited. They asked Blog what kind of martial art he was learning from his new master. Blog admitted he didn't know much yet. He turned to one of the ghouls, asking the former Lord Nim to help him with a demonstration. Blog turned to his friends and asked them a question. He wanted to know if they remembered what their old master said was the most important part of learning swordsmanship. Leiper shot his hand up and yelled out the answer, the lower body. Blog confirmed he was exactly right. He explained that the exercise they were about to do, called squats, trains the entire lower body, especially the quadriceps. Blog mentioned that Hansol told them to learn the posture first to be safe, but he grinned and said it would be more fun to use weights right away. The ghoul looked worried. He asked if it wasn't too dangerous to use weights from the very beginning. Blog just smiled and said it was okay, because he would assist them. Turns out, his idea of assisting was having a giant hand press down on their head while he counted reps. The woman struggled to stand, using her sword to keep her balance as the massive hand forced her down again and again. She screamed at him, asking why he was pulling his strength back. But then, Hansol's massive form loomed over her. He wasn't pulling back. He was gathering strength, explaining that in technical terms, it's called contraction and elongation. The woman watched, confused. She could hear her former students moaning in pain as a massive leg just kept going up and down, over and over. Turns out, Blog was using his giant energy hands to force his friends through the workout. The swordswoman was completely horrified, demanding to know what kind of training this was. Hansol stepped in, explaining that it was a forced repetitive squat, a key part of their training. He did admit, though, that they might get hurt, but instead of being angry, her expression completely changed. She suddenly got excited and declared that she wanted to add his exercises to her own training program. Hansol looked down at her, his presence seeming to grow larger and larger. He simply asked if she was serious. Blog asked her what she saw that made her change her mind. She had a strange look on her face and explained she saw the hot and sticky passion of sweaty men working out together. And just like that, they were united, not by swords or martial arts, but by the power of a good workout. As they rode, Blog suddenly grabbed the swordswoman's arm, his eyes wide with surprise. He couldn't believe how strong her arm muscles were and asked what kind of training she did. The swordswoman just laughed, asking if he was really curious. Blog was practically vibrating with excitement. He was desperate to learn her secrets. The swordswoman explained it was nothing special. Her muscles were just from swinging a sword all day for her job. But then she admitted she had a question of her own. She asked if it was really okay for him to teach her his advanced training methods without any kind of payment. Hansol just smiled. He told her it was more than okay. In his mind, the more people who worked out, the better it was for everyone. She looked back, still a little confused, and asked him to explain why he felt that way. Hansol laid out his grand vision. If everyone worked out, gyms would pop up everywhere. People could study all kinds of different training methods, and everyone would get stronger together. He explained his ultimate goal, to spread the culture of health across the entire world. The swordswoman just smiled. She told him he was a lot funnier than she'd expected. She was completely on board, promising to do him a favor anytime he needed one. Blog cheered, calling Hansol a great guy. That night, they made camp. Everyone gathered around the fire, resting after a long day. As Hansol was eating, one of the men with them walked over. He looked like he had something important to say. He started to explain that his home country was a very difficult place, telling Hansol that they were extremely discriminatory. The man went on, saying it wasn't just about outsiders. His people were against magic, different beliefs, and anything that wasn't exactly like them. He explained that the system favored their own kind, especially powerful figures called prosecutors. He was genuinely worried that Hansol and the ghouls would be targeted and get hurt. Hansol listened to the man's warning and agreed. This was a serious problem. The man suggested they should probably wait a bit and think things over before heading there. But then their conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at something happening over by the horses. Hansol walked over to the horse feed and tried a little bit. A huge grin spread across his face. He recognized the texture immediately. It was the main ingredient for oatmeal. He had found oats. For a bodybuilder, this was like finding gold. He couldn't believe it. He yelled that it was a serious problem, that only horses were eating such perfect, clean carbohydrates. The other men just watched, confused. One of them muttered about the savage boy eating animal feed, saying it probably tasted awful. As the two men ate, one of them commented that monsters must have terrible eating habits. Suddenly, Blog loomed over them, pointing a finger. He told them that a monster would be sad to hear that. He then held out a bowl of food, saying he'd tried their combat rations and seemed to think they were pretty gross. The two men looked down at the dish in surprise. The man with the mustache couldn't believe it was their ration, admitting that it actually smelled really good. They both took a hesitant bite. Instantly, their eyes shot wide open. The flavor was nothing like they expected. Tears of joy streamed down the man's face. He described the taste as sweet and mild, but with a spicy kick. The red-haired man was just as emotional. He said the subtle spices were a miracle that brought back an appetite he thought he'd lost for good. The ghoul promised to share the recipe, but only if they stopped bad-mouthing monsters. The two soldiers immediately agreed. Later that night, Hansol found the woman named Rihanna sitting by the fire. He walked up and asked her about the march planned for the next morning. He reminded her that she'd promised to do him a favor. Rihanna looked at him and confirmed that she remembered. Hansol held out his hand, showing her a pile of grain. He said this was what he wanted. Rihanna looked at it suspiciously, asking if it was just cattle feed for the creatures he was raising. He just smiled brightly and told her that no, they were going to eat it themselves. She was completely confused. She said it didn't really matter to her, but she felt bad seeing them eat food meant for animals. Another woman from Rihanna's group chimed in, agreeing with her. She told Hansol that they shouldn't be eating something they weren't used to. Hansol's friendly expression completely vanished. He glared at her, his voice low, as he demanded to know what she had just said. Rihanna's companion completely misunderstood. She told Hansol they didn't say anything wrong, and if he wanted a bigger reward, all he had to do was ask. She offered to help them upgrade their camp from simple tents to wooden houses, or even get them proper warrior clothes instead of the rags they were wearing. One of the ghouls chimed in, holding up a piece of chicken. He added that for food, all they really needed was chicken breast, since it was Hansol's favorite protein. That's when Hansol just exploded. He yelled that they were all completely wrong. This wasn't about disrespect. He launched into a lecture, explaining that eating only protein is terrible for your body, especially your liver. He went on, explaining that if you eat the right amount of carbs, your body produces something called glycogen, and that's what actually gives you the power to use your muscles. He pointed to the grain he'd shown them earlier. It was oats, a complex carbohydrate that digests slowly and gives you energy for a long time. Back on his world, he said, it was called the king of grains for a reason. He looked at them with total passion, yelling about how there could be no better reward than something that fuels your body perfectly. For him, oats were the ultimate prize. After Hansel's big speech, everyone just stood there in silence. Rihanna looked completely lost, while the ghouls just kept flexing, as if trying to understand. But the ghouls totally got it. They started cheering for muscle growth, completely fired up about this new superfood. Blog thought he figured it out. He told everyone this must be Hansel's secret weapon to win over Ms. Rihanna. That lit a fire under the other warriors. They declared they couldn't stand losing to monsters and decided they were going to eat the oats too. They saw that Blog was already eating it, so the rest of them decided to try it as well. The ghouls didn't need any convincing. They just dove right in, stuffing their faces. Pretty soon, the entire camp was gathered around the barrel, shoveling down the oats. Even the horse was getting in on the action. And then, all at once, everyone spat it out. Turns out, the king of grains tasted absolutely terrible. One of the warriors gagged and told Blog to spit the oats out, warning him that they were terrible. But Blog didn't spit it out. He just kept chewing thoughtfully. Then he turned around with a huge smile, saying he thought it was actually pretty tasty. Hansel was amazed. He realized Blog even had a talent for eating, which meant he'd get stronger in no time. Rihanna looked over at Hansel. She told him that while she didn't understand his excitement, she could see he was satisfied. With that, she made a promise. She would produce all the oats he needed to meet his conditions. Hansel was overjoyed. He grabbed her hands and shouted that she was the best, celebrating their new deal, while the others were still sick on the ground. With their business settled, the group headed back to the city. As they approached the main gate, the guards on the wall announced General Rihanna's return. The massive city gates slowly creaked open, and a rider came out to meet them. They walked past the guards in silence. The mood felt heavy. One of the ghouls leaned in close to Hansel. He quietly asked if Hansel remembered what he'd told him about this place. He described it as the country of weirdos, but also the best on the entire continent. All around them, people were already starting to whisper and stare. The ghoul finished his thought. This was a country that discriminated against people who were different. As they walked deeper into the city, they could feel everyone's eyes on them. The ghouls looked visibly uncomfortable as they walked through the streets. All the townspeople were whispering and pointing at them. Hansel, completely missing the point, nudged one of them with his foot. He told him to fix his pose. The ghoul just looked back, confused. He explained with a huge grin that everyone was just staring because they had such great bodies. The ghouls actually wondered if he was right. Blog, on the other hand, knew that was definitely not it. But the ghouls didn't care about Blog's doubt. They took a deep breath and immediately started flexing for the crowd. The townspeople just stared back, completely shocked by the sight of muscular monsters posing in the middle of the street. General Rion watched the whole ridiculous parade from her horse. She sighed, wondering to herself why she even liked these monsters. Finally, they arrived at Weirdo Castle. A man on a throne looked down at them and asked Hansel if he was really going to teach the general how to work out. The man on the throne looked down at them with a smug expression. He asked if the oats were payment for livestock. Hansel just smiled and corrected him, explaining that they were oats for a meal. The Lord was not impressed by his cheerful attitude. He made it very clear that he was only doing this as a favor for General Rion. He told them that if it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have let them take a single step inside the castle. General Rion bowed and thanked him for his kindness. Hansel, meanwhile, just seemed excited to be there. The Lord ordered him to teach the soldiers and leave without causing any trouble. But Hansel just offered to be his personal trainer too. To everyone's surprise, the Lord turned his head and agreed to the deal. But as they were led away, he glared after them. He was furious at Hansel's disrespect. The Lord sat on his throne, still fuming. He couldn't just let that disrespect slide. He'd been worried about General Rion's popularity for a while. He needed a way to turn the people against her. And just like that, he realized Hansel was the perfect opportunity. A wicked smile spread across his face. He shot up from his throne and called for a servant, ordering them to bring in the Tutula mercenaries. He was sure this would be the end of her. The very guests she brought into the castle would be her downfall. Meanwhile, at the soldier training ground, the men were going through their daily drills. An officer suddenly called for everyone's attention, announcing a special training session. He introduced the man beside him. You Hansel, the ghoul lord, brought here by General Rion herself. The soldiers started whispering immediately. They couldn't believe they were supposed to take orders from a monster. The officer shouted over them, warning that even if they didn't like it, disobeying the new instructor was a violation of military law. Hansel greeted the soldiers with a huge smile. He announced that he was their new special instructor, here to teach them how to work out. But then, his tone changed completely. He told them he didn't like the way they were looking at him, and ordered everyone to get down on the ground. The soldiers just stared, completely confused by the sudden command. He dropped to the ground to show them what he meant, yelling for them to stretch out their stomachs. The ghouls immediately followed his lead, dropping into position without question. But when Hansel saw the soldiers still standing there, he screamed, demanding to know why they weren't getting down. A few of the soldiers finally started to move, awkwardly getting down on the ground. But one of the older soldiers just scoffed, thinking the whole thing was a joke. He started shouting at the others, asking if they were really going to follow a monster's orders. The officer immediately yelled back, warning the cadet that calling instructor Hansel a monster was an insult to the general. The soldier just smirked and asked the officer if he really thought so. He then questioned if following a monster's order was the same as following the general's. Down on the ground, Hansel's expression hardened. He was getting tired of this. The soldier told everyone to get up. He yelled at them not to follow a monster's orders and to have some pride as humans. The officer put a hand on Hansel's shoulder. He reminded the soldier that military orders are absolute and asked what the problem was. The soldier said there were lots of problems. First, he explained, humans don't take orders from monsters. His second point was about the training itself. He said there was no reason for them to do anything other than practice with their swords. And for his last point, he shouted that they had no interest in learning some savage monster's training. But before Hansel could react, one of the ghouls stepped in front of him. He told Hansel he could deal with this. The ghoul turned to the soldiers and pointed at Block. He suggested that if a human taught them instead, they wouldn't have a problem taking orders. As for their second problem, he said he wasn't sure which training was better since they'd never been compared. He proposed they find out within one-on-one competition. The ghoul smirked. He said as for their final complaint about whether the training was savage or not, they should just compete to find out. He screamed the challenge right at the human soldiers. The other ghouls were completely fired up. They roared back in agreement, ready for the challenge. Hansel just watched them, a grin spreading across his face. He seemed to be enjoying this. The lead soldier stepped forward and accepted the offer. He then turned to his superior, asking if a competition like this was even allowed. With that settled, he declared he would fight for the humans. Then he asked who would be representing the monsters. In response, one of the muscle-bound ghouls stepped forward, ready to fight. But it wasn't the soldier who answered. A different man stepped out from the crowd with a nasty grin. He laughed at the ghouls, telling them it was a shame he wasn't just some regular cadet. He boasted that he was one of the notorious Tutula mercenaries, hired directly by the Lord Count. He was ready to show the ghoul what real fear felt like. He lunged forward, screaming for the monster to die, but the ghoul didn't even flinch. He just treated the man's head like a weight and performed an one-arm press. The punch landed, and the mercenary's head snapped back. It was over in an instant. The mercenary was out cold on the ground. Someone checked on him, relieved to see he was still breathing. The muscular man walked over and told the ghoul not to be so harsh, just to show off his strength. The ghoul immediately apologized, but the man just waved it off, saying the apology wasn't sincere anyway. The ghoul was confused, wondering what he was supposed to do. With the fight over, he turned to the human soldiers. He told them that since they lost, they now had to obey him. One of the soldiers reluctantly agreed, but one of the soldiers wasn't ready to give up. He activated a combat skill, his eyes glowing with power. He screamed that he would never take orders from monsters and lunged forward to attack. The ghoul was caught completely off guard, but the ghoul reacted instantly. He activated his own skill, Heavy Blunt, multiplying its power to 10. The ghoul's powerful attack was about to connect, but at that exact moment, someone else stepped in, their eyes glowing red. He didn't throw a punch or cast a spell. He just reached out and gently tapped the soldier on the chest, stopping him completely. The soldier went flying back from just that one little tap. He was completely overpowered. He slammed into the wall so hard it cracked. The fight was over. Sometime later, a woman in a cape arrived at the training grounds. She spotted Hansel and greeted him with a huge, cheerful smile. But the human soldiers weren't happy. They were whispering to each other, convinced that magic had been used in the fight. They didn't trust the monsters at all. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed nearby. The woman turned to Hansel, demanding to know what was happening. Two soldiers rushed up to her, looking very worked up. The soldier addressed her as General and quickly explained. He said a battle broke out because some men refused to follow her orders. He reported that the soldiers lost, and now they were claiming the monsters must have cheated with magic. The general turned to Hansel and asked him directly if he'd used magic in the fight. He immediately denied it, insisting they'd done nothing of the sort. She then faced the angry soldier and told him what Hansel had said. The soldier was stunned. He couldn't believe she would take a monster's word over his. Just then, another man rode up on a white horse. He announced that he'd heard something unbelievable and demanded to know what was going on. He looked down at the general, questioning whose side she was really on, the humans or the monsters. The general stated firmly that of course she was on her people's side, but he wasn't convinced. He yelled back at her, asking why she was listening to monsters then. Hansel, completely missing the mood, just grinned. He asked the man if he came to work out and told him to get off the horse. One of the ghouls quickly grabbed him, trying to explain that this was not the time for jokes. The man on the horse, feudal Lord Wordo, told the general that while he cared for her, her new friends were causing trouble for his people. He explained that one of the students had been hurt in the fight, and that, he said, was a very serious problem. He yelled that as the feudal lord, he couldn't just let it slide. So, as feudal Lord Wordo, he made his decision. He pointed at General Ryan and exiled her for 2 years. The general's eyes went dark with rage. The Lord immediately looked terrified, realizing he might have gone too far. The human soldiers immediately started shouting. They begged him to take back the order and just let them kill the monsters instead. But Werdo wasn't listening. He was still thinking about the look in the general's eyes, admitting to himself he'd almost wet his pants. With the chaos still settling, General Ryan turned to Hansel. She apologized for not being able to take care of him properly after bringing him into this mess. But Hansel just smiled and told her not to worry about it. He knew that things don't always go according to plan. The general then asked the Lord to at least let the monster's friends stay, as they had promised. The Lord agreed, and with that, everything was settled. That's when the general exploded, screaming for everyone to be quiet. She laid into the soldiers, furious that they would dare talk back to the Lord's order. When one of them tried to argue, she immediately shut him down. She called them brats, saying she now realized their problem wasn't just prejudice, but a total lack of respect. But then she said maybe this was a chance for things to change. She bowed her head, accepting her fate. She said it was time for her to step aside so that new people could grow. She thanked the Lord, saying she'd use the 2 years of exile to rest before coming back. As she thought about the future, the soldiers couldn't believe it. They whispered amongst themselves, wondering if their general was actually going to leave. Suddenly, General Ryan let out a wild laugh. She said things would be fun when she came back. The ghoul just stared, completely confused by her behavior. Later that night, things were quiet. On a castle wall, a man was counting his earnings. He thought to himself that if he just kept this up a little longer, he'd have enough money to quit doing dirty work for good. He remembered someone named Belle loved flowers and wondered if he should open a shop for her. The thought made him blush. He opened a locket, looking at a picture of his family. He promised his daughter that he would be home soon, but that memory was from a long time ago. It was from before everything burned. His entire village had been set on fire, and people ran for their lives. He screamed as his world burned around him. The entire village was in chaos, engulfed in flames, and watching it all from above was a man with blue hair. He let out a quiet, chilling laugh. He turned to his captive, a woman named Elise, and said it had been a while. He laughed, saying their hometown was giving them such a beautiful welcome. Behind him, a massive creature held Elise tightly. He held out his hand, mockingly asking his princess for a dance. Elise just stared back at him, saying nothing. He took her hand anyway. He started humming a tune, forcing her into a slow dance right on the edge of the cliff. Below them, the entire village burned to the ground. A man named Blog and his companion said goodbye to their master and the others, getting ready to head out. As they walked, she asked Blog why he was with her. He explained that he didn't have any training that day and heard they were going to gather something. He told her he'd asked for permission to come along, and whoever was in charge had said it was fine. She suggested they visit a certain place, but Blog immediately got nervous. He was worried they'd get in trouble if the feudal lord found out. She just laughed off his concerns, completely sure of herself. With a big smile, Blog agreed, and she told him she would lead the way. As they walked, she complimented him, saying his voice sounded much stronger now. He just laughed, happy to hear it. She teased him, saying if he got a little braver, she'd even marry him. He shot back, asking if she wasn't like 60 years old already. That was the wrong thing to say. She completely lost it, yelling at him for daring to talk about her age, and started chasing him down. The ghouls were busy with their strange training. One of them practiced a powerful strike on a slime. Another one struck a pose, absorbing a slime right into its body. As two of them carried slimes, one asked about his friend's recent arm injury. The other just brushed it off, saying he was fine and couldn't wait for Hansel to teach them a new exercise. Just then, Blog and General Ryan appeared on the path. The general called out, asking what the ghouls were doing with all those slimes. The ghouls immediately recognized them. When they asked why he was back so soon, Blog just gave a vague smile and said things just worked out that way. But the general wasn't letting it go. She smiled and politely insisted they answer her question. One of the ghouls finally explained. He said their master, Hansel, had told them they needed the slimes. That just made the general more confused. She asked what they could possibly be for, since slimes were basically useless, not even good for medicine. The ghouls struggled to find the right words, finally just telling them it would be better if they came and saw for themselves. Blog chimed in, explaining that the builders just weren't very good at explaining things. The general just looked at the ghouls, then reluctantly agreed to follow. As they walked up the path, Blog suddenly spotted Hansel in the distance and waved excitedly. Hansel greeted them with a huge smile, asking if Ryan was there too. He then casually told one of the ghouls that some of the slimes were about to get away. The scene was completely bizarre. Hansel was coaching the ghouls, telling them to use their chest muscles to corner a pile of slimes. Seeing this, the general finally asked what in the world he was doing. Hansel began to explain. He said that after watching the students at the training ground, he realized their bodybuilding and powerlifting workouts just weren't efficient enough. He figured what they really needed was athletic training, but since they didn't have any equipment for that, he decided he was just going to make it himself. Blog was confused. He asked if making equipment with slimes was like creating a dummy for sword practice. Hansel shook his head, saying it was nothing like that. He turned to the ghouls and told them to bring him a slime. With a large purple slime in front of him, Hansel began his lesson. Without any warning, he slammed his hand right into the creature's body. He pulled out a small ball, explaining it was the slime's core. He said it would regenerate in a few days, so he just set it aside. With the core gone, he said the next step was to make a hole right through the middle of the slime. Turns out, slimes are perfect for this because their bodies are incredibly stretchy. He then put his hands inside the hole and stretched it out. Just like that, he had made a perfect resistance band. He held it up proudly. The slime had been transformed into a perfect training band. The blue-haired man, Blog, turned to General Ryan. He told her there were tons of exercises they could do with this new equipment. He explained that they could even color code the bands based on the slime's strength. Then he turned to Hansel, thanking him, but also apologizing. Hansel had no idea what he was sorry for. That's when General Ryan stepped in. She admitted that for a while, she had been suspecting him. She thought his obsession with training was just an act, a way to trick humans and get close to them. But she finally understood. He was being completely 100% honest with them. Ryan then admitted that she felt like a failed educator. She couldn't stop her own nation from becoming so full of hate. She said that's why she just tolerates all the nonsense from the feudal lord. She felt like she had no other choice. But Ryan told Blog that he was different from her. She was sure he could bring real change to the country. The word changes made Blog pause and think. Suddenly, he ripped off his shirt and started flexing, proudly announcing that physical change was his specialty. Ryan immediately told him that's not what she meant at all. He then presented his squad of muscular ghouls, suggesting a group workout. Ryan just shook her head, saying that wasn't it either. That's when Ryan smiled. She said she'd show him the change she was talking about. She pointed past them to a line of human soldiers. That was the change she wanted. The soldiers didn't look happy. They whispered to each other, deciding to hear what the monster instructor had to say first. One of them warned that they weren't there because they lost and told him not to try anything weird. Then, in front of everyone, General Ryan turned to Hansel. She asked if she could leave her kids in his hands. Hansel was thrilled. He flexed, officially welcoming the new members to his team. Meanwhile, in another part of the country, a group of knights rode hard through the darkness. Turns out, big changes were happening everywhere. The commander struggled to calm his horse as it panicked. They had arrived at a village that was being burned to the ground. The commander ordered everyone to get off their horses. He explained that their enemy was a monster called a zombie. He warned his men that if they got bitten, they'd become one, too. He told them to protect their horses just as carefully as they protected themselves. The soldiers stood ready. With the warning given, the commander raised his sword high. Then he gave the order to charge, and his soldiers rushed into the fight. The soldiers plunged into the burning village, and the fight for survival began. From above, you could see the whole town was engulfed in flames, with tiny figures clashing in the street. But somewhere else, a man with blue hair was watching. He looked panicked, desperately trying to get someone named Betterman to stop. He tried to reason with them, explaining that if they interfered, a woman named Ryan might get involved too. But a creature that looked like a dog just kept barking, completely ignoring him. He finally snapped and screamed at the stupid dog to be quiet. The creature whimpered for a moment, then immediately started panting happily again. With a strange smile, he started petting the creature. He calmly told Betterman to just wait a little longer. Then, with a huge, twisted grin, he revealed the truth. The zombies attacking the village weren't real. They were just props. Meanwhile, at the Wordo Duchy training grounds, an instructor was lecturing a huge group of soldiers. He explained that every person has a limit to how much stamina they can use in one day. He flexed his arm to make a point. He told them that because their energy was limited, they had to focus on training only the specific muscles they actually needed for a fight. The instructor got everyone's attention, telling them to stretch and get ready for the bench press, just like Hansel wanted. The soldiers yelled back, ready to start, but a man with blue hair suddenly stepped in, suggesting they do CrossFit instead. The instructor had never even heard of it. So, he explained that CrossFit was a method of continuous, high-intensity training using a bunch of different exercises. He said the goal was to train different parts of the body at the same time, making them strong all around. He looked at the soldiers and ghouls. He told them that forming groups for the workout would create teamwork and trigger their competitive side, which was perfect since they weren't comfortable with each other yet. He announced that he'd already made the teams. All they had to do was ask the portly ghoul who was holding the list. That's all it took. The entire group, humans and ghouls alike, roared with excitement. And with that, the training began. Former enemies were now side by side, pushing their limits together. Far away from the training ground, a real battle was happening. While soldiers and ghouls were lifting weights, others were fighting for their lives. The soldiers were completely surrounded, trying to hold their ground against the endless wave of monsters. Back at the camp, the training didn't stop for a second. Everyone pushed themselves, jumping with everything they had. That's when the blue-haired instructor heard something in the distance, a faint siren. He turned to the man with the face paint, asking what that sound was for. He'd heard it several times already. The man explained that the feudal lord was personally raiding zombies near the castle. The siren was a signal for backup, which meant the enemies were stronger than they'd expected. But the instructor didn't seem to care about any of that. He just turned back to the trainees and yelled at the fourth group, telling them to lower the weight before they hurt themselves. The man with the face paint just watched. He realized the instructor truly didn't care about anything else. The commander raised his sword, congratulating his soldiers on their hard work. He told them that their scouts had found the enemy's base. It was at the end of the path, and this was their chance to end the fight for good. The entire army roared, ready for the final push. He raised his sword one last time, calling out to his soldiers. Then, he gave the order to charge. His soldiers rushed forward, crashing right into the wave of monsters. They cut through the zombies, their glowing blades lighting up the darkness. One of the men warned his lord that they might be going too deep into the horde, but the commander just smiled. He told him not to worry. Zombies are stupid and have no tactics. All they needed was strength and numbers to win. The commander watched his men tear through the horde. He was sure they were pushing through just fine. He screamed at his soldiers not to slow down, telling them that war was all about momentum. His voice boomed over the battlefield, ordering them not to stop until every last opponent was gone. But someone else was watching from the shadows. A voice mocked their simple plan, guessing that's exactly what they were thinking. With a snap of the fingers, the ground erupted. A massive blast sent the charging soldiers flying. That's when the real enemy showed himself. His name was Ben, and he was the one who had set this whole trap. Ben looked down on the surviving soldiers. He told them he'd been watching, and that they clearly didn't understand the first thing about war. He explained their mistake. Spears were for real battle, while swords were just for showing off. Ben gave the order, and his monster charged forward. He mocked them, pointing out how useless their swords were. They couldn't help each other or stop the enemy from charging. He called their teamwork a joke. The commander screamed Ben's name in fury. Ben just smiled, casually saying it had been a while. He called him Wordo. Wordo didn't waste any time. He swung his sword right at Ben, but Ben blocked it easily. He even held his own sword in his mouth to prove a point. Then he told Wordo that he'd grown old. Wordo was furious. He demanded to know how Ben still looked the same after all this time, knowing he couldn't use energy to stop aging like General Ryan. Ben just shrugged. He said he didn't need to train his energy for something like that. Instead, he said he did some research. That's when he showed his hand. He had syringes filled with some glowing green stuff, and it looked dangerous. Ben didn't hesitate. He stabbed the syringe right into his own chest. His body started to change instantly. His muscles swelled to an insane size as dark lines spread across his skin. Wordo stared up at him, his face filled with dread. He started to ask a question, suspecting something awful. A massive shadow fell over him. Ben had turned into some kind of giant, towering over Wordo completely. The transformation was complete. Ben was a monster. That's when Wordo finally asked the question he was dreading. Had Ben been experimenting on humans? His face was twisted into a horrifying grin. Wordo looked up at him and realized the man wasn't just a monster. He was completely insane. He glanced back at his soldiers fighting in the distance. He knew he didn't have much time before they were overrun. He had to end this right now. He had to kill Ben before anyone else could interfere. He activated a combat skill, pouring all his energy into the attack. He launched himself into the air, his sword blazing with light. He screamed that Ben was a lost spirit and it was time for him to go back to hell. The blade slammed down, creating a massive explosion of force. But it wasn't enough. Wordo was stunned by the sheer speed and power Ben possessed. Before Wordo could even process what happened, Ben was already moving. The giant slammed his fist into the ground, and the entire area erupted. Wordo hit the ground hard. That last attack had almost killed him. He knew he couldn't win with pure strength. His only hope was to predict Ben's moves and find an opening. He activated a combat skill, pouring all his energy into his sword to block the incoming punch. But the force behind the blow was insane. In that instant, Wordo knew for sure Ben was way more powerful than him. His block shattered, and he was sent flying. He slammed into the side of a cliff with incredible force. The crash carved a huge trench through the forest, a clear sign of Ben's monstrous power. Wordo's whole body was trembling. He knew it was over. Ben was just too strong. Wordo couldn't wrap his head around it. Even with those strange experiments, there was no way anyone should be this strong. Ben grinned, saying he knew exactly what Wordo was thinking. He explained that his power was simple. It was just progress, and called him an idiot for not realizing it. He told Wordo that his biggest problem was being stuck in the past. By focusing only on swords, he never got any stronger. He looked down at him with disgust, calling him a fool who never learned anything new. Wordo tried to argue back, bringing up the incredible strength of General Ryan. Ben just smirked, saying he knew her very well. But then Ben asked him a simple question. Did he even understand what an average was? He pointed right at him, telling him to just look at the situation they were in now. Wordo asked what he meant by that, and then his eyes widened. It all clicked into place. Ben's creatures tore through Wordo's army. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Ben asked if Wordo really thought they were evenly matched. The answer was obvious. This was a complete massacre, driven by overwhelming strength. Ben explained that just because one person is strong, it doesn't mean they're the standard for everyone. Wordo couldn't believe it. His soldiers were losing. Ben looked down at him, completely unimpressed. He asked if Wordo was seriously still in denial after seeing all this. He was done talking. He told Wordo to just die. The system announced his move. Combat skill, 9 hidden twin sword. With a single swing, he unleashed a massive wave of energy straight at Wordo. Just as the attack was about to hit, one of Wordo's soldiers jumped in front of him. He screamed for his commander to get back, ready to take the full force of the blow. But Wordo didn't stay. He turned and ran. He left his loyal soldier to face the monster all by himself. Ben watched him go, laughing. He couldn't believe Wordo was still only thinking about saving his own skin. The soldier knew it was over for him. He used his last breath to scream at the others to retreat. He told them the battle was lost. Their only hope was to run back to their own land without stopping. He urged them to follow their lord and lived to fight another day. With his men safely escaping, he turned to face his fate. He shouted his name was Ivan, ready for his final stand. Ben's attack came down with incredible force. Ivan didn't stand a chance. His sword shattered. The soldiers rode hard, leaving the battlefield behind. One of Ben's monsters asked if it should chase them, but Ben told it to stand down. He said there was no need. They already knew exactly where the soldiers were going. He called Wordo an idiot, guessing that he'd run back and gather everyone he could to fight them. And in doing so, Wordo was just making their job easier. Far away, Wordo was riding for his life, completely panicked. He couldn't get the image of those monsters out of his head. He had no idea how anyone could possibly beat them. As Wordo and his men ran for their lives, he couldn't wrap his head around what he'd just seen. It was impossible. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely, Hansel was in the middle of his own kind of battle. He just kept lifting, counting every single rep. His face was pure focus. Nothing else in the world mattered except the next number. He just kept riding, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. The images of those monsters were burned into his mind. He had no idea how anyone could possibly fight them. His entire army was running for their lives. It was a total disaster. The numbers just kept climbing into the hundreds of thousands. He was in his own world. His focus was absolute. Nothing else mattered but the next repetition. Far away, the soldiers galloped on, not daring to look back. The commander finally broke, demanding someone explain what had just happened. A soldier rode up beside him and introduced herself as Rumi. She told him she could report on the situation, and he ordered her to speak. Rumi laid out the grim numbers. Out of 400 soldiers, 347 were either dead or infected. With 27 more injured, they only had 26 people left who could actually fight. She continued, adding that even with the 100 soldiers back at the castle, the rest were just trainees or already hurt. Commander was losing it. He couldn't believe he was supposed to win a war with just 126 soldiers. Rumi suggested they call back General Rian for help, but the commander knew it was hopeless, yelling that by the time she arrived, it would be too late. Then Rumi came up with a wild idea. She asked what if they got help from the monsters living in the castle. The commander looked at her, completely confused. She explained that their leader, Hansel, was strong enough to fight General Rian to a standstill. Since they'd given them food and a place to stay, she figured they might be willing to help. The commander thought about it for a second. The idea was to fight monsters with other monsters. A huge grin spread across his face. He loved it. He shouted that they were going with that plan. 3 days later, soldiers on horseback rode up to the castle walls. They headed straight for the training grounds. The commander rode forward, yelling for everyone to stop what they were doing and gather around. Hansel and his trainees were in the middle of a workout. They all looked up, confused by the sudden order. Rumi shouted at them, demanding to know what they were doing and telling them to obey. Finally, Hansel and his group stopped their training and walked over to see what was going on. The commander looked down from his horse and asked if he was speaking to Hansel. Hansel just smiled and asked if he was there for personal training. The commander wasn't amused. He told Hansel he wasn't there to work out. He was there to give the monsters an order. The commander yelled that it was time for these lowly beings to repay their debt for being allowed to stay in the castle. He gave them a direct order: kill the zombie army that was getting closer. But Hansel and his trainees just stared back with blank faces. They didn't seem to understand a single word. The commander gritted his teeth in frustration, wondering if they were too stupid to even understand him. He decided to try a different approach, offering them a chance to die with honor. He even made a special offer to their leader, Hansel, promising him citizenship in their great nation. He called it the best deal they could ever get and told them to show off that freaky thing they called a workout. And in response, one of the trainees shouted out a command, not for battle, but for a pose: front double biceps. In perfect sync, all the trainees hit the pose, their muscles flexing under the sun. The commander just stared, completely confused by what he was seeing. One of the trainees proudly explained that this was called bodybuilding. Hansel chimed in, adding that this is how you show off after a good workout. The commander completely lost it. He screamed that this wasn't a joke, and if they didn't fight, they were all going to die. But Hansel's face darkened. He shot back that if they get injured, they can't work out. His voice was dead serious as he asked if the commander would take responsibility for any muscle loss. The man was speechless. He had no idea what Hansel was even talking about. The commander felt a terrifying pressure coming from behind him. He immediately thought he needed to apologize for what he'd just said, but it was Hansel who spoke up. He sincerely apologized for his earlier statement. The commander, trying to get things back on track, ordered everyone to move out, but Hansel wasn't preparing for battle. He just grinned and announced that since they were all rested, it was time to start the workout over from Rep 1. The female soldier had seen enough. She told her commander to forget it, saying she never really expected them to help in the first place. The commander made a new decision. He told her to call for General Ox. The soldier seemed a little worried by the name. As they rode, she explained that while General Ox had a bad personality, his strength was almost as great as General Ryan's. With their new plan in motion, he gave the order to gather all the soldiers at the castle gates. The human commander was ready for a fight, promising to show these zombies what they were capable of. But below the castle walls, a massive army of the undead was gathering. They marched straight for the main gate. a silent, unstoppable wave. Up on the wall, General Ox watched them come. The commander next to him looked terrified, and for good reason. The sheer size of the horde was insane. It was a sea of zombies, stretching as far as the eye could see. Just as they reached the bridge, General Ox suddenly roared for them to wait. He yelled that he knew they had a leader, someone who could actually think. He begged them to stop and just talk about the situation. The horde stopped. At the front, a small group led by a truly massive creature stood waiting on the other side of the bridge. The one leading the monsters was a woman named Elise. Up on the wall, General Ox stared in disbelief. Elise sounded annoyed. She asked what they wanted to talk about. General Ox yelled back that even though the monsters had a bigger army, his men were trained soldiers. He warned her that taking the castle wouldn't be easy. So, Elise offered a different way to settle things. She suggested a one-on-one fight, a representative from their side against a representative from hers. The winner would decide the whole war. Elise grinned, finding the idea interesting. She accepted the deal. General Ox looked pleased. This was exactly what he wanted. Without hesitation, General Ox leaped off the castle wall. He landed on the ground and stared down the army, demanding to know which one of them would be coming forward to fight. From the crowd of monsters, a giant, muscular creature stepped forward to answer his challenge. The creature let out a deep groan, and its single red eye started to glow intensely. Then it threw its head back and roared. Its muscles started swelling. General Ox looked his opponent up and down. He had to admit, the creature had an impressive build, but he wasn't impressed by size alone. He challenged the monster to prove it had the skills to back it up. Without waiting for an answer, he charged forward. The monster didn't even flinch. It just raised a single fist to block the attack. The impact was huge, sending a shockwave out from where they met. General Ox grunted, surprised by how solid the creature was. It was like hitting a wall of rock. The monster didn't give him a moment to think. It immediately started throwing a flurry of heavy punches. General Ox barely got his sword up in time to block the final crushing blow. The monster spat out a cloud of green smoke, but General Ox was fast enough to dodge it. He landed a short distance away, relieved he'd moved in time. He looked at the creature with genuine curiosity. He'd never seen an undead with a body like that, and wondered how it was even possible. The monster didn't answer. It just tensed up, recognizing that its opponent was incredibly strong. Then, without any warning, the creature turned and started running. General Ox stared after it, completely stunned. He couldn't believe it was trying to run away from the fight. He roared in anger and charged forward, yelling that this duel would only end when one of them was defeated. But the monster wasn't just running away. It was running towards something specific, and it was almost there. General Ox paused, a confused look on his face. Something didn't feel right about this at all. The monster had run towards a figure waiting in the distance. From the castle wall, a soldier screamed for the general to be careful. Something was flying right at his opponent. Suddenly, another massive figure landed on the battlefield. He was furious, demanding to know who dared to interrupt their sacred fight. Before Ox could even react, the newcomer slammed his fist into him with incredible force. Then, a third person appeared, a man with blue hair and a twisted grin. He started laughing, mocking the idea of a sacred battle. He asked if his opponent really understood why he'd agreed to this duel in the first place. He explained that it was all a setup. General Ox was the only unpredictable person left in the entire area, and he needed him out of the way. The whole chase was a trick. The monster wasn't running away. It was luring Ox into a trap, and he fell for it completely. The blue-haired man laughed again, insulting the general for having a brain as simple as his name suggested. Up on the walls, the soldiers could only watch in horror. They were completely powerless to help. General Ox was completely beaten. Lying on the ground, he begged them to spare his life. The blue-haired man smiled and said they would spare him. Then he called out to someone named Frank, a huge, white monster with a helmet effortlessly picked up the general's body. Without a word, Frank just tossed him high into the air. General Ox looked down and saw exactly what was waiting for him. He screamed as he fell right into the middle of the zombie horde. An old ghoul pointed forward, and the crowd swarmed over the general. Up on the wall, the soldiers could only watch in terror. Their strongest fighter was gone. The blue-haired leader of the horde called out to the man on the wall, Werdo. They offered him a deal. Give up the castle, and they'd let him live. Werdo yelled back, refusing to hand over his nation to someone who had given up their humanity. The leader just laughed. They admitted the deal was off, and they were never going to spare him anyway. With a single word, they pointed forward and gave the order to attack. The entire horde surged forward, a massive wave of bodies rushing the castle. Werdo screamed for the archers to fire, but down below, the soldiers panicked, admitting they'd never even used a bow before. He clenched his fist, furious at the chaos. One of his soldiers turned to him, desperately asking what they should do. Werdo just stood there, completely silent. He didn't answer the soldier. His mind was somewhere else, remembering a time he was asked what to do, and his only answer was that he didn't know. He remembered screaming those words in absolute terror, turning to run for his life. His only thought had been to escape, to get away from the danger as fast as he could. He could still hear their voices in his head, calling him a coward for running. An old commander's words came back to him, a sharp reminder that only cowards run. He remembered a woman's patronizing smile as she worried aloud about how easily scared he was. Someone else had even joked about it, saying his talent for running away was the only thing keeping them safe. But the worst memory of all was the one he couldn't escape. A woman crying his name, begging for help as she was was dragged away, and he had done nothing. He screamed that he never wanted to run away. In fact, he wanted to stay and fight more than anyone else. He yelled about the heavy weight of being the one responsible, asking if anyone had ever been in his shoes. He knew he was a cowardly leader who couldn't take responsibility. But even so, he was desperate to keep his people safe. Tears streamed down his face as he screamed for someone, anyone, to save him. He was begging Hansel and his followers. He apologized for ever looking down on working out and for judging them. He told them they could kill him 1,000,000 times. All he asked was that they save his people, his soldiers, and his country. He fell to his knees, pressing his head to the ground in a final, desperate plea. As Werdo begged, Hansel finally spoke. He just wanted to know one thing. Did the man want to work out? Werdo looked up, completely confused. Hansel told Werdo he didn't need his life, but there was a condition. He grinned, surrounded by his crew. The personal training fee for Werdo was going to be extremely high. As Hansel's crew stood ready, one of the soldiers stepped forward. He told them that he and his men wanted to help fight, but one of the muscular guys immediately shut him down, yelling at the newbie to watch himself. He said that anyone who couldn't lift at least 400 kilograms across the 3 main lifts should just stay out of it completely. With that, they just stood there, an intimidating wall of muscle. Watching them, Werdo thought to himself that they were probably just a bunch of idiots. But as they turned and walked toward the enemy, he couldn't help but wonder, why do they look so unbelievably cool? With Hansel leading the way, his entire crew started running, and their steps perfectly in sync. One of them pointed ahead, noting that it was a straight shot right to the gate. But this wasn't just a charge. Hansel announced that since it was an emergency, they'd be doing interval training. His crew cheered in agreement. He counted off the seconds as they picked up the pace. He gave the order, run as fast as they possibly could for 1.5 minutes. But not everyone was built for this. Fatso was already falling behind, completely out of breath. He was already at his limit. He looked up, completely stunned. They were already gone, just a cloud of dust in the distance. He couldn't believe how fast they were. Inside the city walls, the chaos was everywhere. A woman held her child tight as 2 zombies closed in on them. Then, out of nowhere, something slammed into the zombies, crushing them instantly. The boy looked up at his mother, telling her they were okay. They had been saved. He watched the group run past, their power on full display. He asked his mom if learning to use a sword could make him that strong, but his mom just looked confused. She told him that whatever that was, it wasn't swordsmanship. She decided they would just have to ask them what their strange technique was after the war ended. Meanwhile, at the main gate, the soldiers looked out at the massive horde of zombies. One of them activated a skill called Hawkeye to get a better look, but what he saw didn't make any sense. He saw a group of what looked like zombies running towards them, shouting nonsense. He figured they must be thirsty. Fatso ran up to Halsin, looking panicked as he tried to explain the situation. He started to say that the creatures were zombies, but Halsin cut him off. He told Fatso not to bend his back while resting because it was bad for his posture. One of the other men explained that the zombies had no thoughts and were just driven by hunger. He figured they were just moving corpses, so he wouldn't feel bad about taking them down. With the enemy identified, Fatso turned to Halsin and asked him what he was going to do. Halsin looked over at the main gate. A huge crowd of zombies was already pushing its way through. A huge grin spread across his face. He had an idea. He would just push them all out with his chest muscles. Fatso was completely speechless. Halsin asked what was wrong. Fatso quickly insisted that it was a great plan, and then asked if he could be the one to lead the team. Halsin just smiled and told him to do as he wished. A strange grin spread across Fatso's face. He was clearly excited to be in command. He didn't waste a second. He started shouting orders, sending the first 2 groups to spread out and guard the villagers. He then ordered groups 3 and 4 to climb the castle walls, telling the human soldiers to join the fight. His last order was for the 5th group to go help Hansel, and sure enough, Hansel was at the gate, using his own body to hold back the entire zombie horde. Fatso stared in complete shock. The insane plan was actually working. He suddenly started yelling for everyone to block the gate. A human commander echoed the order, explaining that even with Hansel holding the line, zombies could still slip through the sides. But one of the soldiers shouted back that it was impossible. The gate was completely destroyed, and there was nothing left to block the entrance with. But just then, one of the human soldiers spoke up. He said he knew this would happen. He revealed what he brought with his fellow seniors, a giant, impossible-looking weight. The other soldiers couldn't believe it. One of them recognized the man as an useless swordsman and wondered how they were even lifting that thing. But the ghouls knew exactly what they were seeing. It was a walking lunge. One of the ghouls yelled for them to keep moving, but the human soldier leading the group had stopped, his face covered in sweat. He had no idea what was wrong. Turns out, the ghoul's legs were completely worn out. He told the soldier he couldn't move anymore. The soldier started begging, telling his senior he couldn't do this to them. The ghoul calmly explained that he knew how much the soldier cared about their bodies, but he warned that if they pushed too hard, they might get injured. His biggest fear wasn't dying. It was getting an injury that would stop him from being able to exercise later. So he dropped to his knees, begging them to leave him and go on. The soldier just screamed in disbelief. This was not what he wanted to hear. The soldier screamed, wondering how anyone could possibly lift this thing. He was at his absolute limit. But then, his vision cleared. He saw Hansel standing at the gate, a picture of pure power. Suddenly, the soldier felt like he could do it. The old lord of the ghouls saw the soldier suddenly glowing with a strange energy and called out his name in shock. That's when one of the ghoul leaders started barking orders. He told Group 5 to protect the soldiers carrying the giant kettlebell. He then ordered the kettlebell group to push forward and block the entrance. The soldier gritted his teeth, pouring every last bit of his strength into the push. With one final command to march, The entire group moved as one, a wall of muscle and determination heading straight for the gate. From the gate, Hansel watched as the team made their final push, carrying the massive kettlebell forward. The soldier and the ghouls strained under the impossible weight, their bodies screaming with the effort. With one last heave, they slammed the kettlebell into the entryway, perfectly blocking the gate. After it was done, the soldier and the ghoul just stood there, completely drained and dripping with sweat. They had given it everything they had. That's when Hansel walked up to them. He told them he was impressed with how carefully they carried the kettlebell. He looked at the exhausted crew and told them they did a good job. One of the ghouls threw his fist in the air, yelling that they had finally blocked the castle entrance. They had done it. With the gate finally blocked, Hansel gave the kettlebell group the order to take a well-deserved rest. But the battle wasn't over. The ghoul chief immediately started shouting new commands, telling every other group to join Hansel and push the zombies back. Without a moment's hesitation, the ghouls charged forward, getting into formation for the attack. Hansel stood at the front, ready to lead the charge against the undead horde. As they started pushing the zombies back, one of the human soldiers looked confused, asking if he was even doing the move correctly. Hansel yelled instructions from the front, telling him to put more strength into his chest. The soldier immediately understood and followed the order. But the zombies weren't just a weight to be pushed. They were fighting back, screaming and clawing at them. One of the ghouls got caught in their grasp. From the top of the wall, a lookout screamed a warning, telling them not to get bitten. The lookout kept screaming, warning that a single bite would turn them into one of the undead. The ghoul, who was bitten, suddenly froze, his body tensing up. He let out a huge scream as his muscles started to swell and bulge, but then he just stopped and turned to his friend. They started laughing, joking that they were already undead, so it didn't matter. Elise just stared, completely confused by what was happening. She couldn't believe how ridiculous this was, but the ghouls thought it was hilarious, and one even wondered if he should try the prank too. The moment of fun was over. A new wave of zombies charged forward, screaming as they closed in. One of them lunged and bit down hard on the fighter's shoulder, but the fighter wasn't scared. He just looked annoyed, complaining that the zombie was making his muscles dirty. His arms started to glow as he prepared to hit back. Far away from the chaos, someone else was watching the battle. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. Ghouls were fighting alongside humans, and it made no sense. But then, he started laughing. He admitted to himself that he never expected things to turn out like this. His amusement quickly faded. He focused on the lone figure, holding back the horde at the gate. He gave his undead army a single command: attack that man. He wasn't going to just watch anymore. He leaped down, his eyes glowing with a dark energy as he joined the fight himself. On the ground, the human soldiers fought with everything they had. They were doing this for their fallen leaders, General Even and General Ox. They screamed for revenge as they charged, but the blue-haired man met their attacks easily, his massive blades stopping them cold. The sound of their weapons clashing rang out. He was on a completely different level. The commander stopped Elise, telling her to step aside. He then yelled down to the battlefield, pointing Hansel in a new direction. He pointed towards the two figures watching from afar, screaming that they were the ones who caused all of this. He shouted down to the group carrying the massive weight. He told them he couldn't see clearly, but they just needed to go straight for the guy with the blue hair. The soldier, leading the charge, looked up and yelled back that he understood. He quickly turned to one of the ghouls and asked if he could handle this alone. The ghoul replied with absolute confidence. With that settled, the soldier got into position. A powerful energy began to build around him. Then he unleashed his skill, the reverse pec deck fly. His muscles exploded in size as he pushed his arms back, creating a massive wave of force. Watching from the wall, the commander could only stare in complete shock. He whispered that it was a miracle. The commander yelled that a miracle was happening right before his eyes. The massive weight was actually moving forward, pushing everything out of its way. But the man with the blue hair, watching from a distance, just scoffed. He called them all worthless. He turned to the woman next to him, Elise, and asked if she agreed. Elise admitted that while she didn't want to step in, this was definitely not what she expected. Hearing that, the blue-haired man got to his feet. He stood up and faced the soldier, who had just cleared the path. The two of them were about to clash. That's when the blue-haired man's muscles started to grow, his body changing in an instant. He transformed into a huge, shadowy monster. With one hand, he stopped the massive kettlebell dead in its tracks, but the soldier didn't even hesitate. He just kept charging forward, ready to fight. The soldier's punch met the monster's. The impact was insane, sending a shockwave out from where their fists connected. Neither of them moved an inch. The soldier stared back with pure determination, but the monster just grinned, his eyes glowing. He was actually enjoying this. Monster pushed back, matching Hansel's strength completely. Their fists were locked together, and neither one was giving an inch. The creature demanded to know why he was interfering. Hansel yelled back that it was because he was bullying potential gym members. Suddenly, Hansel's grip tightened on the monster's face. The creature grunted in pain, unable to break free. With a roar, Hansel lifted the monster clean off the ground by its head. He screamed that he was protecting his people. Then he slammed the monster's head straight into the ground. The monster couldn't believe it. The grip was impossibly strong. The creature struggled violently, screaming for Hansel to let him go. Hansel just looked down and calmly asked if that was all he had. His muscles bulged. He told the monster that now it was his turn. Hansel unleashed his next move, the mountain climber. He lifted the monster by its head and drove it straight into the earth. The impact shattered the ground beneath them. The crack he created just just kept going, tearing a massive trench across the battlefield. But he wasn't done. Hansol was dragging the monster through the dirt at an impossible speed. Far from the main fight, a woman in a hat watched silently. Next to her, a huge wolf creature let out a roar, spitting out a pile of bones. Meanwhile, another battle was raging on. A warrior was locked in a fierce fight with a shadowy monster. The woman watched him, worried. She knew he was in serious danger. From the shadows, a commander gave a new order: eliminate all the risks. A creature covered in blades stood at attention, ready to move. And just like that, the hunt was on. The bladed creature and the wolf took off, speeding through the forest. The two creatures finally clashed in a blur of motion. Their fight was so fast, all you could see were the sparks from their blades hitting. The bladed creature stopped and demanded to know who the woman was. She introduced herself as Rain, explaining she was related to someone named Ryan. Rain easily blocked attacks from multiple creatures at once. The main one then gave her a mission: go find someone named Ben. The wolf creature charged forward, but Rain just smirked. She mocked them, asking if they really thought simple swordsmanship would be enough to stop her. The creature simply replied that yes, it did. It stood ready, blades extended, prepared to prove her wrong. But while they were distracted, another group saw their chance. One of them yelled for the others to pull. They were using some kind of massive slingshot, pulling back a huge ball of energy. With a final shout, they let it go. The energy projectile flew through the air, heading straight for its target. The massive ball of energy, a skill called Heavy Blunt, shot through the air. But it wasn't just one. High above, the attack multiplied by 10. Down below, the crowd could only stare up in horror. A moment later, the sky fell. The energy blasts rained down like a meteor shower, creating massive explosions across the battlefield. In the middle of the chaos, a leader started yelling out orders. He sent the first group to check the village for any zombies that were left. He then ordered the second group to guard the front gate while it was being repaired. Finally, he told the third and fourth groups to stop pushing the enemy back and to start a real fight. Watching from a tower, one of the men seemed worried. He admitted that the half-monster Hansen was powerful, but said the real threat was the one leading the war, a monster named Ghoulord. Just then, a giant, shadowy figure appeared, looming over everything. Meanwhile, an old man watching from afar remembered a legend his grandfather told him, a story about monsters who had once sided with humans. The memory was of the War Dragon, a legendary hero from a great war. The bald creature on the battlefield paused. He had no idea why that name suddenly popped into his head. The fight was intense. Hansol grabbed the creature and slammed its head into the dirt. In an instant, the creature's head hardened, growing sharp spikes all over. It then smashed its spiked head right into Hansol's chest. But the attack didn't even faze him. Hansol just held the creature in place and calmly started giving instructions on which muscle to use. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Hansen was being held by the throat. He was losing his mind, wondering what in the world these lunatics were doing. The creature struggled, realizing its head was completely stuck. As it panicked, one of the monster dogs started barking wildly. The creature unleashed its special skill, Bone Aid. Turns out, it was a mix of wind magic and necromancy, a really advanced technique. The bones were almost as strong as steel. An attack like that could easily destroy someone's head, and this powerful storm of bones slammed right into Hansol, but it didn't even leave a scratch. To him, it felt more like a deep tissue massage. The little monster dog started barking excitedly, like it was cheering him on. Meanwhile, Hansen was still being choked. He grunted in pain, realizing he had no other choice. He was about to use a method he never wanted to touch. He stared at his captor and warned him that whatever happened next was his own fault. The blue-haired man was completely sure of himself. He thought there was no way Hansen could possibly break his grip, but then he felt his fingers being forced apart. His eyes shot open in disbelief. Hansen had become a shadowy monster with a terrifying grin. He mocked the man, asking if he really thought his grip was so strong after all. Blue-haired man couldn't hold on. Hansel's neck muscles were just too thick. Now free, Hansel landed a single, powerful punch. The blow sent the man flying straight up into the air. Hansel watched as he crashed back down to earth, far in the distance. But he wasn't done. He shot back up, moving so fast he was just a blur, laughing wildly. The attacker zipped all around him, mocking him for being too slow to even see his movements. Hansel just watched, completely unfazed. He understood what was happening. It was all about muscle contractility. The man transformed into a strange creature made of pure muscle. He grumbled that he was being forced to use a special power he'd been saving for someone named Ryan. The attacker was sure he had this in the bag, mocking Hansel for getting involved. But Hansel was already analyzing him, thinking about red muscles, the kind that store oxygen. He knew these muscles were great for endurance because they didn't get tired easily. But they had one big weakness. They couldn't contract very quickly. But then, there were the white muscles. The attacker couldn't understand it. He felt like none of his attacks were doing any damage at all. Hansel knew the truth. White muscles were built for pure speed. Realizing his normal attacks weren't enough, the attacker decided he had to change tactics. If technique wasn't working, he'd just have to hit him harder. He screamed for more speed and unleashed a furious punch right at Hansel's face. And that's when it all clicked for Hansel. He knew exactly how to win this fight. All he had to do was endure. He flexed, hitting a side chest pose. His plan was simple. Just wait for the other guy to run out of steam. Basically, this was now a battle of stamina. But there was one huge problem with Hansel's strategy. He had no idea that his opponent, Ben, had a secret. Turns out, Ben's body wasn't natural at all. He was using some kind of drug to boost his power. Hansel didn't care. He just roared, getting ready to make his move. Ben just laughed, completely sure of himself. With a final shout, Hansol slammed his hands down, performing a bench press right on top of his enemy. The force was incredible. Hansol pushed down with everything he had. Ben felt the pressure building, his body straining under the weight. He couldn't believe it. He had never felt power like this before. With one final push, Hansol launched him straight into the sky. Ben knew he couldn't win with brute force and decided to change his strategy. Watching from a distance, Hansen smirked, thinking that all that muscle would be hard to control. But Hansol admitted to himself that even he wasn't used to his body changing so quickly. Hansen moved like a blur across the ground, looking for an opening. He was just waiting for the perfect moment, wondering when the big guy would finally run out of energy. The creature spun like a top, its many arms blurring into a destructive whirlwind that tore up the ground around it. It landed with a heavy thud, its massive fist cracking the earth. The creature stared them down, its voice low and mocking as it called them weak. One of the men stepped forward, drawing his blade. He admitted that they knew they were weaker, but he declared that the power of their friendship was stronger than any monster. He lunged forward, channeling all his energy into a combat skill. He unleashed his signature move, an attack called 100, but it was useless. The creature swatted him away like he was nothing, sending him flying across the ground. His friend could only scream his name in horror. Furious that his friend was hurt, the warrior screamed and leaped into the air, bringing his giant sword down on the monster. He activated his combat skill, Quicksword Chaos, pouring all his energy into the strike. But then he saw it. His friend was lying on the ground, directly in the path of his attack. He tried to pull back, but the momentum was too strong. He couldn't stop the swing. The blade stopped dead, just inches from his friend's face. The warrior looked up in disbelief. The monster had caught the massive sword with its bare hands, thinking to itself how weak the attack felt. He was completely frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then he looked around. The entire army of zombies had stopped advancing. They were just standing there, waiting. Nothing made any sense. The warrior looked up from the ground. A massively built man stood over him, complimenting his skill. It was Hansol. He remembered the final move, a single, overwhelming strike that ended the fight instantly. He just stood there, completely stunned by the difference in their strength. After a moment, he understood what he had to do. He turned to his monster companion, Frank, and told him to stand down. He had seen enough reason to join the bodybuilders. Far away from the battlefield, on the outskirts of a coastal town, things were quiet. But that peace was broken by a messenger, running as fast as he could and shouting for his general. Hearing the desperate cries, General Rian looked up, knowing something was very wrong. General Ryan calmly looked at the man who had just burst in. She asked him why he was in such a hurry to kick down her door. She gave him a sly grin, teasing him about being so eager to see her. The messenger wasn't laughing. He shouted that this was no time for jokes, and that things were really bad. Ryan told him to catch his breath and just explain what was going on. The man slammed his hands on the table and yelled that they were under attack by a group of zombies. He desperately told her that they needed her strength right now, but Ryan just laughed it off. She said she thought it was something serious, and that the army could easily handle a few zombies. The messenger explained that while the army could probably handle it, the real problem was who bought the zombies. He told her it was Ben. That name made her freeze, but a moment later, she just threw her head back and started laughing. The messenger yelled that this wasn't a joke. He couldn't believe the general was laughing at a time like this, but Ryan was totally calm. She asked him when else they could laugh, if not during a crisis, and just felt sorry for Ben. The messenger didn't understand. Ryan explained that they had two powerful shields protecting the castle, so there was nothing to worry about. The first was a reliable ally named Hansel. The second was her own niece, a woman named Lying Windshield Viper. Ryan boasted that her niece was destined to become the strongest person on the entire continent. The woman got into a low stance, ready to explode into action. She called out the name of her move. Bird Dog Crunch goes way back to the dark ages of the continent, a time when war was all anyone knew. Back then, the elves were treated terribly. They hated exercise and fighting, which made them easy targets. That all changed when a human doctor named Tidal Pilates created a special workout just for them. The elves took that workout and turned it into a powerful fighting style. It's called Lates. Rain lived in the elf forest her whole life, and she mastered their style completely. She moved with perfect flow, almost like she was dancing. Within 7 years, she even created her own move, the blast stroke exercise. She had become a true master, creating techniques all her own. The knight-like figure watched Rain suspended in the air. She was sure there was no way for Rain to dodge an attack from up there. Announcing her plan to end the fight, the knight shot upwards like a missile, right at her target, but Rain was ready. She performed a perfect rollback, flipping backwards in mid-air to avoid the charge. Then, she used a move called roll-up, somehow attaching a line to the knight and pulling her even higher. The knight was completely caught off guard, now just being dragged along for the ride. With incredible precision, Rain landed perfectly, her foot pointed right on the tip of the knight's weapon. She flexed her foot, using the knight's own momentum against her. The move was complete. Rain stood perfectly balanced on the weapon's tip, looking down at her opponent. She told the knight that this fight was already over, but the knight wasn't giving up. She stared up at Rain and declared that she wasn't finished yet. Rain just smirked. She called out the name of her next technique and began to spin rapidly on the tip of the weapon. The force was immense. The knight was slammed into the ground as Rain used the momentum to launch herself high into the air. Looking down from above, she casually asked her opponent why she didn't try a spin move like that herself. The knight shot back that she didn't take advice from the enemy. Rain just smiled and insisted that she really should try it. As the night charged again, Rain suddenly mentioned that her sword was kind of similar to her aunt's, but then she added that compared to her aunt's, the knight's weapon was basically nothing. With that, she unleashed a massive, swirling attack. She looked back with a smirk, wondering aloud if the knight's weapon was really anything special at all. Miles away, General Ryan took a drink. She had a strange feeling that someone was talking about her. Back on the battlefield, the knight was completely overwhelmed by the storm of blades. Even as she was being pinned down, she screamed at Rain to just die already, but her defiance meant nothing. The attack slammed down with incredible force. A system message appeared, calling her a powerhouse of physical strength. Rain calmly pointed out that the knight was losing her balance and wondered what she would do now. Surrounded by a fiery energy, Rain leaned in and announced it was time to end this. Rain unleashed another move, a powerful kick called hyper-extension. The kick landed with so much force, it sent the creature flying across the ground. Watching him, the creature thought that Rain had to be exhausted by now, but it knew the gap in their strength was just too big. It couldn't understand. Why wasn't he getting tired? Why wasn't he taking any damage? It started to wonder what kind of body he even had. In a final burst of anger, it lunged forward, screaming in its mind for the monster to just fall down already. But Rain just punched forward, yelling that he was thinking the exact same thing. The monster knew exactly what it was using. This was a drug made for someone named Ryan. It was powerful enough to match an elder dragon. The monster brought its giant fist down, ready to end this, but Rain caught it. He yelled that this just meant he needed to work out even harder. He held the massive punch completely still. That's when the monster started to sweat. It realized the side effects of the drug were already kicking in. It turned and ran, desperate to find the neutralizer before it was too late. Rain watched it go, completely confused. He called out, asking what kind of drugs it was using to change its body like that. The creature stumbled, letting out a pained cry as its body started to fail. The creature suddenly collapsed, vomiting a strange yellow liquid all over the ground. Rain watched, trying to figure out what was wrong. He wondered if it was a nutritional problem, but a system message told him that wasn't it. The creature gasped for breath, its body glowing with a sickly yellow light. It knew it needed to take the shot to reverse the effects, but then it stopped. Tears streamed down its face as a question hit it. Why was it even fighting in the first place? It looked up at Rain with a pained expression and suggested they just stop fighting. It started laughing hysterically, saying it was a waste of life to fight in such a beautiful world. Rain just crossed his arms. He agreed. He didn't want to fight either. But Rain reminded the creature that it was the one who started all of this. He was furious. He yelled at the creature, asking if it had any idea how many people couldn't even exercise because of its actions. The creature panicked at Rain's scary face. It started apologizing, screaming that it didn't even know why it was doing any of this. It collapsed to the ground, crying out that all it wanted was to save someone named Elise. Rain froze. He questioned the name, and the creature confirmed it was Elise. The name triggered a memory, a dark and painful one. In the flashback, a woman was tied to a post. She was already dead. This was all for revenge. Her face was still, her eyes closed. This was the woman he was trying to save. But then his mind twisted. He started laughing, asking himself if he was really there for revenge. He held up the syringe, complaining that the drug was messing with his head and causing him pain. He jammed the needle into his neck, screaming that he'd almost forgiven Rain for a second. His body started to twist and swell. He knew he had to finish this before the side effects kicked in. The creature promised this would be the end. Rain could only stare, completely shocked by what he was seeing. He was sweating, his eyes wide with disbelief. But then, something else caught his attention. A person was falling from the sky. The figure hit the ground hard. It was a woman in armor, and a broken syringe lay beside her. The story jumps back 32 years, to a place called Weirdo Country. In a training yard, a young man was practicing hard with a wooden sword. Another boy with glasses sat nearby, reading a book as he watched his friend. He suddenly looked up and asked Weirdo if he knew why the people in their country had so little mana. This was Ben, back when he was 17 years old. Weirdo seemed annoyed by the question, asking why he would even need to know that. And this was Weirdo, also 17. Ben told him to listen, reminding him that as the next successor to the country, it was something he should definitely know. Ben just smiled, confident he was about to make his point. Weirdo kept hitting the training dummy, yelling that Ben was going to tell him anyway, so it didn't matter if he was listening. Ben just laughed, telling Weirdo he knew him well. Weirdo finally stopped, out of breath. He told Ben to just get on with it. He stood there, waiting to hear the answer, so Ben began to explain. He said that mana was completely different from physical strength. It was delicate, and the more emotional someone was, the smoother their mana would flow. He was getting all of this from a book called The Essence of Magic. The problem, he continued, was their country. People were so tied up in rules and being self-conscious that they always suppressed their emotions. This constant pressure, he explained, was like being tied up and watched by everyone. He said that was the exact reason why his people couldn't have much mana. It was like the container for their mana was just too small, and because of their culture, they had no way to make it bigger. But Weirdo didn't seem to care. He argued that mana was a curse for wizards, and that their people's true power and identity was physical strength. He looked completely serious when he said it. Ben just laughed, telling him him he sounded as lame as a politician. Weirdo turned back, clearly irritated, and warned Ben that he was pushing his luck. Weirdo told him to drop his useless magic research. He tossed a wooden sword on the ground and challenged Ben to a spar instead. The two of them started sparring right away. Almost instantly, Weirdo saw the huge gap in Ben's defense. With a powerful yell, he swung his sword. Ben went down hard, crying out in pain. Weirdo announced the score. It was 123 to 43. Ben just stared up at him, completely exhausted. The difference in their strength was obvious. That's when a woman named Elise showed up, watching from the side. As Ben walked away, his master called out, criticizing his lack of endurance despite his talent. Ben just scratched his head and admitted that he didn't enjoy swordsmanship, but the master insisted it was only because he hadn't reached the level where it becomes fun yet. Elise, on the other hand, looked like she was having a great time. The master told Ben to look at WIRDO as an example of someone who is truly having fun. Elise playfully punched Weirdo in the chest, but he just stood there, looking completely serious. Turns out, Weirdo wasn't enjoying it one bit either, but a voice from the side cut in, disagreeing with the master. The person claimed it wasn't about fun. Ben just didn't have any talent for the sword. Ben spun around, furious, demanding to know who said that. The master just laughed, saying Ben's outburst almost made him forget to introduce someone. A woman with dark hair watched from nearby, looking amused by the whole thing. He announced that starting today, Ben would have a new sparring opponent. He called her his special student, Elise, and there she was, a girl with white blonde hair, holding a wooden sword and looking completely calm. Elise just laughed. She didn't think they could win, even if both of them attacked her at the same time. Ben couldn't believe what he was hearing. He yelled out, calling her a mere woman. His eyes were practically glowing with rage as he gripped his practice sword. He shouted that he couldn't let her disrespect slide. Elise stopped dead in her tracks, planting her sword into the ground. She asked him a single question. Her voice was filled with rage as she repeated his words back to him. Did he really just say a mere woman? That was a mistake. With a furious roar, she swung her sword so hard the air itself seemed to crackle with power. Ben and his friend could only stare, their eyes wide with total disbelief. A moment later, they were both lying on the ground, completely beaten. They made a new rule for themselves. Starting today, that phrase was officially banned. As Ben recovered, he realized something about Elise. She wasn't like the other nobles he knew. He couldn't quite describe it, but she had a simple, pleasant charm that was completely different. He just laid there, thinking it all over. Suddenly, Ben called out to his friend, Weirdo. He told him he'd finally figured out his dream. Weirdo asked him what he was talking about. Ben looked up at the sky and said it plainly. He was going to marry Elise. Weirdo shot up, completely shocked by the announcement, but Ben just smiled, asking him why he was so surprised. Weirdo finally managed to speak, telling Ben that was a pretty big dream to suddenly have. He looked genuinely worried, a bead of sweat running down his face. He reminded Ben that Elise had said she wasn't interested in any man weaker than her. Weirdo didn't hold back. He told Ben he was terrible at swordsmanship and should just give up on the idea. But Ben wasn't having it. He promised that from this moment on, things would be different. His face lit up with a huge, determined grin. He was ready to work, and he meant it. Ben immediately started training with a fire he'd never shown before. The training was brutal, lasting for what felt like an eternity. He pushed himself to the absolute limit, swinging his swords over and over again. He trained until he couldn't even stand. An insane amount of time had passed, but even after collapsing, he forced himself back to his feet. Turns out, his friend Weirdo was right there with him, pushing himself just as hard. He was panting, completely wiped out, but he still had a smile on his face. That's when Elise showed up. She looked over at Weirdo, asking if he was sure he didn't want to spar, but it was Ben who answered from the ground. He quietly said that he did. He looked up, his voice filled with longing, and said he wanted to spar with her. Weirdo turned down the offer, saying he was busy with official work. He had a friendly smile on his face as he said it, but for Ben, swordsmanship brought back a harsh memory. His father yelling, furious that even after being allowed to train, he was still losing. He remembered standing before his father, the lord of Weirdo country. Ben had tried to explain, quietly admitting that he didn't think he had any talent for the sword. He looked down, completely defeated, but his father didn't want to hear it. He just threw his cup, hitting Ben right in the head. His father's voice echoed in his memory, calling him incompetent. This was Leonardo Weirdo, the ruler of the country, and Ben's father. Covered in whatever was in the cup, Ben could only apologize. That's where the memory ended. Back in the present, Ben sat alone in the pouring rain. Someone walked up behind him, telling him he should go inside. He just told them to leave him alone, but they weren't having it. They yelled back, completely refusing to believe he was fine. Suddenly, a girl with white hair grabbed him from behind. Ben was shocked. It was Elise. She grinned, asking how anyone could possibly be okay when they looked so sad. She told him he didn't know how to enjoy life, and that he needed to follow her. She just grabbed him and started pulling him through the rain. Ben didn't even have time to argue. Then, the memory shifted to someone else. This was Weirdo, and he was watching Elise from a distance. He just couldn't figure out how she could be smiling all the time. He started to wonder, was she this happy just because she was with him? The more he thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. That's when a new idea started to form in his head. What if it wasn't Ben she had feelings for? What if it was him? The thought alone was enough to make him feel like the happiest guy in the world. He felt like he was on top of the world. Sometime later, at the training ground, people were talking. A rumor rumor was going around that Ben had confessed to Elise, and she turned him down. They couldn't believe the two weren't dating, and Weirdo heard every word. The news hit him. Ben got dumped? A single thought crossed his mind. Maybe he still had a chance. He was sure of it now. He was right all along about Elise. Without wasting another second, he took off running. He was sure of it. She felt the same way he did. He had to tell Elise that he liked her. No, it was more than that. He loved her. He decided he didn't care about his father's disapproval. He just kept running, his mind completely made up. He was even willing to give up his own family. As long as he had her by his side, nothing else mattered. Finally, he arrived at a house, panting as he leaned against the door. He thought that as long as he had her, he would be the happiest man alive. He was completely out of breath, his heart pounding. Someone inside heard him and walked over to open the door. The door creaked open, but what Ben saw wasn't what he expected. His face twisted in horror. A cold voice called out his name. The story flashes back to the day before. Ben was confronting Elise, asking why she rejected him when she'd admitted she had feelings for him too. He reminded her that he'd trained hard just because she said she liked stronger guys. He tried to convince her that even though he wasn't the best, he was still winning sometimes. He begged her to just think about it. But then, Elise's body erupted in a wave of blue energy. Ben just stared, completely stunned by the sudden power. She looked at her hands and explained the truth. She was born with a body overflowing with mana. The problem was, if she let it build up, it would destroy her body from the inside. So every now and then, she had to release it all at once. She told him she always did it where no one could see. But she knew that one day, someone would find out. With a sad smile, she admitted she wasn't brave enough to turn someone she liked into the partner of a criminal. That was the real reason she had to say no. But Ben didn't back away. He stepped forward and pulled her into a hug, right into the middle of all that dangerous energy. Elise just froze, completely shocked. She panicked, yelling at him to stop. She tried to warn him what would happen if her overflowing mana touched him, but Ben wasn't listening. He calmly stated that he was the only magic scholar of the Weirdo family. He held her close and told her that because of his knowledge, he was the only person who could solve her problem. And then he made a promise. He would only love her forever. The story cuts away. Weirdo had finally arrived at the house. He whispered Elise's name, his face filled with horror. He was staring into the room, and what he saw completely broke him. He saw them together, Ben and Elise, smiling and happy with a small dog. It was the future he'd just lost. Weirdo watched from the darkness, completely broken. Everything he had just seen, everything he had just lost, it all flashed through his mind. He saw the life he could have had with her, the simple, happy moments that were now impossible. He remembered begging his father, willing to do anything to change his fate, and he remembered her smile, the one that made it all worth it. But then, the happy memories shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of her pain. Ben rushed to her side, yelling her name and asking if she was all right. She tried to calm him down, explaining that her mana had been getting stronger lately, causing this to happen more often. She told him not to worry, but he was worried. Her words only made him realize how much danger she was really in. He told Elise how scared he was when she collapsed. He decided he wouldn't leave his lab for a while. It was time to keep his promise. He just needed her to do one thing, wait for him. He was sure it wouldn't take long. He'd found something, an element that could make her body stronger. He begged her to let him find a cure so they could live a long life together. He just couldn't give up on his love. But his experiments, they were creating monsters. Far from the lab, Weirdo stood completely stunned. He could only call out Elise's name. Elise turned to face him, a black wolf at her side. She told him she could smell him from a distance. Then she asked if he had feelings for her too. Weirdo's face turned red with anger. He screamed that they were doing fine, that they were happy before all of this. Elise looked surprised. She explained that she never thought of him like that, and she was sorry if he misunderstood. Elise's hand glowed with blue energy. She raised a serious question for him. She asked Weirdo if he could truly love her, even if her magic made her a criminal. She pointed out that he knew all of this, but chose to ignore it. Weirdo yelled back, admitting he was too afraid to stand up to his father back then. He tried to insist that things were different now, but he was completely overwhelmed. A loud hiccup cut him off. He couldn't even speak straight. He fell to his knees, covering his face in shame as he apologized. Elise just stood there, watching him fall apart. The memory changed. It shifted to a dry, cracked land where a lone person worked endlessly under the sun. The memory shifted. It showed a land baked dry by the sun, where people worked themselves to the bone just to survive. That desperation quickly boiled over into rage. An angry mob gathered outside the castle, demanding their lord come out and make it rain. From a window high above, a man with a white beard pointed out the crowd to Weirdo. He called them their people. He admitted that while he wished it would rain, he wasn't a god. He couldn't control the weather. Weirdo looked down, completely lost. He asked his father what they were supposed to do. His father then asked him a question. Did Weirdo think the people hated him? He shook his head. He explained that the people didn't need a solution. They just needed someone to release their anger on, someone to take all the blame. The father grinned, saying there was someone who could take his place. Weirdo, confused, asked who he meant. His father's smile was terrifying. He said it was Elise, the girl Weirdo had just confessed his love to. Weirdo's face went pale. His father actually thanked him, saying that even an useless son could be helpful sometimes. He grabbed Weirdo by the collar, explaining that if his son hadn't said anything, he never would have known a witch lived in their land. Weirdo was horrified. He couldn't believe his father would use the woman he loved as a sacrifice. His father didn't listen. He just slapped him hard across the face. He called his son an idiot, yelling that a future ruler couldn't be controlled by his feelings. He said that if he didn't teach Werdo a lesson now, he'd cause a lot of trouble later. Then he screamed for the guards. He ordered them to throw his own son in prison. Werdo wasn't staying locked up. He escaped through the window, climbing down a rope towards the town square below. He knew he was going against his father's orders, but he decided he wouldn't listen, at least not this time. He pushed his way through the people, thinking that even if he couldn't have her, he would never stand by and watch her die. And then he saw her. The guards had already cornered Elise and were closing in. She spotted him in the crowd and screamed his name, begging him to save her. The people in the crowd recognized him and started to whisper amongst themselves. They wondered if the Lord's son was helping the witch. The whispers quickly turned into shouts. The mob decided that if he was an ally of the witch, he should be executed too, no matter who his father was. He heard every word. A furious look crossed his face as he prepared to fight. Elise's voice cut through the noise, screaming his name, but the mob didn't care. They were ready to tear him apart. In that instant, a horrible vision filled his mind. He saw Elise, her eyes empty and lifeless. He saw the guards closing in on her, while the crowd just stood by and watched. He saw himself, broken and bleeding, holding her body after he had failed to save her. The thought of that future made something inside him snap. A raw scream of pain and fury tore from his throat, and just like that, the vision shattered into pieces. Back in reality, a small creature was sent flying. A voice screamed Elise's name in horror. It was Hansel. His eyes burned with rage as he roared at the person responsible, telling them to get lost. He didn't just throw a punch. In his mind, this was a one-armed dumbbell press. The punch landed with incredible force, completely crushed. The guy he hit went down instantly. It was over in a single strike. Hansel wasn't done. His movements became simpler, more direct. He decided his next move would be a bench press. The small creature that had been sent flying screamed Elise's name in absolute terror. Hansel was already moving again, striking with brutal force. But then someone grabbed him from behind, desperately screaming at him to let go. Hansel didn't even try to break free. He just started pushing against the ground, turning the struggle into a set of reps. He clenched his fist, focusing all his power into his next move. Then, using the person on his back as weight, he performed a perfect pullover, sending them flying. He didn't stop there. To him, this wasn't a fight. It was a cable pushdown exercise. He thought to himself, no breaks, 10 sets of 15 reps. The result was devastating. Watching from a distance was another muscular man with blue hair. He stretched his shoulder and said it was time to go take care of the zombies. But before he could move, a swirling tornado of bones erupted from the ground right in front of him. The man just looked annoyed. He recognized the creature, muttering about it being that puppy again. The bones came together to form a gigantic monster that towered over him. He just smirked, looking up at the beast. He mocked it, asking if it was trying to rescue its family, and calling the attempt cute. The bone monster's attack wasn't over. It created massive tornadoes that swept people up into the sky, carrying them away. A woman with long red hair watched them disappear into the distance. The blue-haired man spoke to her from behind. He told her to take the girl, saying he didn't care what happened to a loser. Count Werdo watched the tornadoes fly away. He was furious, yelling that they couldn't just let Ben leave like this. He warned that Ben would come back for revenge. Then he screamed at Line, ordering her to chase him down and kill him. Line stood at a crossroads, her mind on Count Werdo's command. With a look of pure rage, she drew her sword and took off running. She swore she would kill him. Far away, a young man stood on a bridge. He saw her charging straight for him and had no idea why she looked like she was coming after him. Line was moving so fast, she was leaving craters in the ground, but she suddenly stopped, confused by what she saw ahead. Her face twisted with rage. She screamed, demanding to know what they had done to her aunt. Count Werdo panicked, yelling for someone to stop Line. The silver-haired woman just watched, annoyed that their target was getting away again, but someone was already moving to block her path. Two men stood in her way. They were her allies, and they begged her to stop. She didn't listen, leaping right over them. She yelled that they couldn't stop her. They shouted back that they knew, but they had to try anyway. Without hesitating, they launched themselves after her. They caught up and grabbed onto her sword, using their combined weight to pull her back. The muscular one yelled out the name of the move he was using, but Line wasn't just being held back. She was preparing a move, using their resistance to build power. With a massive burst of force, she shot into the air like a rocket. The two men who tried to stop her could only watch in disbelief. She landed perfectly, right in front of the silver-haired woman. The woman swung her sword to block, but then she realized her mistake. Line wasn't aiming for her at all. She was going for the Count. Line didn't even bother to block properly. She just stopped the sword with her hand, pinning the woman down. But just as she was about to move past her, someone else stepped in. It was one of her own allies. He clenched his fist, ready to do what he had to. Without any warning, he grabbed her and threw her back with all his strength. The man, Blog, told his ally Line to stop. She looked up at him, completely stunned that he would get in her way. Line had landed perfectly. She stood over Blog, who was still on the ground after throwing her. She looked him over, commenting that while he used to just have a pretty face, he had a good body now too. But then she mocked him, asking if he really thought he could hit anyone with movements that slow. Her words clearly hit their mark. Blog just stared down at his hand, sweating. He couldn't believe it. He really thought he had gotten stronger. Ignoring Blog, Line turned back to her main target. She lunged at Werdo, screaming that he had to take responsibility for what happened to her family. All he could do was apologize, but she didn't want an apology. She told him to just die and brought her sword down with everything she had. Werdo let out a terrified scream scream. But just as Lena's sword was about to come down, something stopped her. A hand clamped down on her leg, holding her in place with incredible force. Werdo looked up and shouted his name in relief. It was Hansol. Line was completely helpless. Her own attack turned against her. But Hansol wasn't thinking about saving anyone. To him, this was just a cable pull-down exercise. He started doing reps, slamming her into the ground again and again. After a few reps, he stopped, looking a little worried. He explained that he'd just been fighting someone tough and couldn't control his strength. He looked down at Line's motionless body, wondering if he'd accidentally killed her. Hansol figured she wasn't dead, but she definitely wasn't moving. Sometime later, inside the Werdo castle, a woman shot up in bed, screaming Werdo's name. She looked around, totally confused. A young boy standing by her bed let her know she was finally awake. The boy explained they were in a guest room at the castle. He said that Hansol had asked him to look after her and offered to get her anything she needed, but she only had one question. She needed to know where Count Werdo was, though she didn't expect the kid to tell her. To her surprise, the boy told her everything. He said the Count was getting personal training from Hansol and even offered to take her right to them. She immediately agreed. She needed to see this for herself. The boy led her deep into the mountains. She couldn't believe the Count would be in a place like this, but the kid just told her he was. She was sure he was lying. Who would train in such a dangerous place? The boy just told her to trust him. She felt like an idiot. There was no way he'd lead someone who tried to kill the Count right to him. But that's when the boy pointed ahead, shouting that he could see Hansol. She couldn't believe it. They were actually here. The boy started waving, calling out Hansol's name. Down below, someone was gasping for air, completely exhausted. A pair of hands trembled on the ground, barely able to hold on. A weak voice called out Lina's name. It was Count Werdo. And then she saw the full picture. Hansol was sitting on a heavy cart, and Count Werdo was on his hands and knees, pulling him like an animal. The system called this workout Santa Claus bear walking. Hansol was practically glowing. Turns out, something Werdo said had inspired him. The system announced that new skills were being created. The system announced that Weirdo's cries had triggered something. A new skill had been gained. Down below, Weirdo was desperately begging Rain for help. From a cliff above, Rain and the boy watched it all happen. The system confirmed the new skill was called Trainer Mind, and that it was fusing with his Calm skill. Hansol looked down at Weirdo with a big, happy smile, but his words were terrifying. He asked if Weirdo liked the exercise so much that he wanted to die. That's when the fusion finished. Hansol gained an epic passive skill, Psychopath Trainer. His face twisted into a crazed grin as he asked again if Weirdo really wanted to die. Weirdo was completely terrified. He couldn't understand what the hell Hansol was saying. He screamed for Rain at the top of his lungs, telling her that Hansol was going to kill him. But Rain didn't look worried. She looked completely pleased, almost glowing with happiness. Weirdo let out another scream. Turns out he wasn't alone anymore. A whole group of people were now doing the same workout, all pulling carts right behind him. Far away from Hansol's training grounds, life in the kingdom continued. Inside the castle, a serious meeting was taking place. The man at the head of the table saw that everyone had arrived and decided to begin. An official unrolled a scroll and announced the first topic. He reminded everyone that an invasion led by someone named Ben had killed many important people. He then mentioned that General Rian was summoned from exile to help, but she refused, saying she had other work. The official looked up from his scroll with a smug expression, asking the group what they intended to do about it. The leader changed the subject. He brought up Handerd, the hero of the war, then proposed giving a title to Prince Liper, asking the others for their opinion. Two of the other men immediately voiced their approval, agreeing that it was a good idea. The official moved on to the next topic. He explained that after seeing Hansol in action, people were flocking to the training grounds to learn bodybuilding, so they created a brand new unit to handle it, the Bodybuilding Sword Unit. He added that they even had one of Hansol's ghouls acting as a temporary coach for the unit, and asked the leader what he thought. The leader was ecstatic. He thought it was fantastic news. He then turned to Hansol and thanked him for his help in strengthening the country's defenses. But Hansol held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The room went quiet. Hansol leaned over the table, his expression serious. The leader started to sweat, nervously asking what was wrong. Hansol asked if there was something bothering him, his voice low and dangerous. Before the leader could answer, Hansol grabbed his head and slammed it straight through the wooden table. The leader collapsed to the floor, stunned. A guard immediately raised his spear, ready to fight back. But Hansol's expression was just pure irritation. He'd had a bad feeling about this whole meeting, and he only knew one way to fix a bad attitude: personal training. He pictured his ghouls, their backs perfectly straight, always ready for the next set. The other men in the room started to panic, telling the guard to lower his weapon before he made Hansol even angrier. Hansol just smiled at them. He asked if any of them wanted to get some personal training too. The man who'd been threatened slumped in his chair. He was terrified, wondering why these things always happened to him. But he quickly pulled himself together. He announced that they would keep the meeting short and simple, telling everyone to get straight to the point. Weirdo was practically in tears, cheering for the Count. He thought the man was being incredibly cool. An official moved on to the third item on the list. It was about a warrior named Rain. The man explained that Rain was suspected of attacking the highest Count, but because the country was in a tough spot and the Count himself asked for mercy, they decided to hold off on the sentence. He then announced her punishment. She was to be banished from the country. The Count then spoke directly to Rain, admitting that he knew she didn't like him. And then he made a shocking offer. If she didn't agree with the decision, he was giving her the right to kill him. The other nobles just stared, completely confused by what the Count had just offered. The Count's legs were shaking, but he insisted that he deserved to be killed. But Rain just looked at him calmly and refused. That just made the Count even more desperate. He screamed that a coward like him didn't deserve to be a leader, and that she had the right to judge him. He was begging for anyone, absolutely anyone, to kill him. That's when Weirdo spoke up. He asked the Count if this was all just a big plan to get out of work so he could focus on exercising. For a second, he looked thrilled with his own idea, but then he quickly tried to take it back. But the other nobles had heard everything. They looked at each other, realizing this might be their chance to take over. The other nobles saw their chance. They whispered that the Count was too weak to rule anymore, and that taking his place would be easy. But Weirdo was completely inspired. He told Hansel that he didn't know if this was good for the country, but he was moved by his passion. He flexed, shouting that anyone who wanted to be a leader had to improve their stamina first, and he would help them. The other nobles immediately changed their minds. They started praising the Count, saying he was the only one fit to lead. They were clearly terrified of Weirdo's new training plan. The man running the meeting screamed for them to move on to the next topic. After the meeting, Weirdo made a promise to Hansel. He would build the special exercise equipment he'd been asking for. But there was a huge problem. The country's technology wasn't good enough to build it. Weirdo explained that only a legendary being, Behemoth, the spirit king of the earth, could make something like that. The biggest issue was that no one even knew if Behemoth was real. That's when Rain spoke up, claiming she was close with the spirits. She explained that she had lived with elves before, so she knew how to talk to spirits. Hansel was thrilled. He grabbed her hand and asked her to lead him to Behemoth right away. She agreed, but she had one condition. In return, she wanted his help getting revenge. Weirdo immediately thought she meant him and offered his life as payback, but Rain quickly corrected him. Her revenge had nothing to do with him. She explained that she was after the people who destroyed her entire family, an organization known as the Black Wizards. Miles away, a shadowy group was having its own problems. One of them complained that a new variable was making things too difficult to handle. He swore to himself that he wouldn't make the same mistakes again. In another part of the forest, a woman with orange hair laughed at a strange, puppet-like creature. She told the creature, Ben, that someone was disappointed in him. Another one of her companions chimed in, saying that's why status is so important. She took a bite of a strange, fan-like object. She thought to herself that things were much better now that Elise was gone. But before she could finish her thought, someone else arrived. A figure with a ridiculously muscular arm came flying down, swinging a massive glowing sword right at them. Instead of being afraid, the entire group looked thrilled. Their faces twisted into terrifying, crazed smiles. Deep in the forest, a strange structure with a glowing green gem pulsed with energy. A flock of black birds took flight, scattering away from the light. The place was far from any civilization, hidden in the dark woods. A warning sign with a skull was posted nearby. This was not a place you were supposed to go. A figure stepped through the dark woods, snapping a twig underfoot. A voice whispered that the long search was finally over. It was a muscular woman with red hair, holding a sword. She had a confident look on her face as she named her target, the Illuminati. Fight started with a massive punch. A man with blue hair slammed his fist right into the creature's chest. His face was twisted with rage. He gritted his teeth and promised he would kill them, but his enemies weren't scared at all. The woman in the blue dress laughed, telling her companion that Kaha looked cute when he was mad. Her amusement faded into a cold smile. She looked up, announcing that she had made her choice. Her eyes glowed a terrifying red. She declared that their new plan was to completely get rid of someone named Elise. Back in the fight, Kaha was preparing his next move. He held a handful of vials, and strange green veins started crawling up his arm. The creature knocked him to the ground, but Kaha just laid there, smiling. His eyes were glowing, like he was enjoying this. Then he shot forward, unleashing a huge wave of energy as he charged his opponent again. A creepy, shadowy creature with glowing green eyes spoke directly to Kaha. It asked him if this was supposed to be a betrayal. It started laughing, confirming to itself that Kaha had betrayed them. The creature laughed like a maniac. It promised to go tell someone about the decision that had been made. But Kaha wasn't done. His hand glowed with power as he reached out, declaring that the creature was his. Suddenly, a huge, muscular arm grabbed him by the head. Kaha grunted, struggling against the immense pressure. He screamed as the arm tossed him away, like he was nothing. Miles away, two strange puppet-like figures were running through the woods. One of them laughed, saying that someone named Ben had betrayed them too, and that he knew absolutely everything. With a twisted grin, the doll asked what they should do with Ben's experiment diary. The large puppet creature lunged forward, claiming the diary was his. His companion, a woman with bright orange hair, laughed at him. She teased that a lot of people wanted it and asked if he was really sure he could get it. But a new voice cut through the dark. It calmly stated that they would be the one to take it. The two of them stopped, confused. A figure leaped through the sky, silhouetted against the moon. A system window appeared, showing her skill. Sword for bugs. Her sword came down with a massive burst of light. The two creatures screamed as the attack hit them head on. The attacker, a woman with red hair, landed smoothly on the ground. The large creature looked up from the dirt, completely stunned by the sudden assault. The red-haired woman stood her ground, looking around at the dark forest. She casually mentioned that the place was full of weeds. Suddenly, a different monster appeared. It was a round, straw-like creature holding a scythe, and it was glowing with a strange green power. It began to use a skill called Song of the Rotten Forest. Green energy and dark musical notes filled the air around it. A wave of dark, corrupt energy shot out, tearing across the ground straight for the woman. The ground itself seemed to crack and splinter under the force of the spell. But that was just the beginning. The energy rose up and formed a gigantic monster, a rotten wood symphony that towered over her. The creature swung its massive energy arm down to crush her. In response, she readied a combat skill of her own. As their powers clashed, she thought about her home country. She explained that there, people clear the weeds from graves to show respect for their ancestors. And that's exactly what she was doing now. She swung her blade, explaining that it was just an old, boring tradition. The monster glared back, but she just admitted that she was too old-fashioned to just ignore it. Her eyes blazed with power as she activated her skill. Sword for bugs. In a flash of light, her blade sliced straight through the creature. It was torn apart before it even had a chance to react. The creature let out one last cry as it was completely erased. Somewhere else, an older man with a gray beard was cutting down tall grass with a huge blade. A woman with him wasn't happy about it. She warned him that the spirits wouldn't like it, but he just said he was clearing a path for Hansol. The blue-haired man told his older companion to get behind him and follow along with walking lunges. The bearded man eagerly agreed, but after a while, he started to get worried. He asked their guide, Lan, if she was sure they were going the right way, because it felt like they were just walking in circles. Line just told him to wait. She explained that the path of spirits wasn't like an ordinary road, and she was right. They suddenly arrived in a clearing. The blue-haired man was thrilled, pointing out that the soft ground was perfect for jumping squats. He didn't waste a second. He ordered everyone to start with 20 jumping squats. Line took a deep breath, preparing herself for the exercise. As the count began, she slowly exhaled, focusing all of her energy. She kept her eyes closed, completely in the zone. As she trained, she felt a connection to everything around her, even sensing the birds chirping in the trees. As she focused, she could feel the world around her responding. The flowers began to bloom, and the air itself felt different. This was the path of the spirits she had been talking about. A blast of colorful energy surrounded them, and just like that, they had arrived. But the workout wasn't over. Someone screamed, completely exhausted after the 20th rep. The trainer wasn't happy. He told them they weren't supposed to count that last one, and since they all heard Wordo, there was a penalty. With a big smile, he ordered them to get it together and do it all again, this time for 40 reps. The trainees screamed out the new number, 40 reps. But that wasn't good enough for the trainer. He screamed that he couldn't hear them and upped the number to 60. They all roared back the new number, pushing themselves to the absolute limit. He was about to start the count, but suddenly, a bright light flashed all around him. A woman's voice told them to let the wind guide their bodies. The trainer looked around, realizing he was floating in the air. The red-haired woman explained that they had entered the spirit realm, the land where spirits live. She called it their motherland, Gaia. They were all floating through a sky filled with petals, looking down on a whole new world with a giant volcano at its center. One of the ghouls started to shout to Hansol, amazed by what he was seeing, but his excitement quickly turned to panic. They weren't floating anymore. The whole group came crashing down, hitting the sand hard. One of them cried out to Hansol, complaining that his body felt incredibly heavy, but Halsin was thrilled. He said it was the perfect condition for doing squats. That's when two massive stone figures began to move, revealing a path forward. Halsin looked inside with a grin, amazed that they had their own home gym. He explained that this was Behemoth, the legendary spirit they had been searching for. A whole group of those stone figures stood waiting for them, their red eyes glowing in the darkness. They looked like guards, completely blocking the way forward, but Hansol didn't care. He yelled out that he was ready to meet him. The stone figures didn't waste any time. One of them raised its massive fist, ready to attack. It brought its fist down with incredible force, aiming to crush them all in one go. But Hansol was right there. He caught the massive stone fist with his bare hands, stopping it completely. The ghouls stared in disbelief, shouting out to check if he was all right. That's when the other stone figures started to move. It wasn't just one enemy, it was an entire army. Before he could react, another fist slammed down from the other side. He was trapped, being crushed between the two of them. He let out a huge scream as the pressure became almost unbearable. But this wasn't a scream of pain. He was thrilled. To him, this was just progressive overload, the perfect workout. He let out a huge roar, pushing back against the weight of all the stone figures pressing down on him. The ghouls could only watch in terror, screaming his name as the ground shook from the impact. The stone figures trembled, putting all their power into crushing him. The shaking was so intense, the ghouls thought it was an earthquake. But then, one of them shouted that it wasn't the ground. It was the sound of their master's muscles. Hansol just gritted his teeth, completely focused. Suddenly, his muscles started to expand like crazy. He wasn't asking for help. He was screaming for them to increase the weight. That's when a skill activated, Heavy Blunt X10. A strange purple energy suddenly surrounded one of the ghouls. Turns out, Hansol had lifted the entire pile of stone giants onto his back. He wasn't fighting them anymore. He was using them to do squats, counting out the reps one by one. The woman stared, completely confused by what she was seeing. The ghoul just smiled and explained that it was Hansol's leg day. She had absolutely no idea what that meant. Another member of their group stepped in to clarify. He explained that leg day was just the day for training legs. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the sky, calling them interesting ants. They all looked up, trying to figure out who was speaking. The voice introduced itself as Behemoth, the ruler of this entire spirit realm. It demanded to know their reason for being there, but Hansol wasn't listening. He just roared out his 15th rep. That's when one of the ghouls, empowered by Hansel's skill, suddenly charged forward. He ran straight for the massive stone creature, ready to face it head on. Instead of answering, Hansel just bent down and started drinking water right from the ocean. The voice boomed again, demanding to know why they had come to his realm. But Hansel was in his own world. He explained that water is the most important thing for growing muscles. He noted that normal seawater has too much sodium, but this water tasted different. It was perfect for hydration. Hearing this, the ghouls went wild. They realized the water could help them grow their muscles and yelled for everyone to jump in. The whole group started splashing around in the water. Behemoth's voice echoed, completely confused and angry, wondering who these people were. Suddenly, a young man appeared, smiling. He seemed to have calmed down and said it was finally time to talk, but his smile vanished in an instant. He couldn't believe they had the nerve to drink water while he was talking, calling them the rudest ants he'd ever seen. Behemoth was done talking. He announced that he was going to teach them some manners. His stone golems began to move, their red eyes glowing. He explained that the entire place was a giant, living maze. He told them that without a spirit's help, they'd never even find their way in, and even if they managed that, he had golems waiting for them inside. He challenged them to try and reach him, doubting they could ever make it through the shifting maze and his guards. But one of the trainees, a red-haired woman, just got into a starting position, ready to move. She called out her technique, the breaststroke exercise, and shot into the sky like a rocket. Behemoth wasn't going to let her get away that easily. He used his power to increase the gravity, trying to pull her back down. The heavy gravity was too much. She started falling right out of the sky. She hit the ground hard, unable to fly anymore. She realized she was stuck. The gravity was so strong she couldn't even jump. But then she heard a strange noise coming from nearby. It was Hansel's crew. They weren't struggling at all. Instead of seeing the gravity as a problem, they were using it for a workout. The entire group was on the ground doing push-ups, counting out every single rep. For them, this wasn't a trap. It was just the perfect condition for another set. A voice boomed, calling them idiots. It explained that this was the house of the spirit of land, a place of intense gravity. But the ghouls just kept counting their reps. The voice mocked them, saying they couldn't just break the walls with their bare hands. They just kept pushing, counting out another rep. But then Hansel just smashed right through the wall with a huge smile on his face. One of his followers looked at the hole, satisfied. He realized the stone was actually pretty easy to break. He shouted at the others, telling them to use the spot Hansel broke as a starting point to break the rest of the wall. Turns out, he was right. The ghouls started tearing the wall down easily, but their relief didn't last long. They looked up and saw the real problem. Massive stone golems were blocking their path, their red eyes glowing in the dark. That's when a system window appeared. It showed a combat skill, honeyed tongue with a heart of stone. One of the women in their group leaped into action. She flew through the air and drove her sword straight into the golem's glowing red eye. Her voice echoed, explaining that the eyes were the golem's core. Breaking them would shut the creatures down for good. With the weak spot revealed, the ghouls swarmed the rest of the stone figures. The voice controlling them started to panic. Behemoth's voice roared in fury. In the distance, the volcano exploded, shaking the entire realm. Hansel just looked up calmly and asked if this was where they'd find Behemoth. The woman pointed ahead. She said the spirits told her they had to lift whatever was in front of them to meet the legendary creature. They all looked at the challenge. It was a giant stone platform attached to a single rope. Someone wondered how they could possibly move something that massive. Hansel looked like he was about to just smash it, but one of the ghouls yelled for him to wait, pointing out the rope connected to the platform. Hansel stared at the rope. It suddenly hit him that it had been 11 months since he'd left Earth. He looked up and saw a pulley hanging from the roof. It was a familiar sight, one that reminded him of home, and he realized he'd been hiding how much he missed it. Seeing that simple object brought all those feelings rushing back. Tears started to well up in his eyes, but his sadness vanished in an instant. It wasn't just a pulley. It was a lat pull-down machine. His mind just exploded with everything he knew about it. This was a lat pull-down machine, invented back in 1960 by an American gym coach named Andrew Memel. The coach realized that the movement was similar to a lying lat pull-down, so he created the machine to help people do that same exercise more safely and get better results. And over the years, it had evolved into all these different designs. He tried to hold back the tears. He told himself he couldn't cry. It would make him lose muscle. His followers just stared, completely lost. They had no idea what a lat pull-down machine even was. One of the men nervously asked Hansel if it was some kind of trap, but Hansel just smiled. He told him it definitely wasn't a trap and walked right towards it. This was the perfect chance for a lesson. Hansel turned to his followers and asked them to list every back exercise they'd learned so far. One of the ghouls piped up, listing them off. One-armed dumbbell rows, sipas, pull-ups, barbell rows, and Romanian deadlifts. Hansel sat down and explained that they could do pull-ups because they had each other for support. But most of the time, people at the gym train alone. And for those people, he said, the best way to train for pull-ups is to use the lat pull-down machine. He told them the posture is similar to a pull-up, but because you can control the weight, it's loved by everyone from beginners to experts. It specifically targets two key back muscles. He warned them, though, that if you lose focus. It's easy to make the mistake of pulling with your arms and shoulders instead. He figured since the machine was right there, he might as well show them how it's done. His followers went wild, cheering him on. He started with the first step, adjusting the pad. It has to be set at the right height to keep your body from getting lifted off the seat. He moved on to the second step, explaining the grip. He told them to hold the bar slightly wider than their shoulders and make sure their legs were locked in place under the pad. For the third step, he stressed the importance of pulling with your back muscles, not your arms. He said to keep the bar straight and your core tight. Finally, he showed them what not to do. He warned them against leaning back too far or using momentum to cheat the movement. He noticed one of his followers getting ready to try. He told the ghoul that the weight was probably too heavy for now, so he should just watch. The follower eagerly agreed, excited to see the master work. With the lesson finished, Hansol pulled down on the bar. His back muscles exploded with power. Turns out the whole thing was a mechanism. The massive stone wall lifted, revealing a passage. Someone shouted for the group to head inside. As they walked, one of the ghouls seemed worried. He asked his friend why Hansol was doing a back workout when it was supposed to be leg day. The other ghoul just smiled. He explained that Hansol's stamina was on a completely different level than theirs. As the group moved on, one of the men started to worry. He asked how Hansol was supposed to catch up with them if he stayed behind to finish his workout. The ghoul he asked just stammered, completely stumped. He had no idea. But back at the entrance, Hansol wasn't worried at all. He just kept counting his reps, completely in the zone. He finished his last set, grinning from the incredible burn in his muscles. For him, this was better than any reward. Meanwhile, inside the passage, the ghouls faced another heavy stone block. One of them used a skill, channeling all his power. Working together, they lifted the massive slab out of the way. The ghoul at the top yelled back to Hansol, telling him the path was clear. Hansol looked on like a proud father. He told his followers that their lifting strength had gotten way better. With that obstacle cleared, they entered a huge cavern. In the center, a giant stone pot hung from a single, thick rope. The scene suddenly changed, revealing how the machine was powered. It was run by tiny, hard-working creatures. And it wasn't just a few of them. There was a whole factory full of these little guys, running on wheels to keep everything moving. In another section, a group of them jumped up and down on pistons, working together in perfect rhythm. Deeper inside, massive forges burned day and night. It was a huge, complicated system of pipes and conveyor belts, all managed by these little creatures. Back in the present, one of the women in the group was completely charmed. She thought what she was seeing was adorable, but she wasn't looking at the hamsters. She was staring at one of the muscular ghouls. She reached out, wanting to touch his muscles. The ghoul stopped her immediately. He explained that before you apply for a gym, you need a consultation first. You can't just start touching things because you feel like it. Hansol stepped in, agreeing with his follower. He made it clear that you don't just touch people's muscles without asking first. Suddenly, a small, fluffy white creature appeared. It proudly announced that it was Behemoth, the spirit king of Gaia. The group was completely confused. Fatso, the ghoul chief, even muttered that this so-called king was just as fat as he was. The little creature was furious. It screamed at them for daring to compare it to such a lowly being. It declared it was going to punish them right then and there. But before it could do anything, a new figure appeared behind it, laughing. He apologized for watching from the sidelines, saying the whole thing was just too funny. He held up the little white creature. He explained that its name was Lena, and it was a high-class spirit of Gaia. Then, with a confident smirk, he told them that he was the real Behemoth. Behemoth explained that all the little creatures working there were also high-class spirits. He warned them not to treat them like simple animals. Hansol just looked at them and thought to himself, hamster, dog, cat. Behemoth got straight to the point. He said Lena's trial had already proven their strength, so he asked what they wanted from him. Hansol didn't hesitate. He asked if Behemoth could make him some fitness equipment. The Spirit King seemed confident. He said that with enough time and materials, he could make any training machines Hansol wanted. Hansol looked thrilled, but before he could agree, a man stepped forward. He told Hansol not to make that deal. The man bowed respectfully and introduced himself. He was Count Werdo Kaward, the landlord of the Werdo Kingdom. He then turned to Behemoth and asked him to name his price for their request, addressing him as the Great Spirit King. Behemoth seemed impressed by the Count's respectful attitude. He thought for a moment about the offer of payment. The Spirit King explained that his kind had no use for human money. He told the Count that they would need a different kind of payment. Without any hesitation, the Count promised they would give the spirits whatever they wanted. A sly grin spread across Behemoth's face. He had them right where he wanted them. That's when Behemoth laid out his terms. He explained that a nasty, eel-like creature had recently started polluting the land. He warned them that the creature was extremely powerful. Every spirit he had sent to stop it never came back. So, the deal was simple. If they could kill the creature and purify the land, he would grant their request. Before the Count could even respond, Hansol popped up behind him with a huge grin. He accepted the mission on the spot and asked if someone could show them the way. Behemoth explained that until now, he'd only sent middle-class spirits to handle the problem. He decided it was time to find out what was really going on. So, he pointed to a small, fluffy creature named Lena. He ordered her, a highest-class spirit, to go with them as their guide. Lena looked nervous. She tried to make an excuse, saying she had to stay and manage things. But Behemoth wasn't having it. He roared at her, accusing her of doing nothing but eating and sleeping all day. With one last shout, he sent the little spirit tumbling toward Hansol's party. The matter was settled. Far away, a woman with purple hair was running through a forest. It looked like she had stirred up some serious trouble. She stopped dead in her tracks. She hadn't expected so many people to be waiting for her. A strange group of enemies rushed out from the shadows. They shouted her name, General Ryan, and swarmed in to capture her. They all screamed the same name, Oculus, as they grabbed at her from every direction, pulling her to the ground. As Ryan darted through the trees, one of her captors started talking. He spoke about how everything in nature was connected in a complicated way. He asked her if she knew about the kind of animal that isn't afraid of bees and enjoys their honey anyway. He was talking about himself, but she wasn't just going to let them take her. In a flash, she broke free and lashed out at everyone around her. Her attackers screamed as they were cut down. The man in the red hood could only shout her name in anger. That's when she activated a combat skill, Forest of Swords. The attack was so fast and sharp, it could slice a tiny bug clean in half without anyone even seeing the blade. The leader stared in disbelief. He couldn't understand what was happening. His intel never mentioned she was this strong. The sky filled with dozens of glowing golden swords. This was power on a completely different level. They rained down from the sky, a storm of pure energy aimed at the forest below. The attackers could only look up in terror. There was nowhere to run. In an instant, the swords hit the ground. A massive wave of light wiped everything out. When the light faded, only silence remained. Ryan stood alone in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by the bodies of her enemies. She decided it would be a waste to leave just yet. She had a better idea. It was time to go and teach her apprentice a few lessons. Meanwhile, Hansol and his group were with their new guide, Lena. The little spirit started things off by taking a big bite out of a rock. She explained that as a great spirit, she could read the land's memories just by eating its minerals. Hansol thought that was pretty cool. Suddenly, Lena's eyes shot wide open. Hansol got excited, asking if she was seeing something important. Turns out, she was just really happy. She shouted that the rock was delicious. She then admitted she was just kidding. The minerals weren't old enough to hold any long memories. So, she pointed towards some other rocks and demanded they bring her ones that looked really old. Without any hesitation, the ghouls understood what she needed and started moving. They found a big one that looked promising and immediately started digging it out of the ground. Hansol walked over with his arms crossed, asking the ghouls what they were doing. One of them explained that they were just trying to find a good spot to grab the rock so they could carry it. Hansol thought about that for a second. He held up a hand, telling them to stop. He reached down towards the surface of the huge boulder. With a grunt, his fingers dug right into the solid stone, cracking it instantly. His muscles swelled up as he put his strength into it. In just a second, he had carved out a perfect grip with his bare hand. He showed them the new handhold, explaining that's how you grab it comfortably. The ghouls just stared, completely blown away. The training started with a demonstration. A blue-haired man showed them how to do one-arm rows using a massive carved stone. He counted out 8 reps, his muscles straining, and told them it was time to switch arms. One of the trainees, Blog, stepped forward. He pointed to his own giant boulder, asking if it was a good one to use. He got into position for a snatch grip deadlift, wrapping his hands around the stone. In one explosive motion, he pulled the weight up, balanced it, and dropped into an overhead squat. He held it there for a second, perfectly balanced. Then he dropped the weight, signaling the lift was clear. The instructor gave him a thumbs up. He told Blog his posture had improved a lot. Blog grinned, feeling the new strength in his body. He thought to himself that this kind of workout was easy for him now. All around him, the other trainees were getting into it. They started counting their reps out loud, their voices echoing as they lifted the heavy stones. Some were doing carries, others were pressing the weights overhead. The whole group was working in perfect rhythm. Their guide, the little spirit Lena, just stood there watching them. She held a small rock in her paws, looking completely baffled. Hansol watched the chaos from a distance. He started to wonder if they had completely forgotten what he'd originally asked them to do. That's when Lena opened her mouth wide and shoved the entire rock inside. A bright flash of light burst from her. When it cleared, she excitedly barked that she could finally see. With their guide's vision restored, the path forward was clear. A dark cave waited for them at the end of a wooden bridge. Far from Hansol's group, a different kind of meeting was taking place. A man from a group called the Oculus was speaking to someone named Mr. Cork. He told Cork that his organization thought very highly of his skills. He reminded Cork that they were spending a lot of money to create something called the core. But as he spoke, his cup tipped over, spilling its contents all over the table. The Oculus member shot up from his seat, furious. He screamed at Cork, calling him a toad and accusing him of using poison during their deal. But Cork didn't seem bothered at all. He calmly explained that it wasn't poison. It was just whiskey. Turns out, Mr. Cork was a giant toad in a suit. He took a puff from his cigar and declared that there was nothing better than alcohol, calling it a gift from God. The Oculus member tried to get things back on track. He promised that if Cork joined them, their leader would make him the owner of the entire place. But his anger got the better of him. He drew his blade, questioning how a creature like Cork could dare to make fun of such a generous offer. That's when the whiskey finally hit him. The room started to spin, and he completely lost his balance. Cork corrected the man, stating he was an amphibian, not a reptile. He said he was fine with joining the Oculus, but he didn't like like their conditions. Before the Oculus member could react, Cork's men grabbed him. They held him down and started forcing whiskey down his throat. The strong alcohol burned as it went down. He screamed, completely caught off guard. After a moment, he looked up from the floor, completely overwhelmed. Cork's men laughed, saying he finally looked ready to make a deal. A grin spread across Cork's face. He told the man they had plenty of alcohol to get through. With the tables turned, Cork, the head of the Redhead army, announced it was time to start talking for real. Lying on the floor, the Oculus member looked up. One of Cork's men laughed, saying he finally looked ready to make a deal. A wide grin spread across Cork's face. He told the man not to worry, because they had plenty of alcohol to get through. With the tables completely turned, Cork and his Redhead army raised their glasses. It was time to start talking for real. Far away from all that, the group's spirit guide suddenly shouted that she'd found it. She was looking down at a huge field where dozens of ghouls were training, all lifting heavy stones in perfect rhythm. The spirit guide just stared, completely unimpressed. She thought to herself how worthless these creatures from Earth were. Meanwhile, two of the ghouls were checking each other's progress. One of them pointed out that his friend's back muscles had gotten way bigger. The other ghoul proudly said it was from pushing his muscles to the absolute limit. Then he asked if his friend had managed to put on any weight. The first ghoul confidently stated that putting on more weight was the key to building muscle. But his friend immediately looked shocked. He couldn't just agree with that. He argued that muscle stimulation was way more important than just lifting heavy. The first ghoul's face fell into shadow as he questioned what his friend was even talking about. He flexed, insisting that weight was what mattered most. The other ghoul just stared back and said something. Wait. The first one shot back. Soon, the two of them were chest to chest, locked in a heated debate. It was the age-old argument, weight versus stimulation. The first ghoul had heard enough. He flexed and said if his friend was going to be stubborn, they'd have to fight to settle it. The other ghoul twisted into a pose and agreed, saying he was planning on it anyway. A few other ghouls watched from the sidelines. One of them joked that the whole weight versus stimulation debate was really getting his own chest muscles fired up. He let out a huge yell, his eyes glowing red. The fight was on, but it wasn't a real fight. It was a pose-off. Someone yelled for them to line up, and the two competitors stood side by side, ready for judging. The analysis began. The ghoul, who argued for weight, had bigger back muscles, but the one who focused on stimulation had better balance and symmetry. A ghoul, wearing a red bow tie, stepped forward to act as the judge. He called for the first pose. He announced the front double biceps. The two rivals immediately hit the pose, flexing for everyone to see. The judge called for the second pose. He announced the front lat spread. The two rivals flexed their backs as wide as they could, showing off their definition. But as the judge was about to call the third pose, a voice cut in. It was Hansel, and he wanted to know what on earth they were doing. The ghoul's face lit up. He was thrilled to see his master. Hansel didn't look happy at all. He asked them if he'd heard right. Were they really arguing about Abby muscles? He completely lost it. He yelled that they shouldn't be wasting time debating weight versus stimulation. They just needed to work out more and get some rest. One of the ghouls looked down. He explained that they just really wanted to know which one was more important for getting stronger. They both turned to Hansel, begging him for the final answer. One was sure it was stimulation, while the other was convinced it had to be weight. Hansel didn't give them a straight answer. Instead, he asked them a question of his own. Dumbbells or barbells? Which one is more important? He kept going, asking them to choose between hamstrings and quadriceps. Then he demanded they tell him which was more important, the traps or the chest. Watching from the side, one of the other ghouls whispered to his friend. He said he understood the point, but that most people use mom and dad for that kind of question. He quickly shushed him, warning that Hansel could probably hear everything they were saying. One of the ghouls, who started the argument, looked completely stressed out. He was sweating, trying to figure out the answer. Suddenly, a hand rested on his shoulder. A voice told him not to worry about it. It was the other ghoul. He was smiling, having finally understood. He explained that you can feel the stimulation while also increasing the weight. They didn't have to choose. The ghoul looked up, tears in his eyes, completely moved by Hansel's words. He finally understood. Hansel just grinned. He told them to forget what they'd already done and just start over from the beginning. They all knew it. With Hansel leading them, they were going to get even stronger. The entire group roared in agreement, completely fired up. They were ready to go. While all this was happening, their guide Lena just casually ate another rock. She watched them get ready to work out and wondered if they had forgotten about the mission they were supposed to be on. Far away from them, a woman scoffed at her opponent. She mocked him, asking who would be dumb enough to get hit by such a slow attack. Her opponent just stood there silently, flexing his hand. He didn't seem bothered by her words at all. The young man looked at his hand. He thought he'd gotten stronger, but it still didn't feel like enough. He remembered what Hansel had told him. To get even stronger, he needed to work on his smaller, supporting muscles. He pushed through the thick bushes, searching for something. He was sure it had to be around here somewhere, and then he found it. A slime. It was exactly what he needed to make a resistance band. Without wasting a second, he jumped right on top of it, ready to start his exercise. He stretched the slime with all his might, pulling it tight like a cable machine. But as he was training, he noticed someone watching him from a tree, and they were holding his slime. The figure was a giant toad wearing a suit. He apologized, explaining that he needed that slime to make alcohol. The toad looked at the young man suspiciously. He asked why a human would need a slime, especially since he wasn't a magician. The young man explained that he was just trying to use it to make himself stronger. Hearing that, The Toad's entire attitude changed. He got excited and told the kid he should have just said so from the start, claiming his boss was an expert at making people strong. The Toad grinned, offering to introduce the young man to his boss right away, but the young man hesitated. He explained that he already had a master. It seems his hesitation didn't last very long. The next thing you know, he's drinking with them. The Toads were all cheering for him, impressed by how much he could drink. One of them, Bird, called him a natural, but the kid drunkenly admitted it was his first time ever drinking. Completely wasted, all he could think about was his original goal. He just kept mumbling, wondering when he could finally get strong. The Toad yelled that the young man was already getting stronger at drinking, that is. The kid was completely wasted, but they just kept pouring him more. He mumbled that he couldn't take anymore, right before he collapsed. The Toad just watched him, looking pretty pleased with how things turned out. Then he leaned in with a grin, mentioning that their alcohol was very expensive. Sometime later, the young man started to stir, mumbling that he was thirsty. He slowly came to, wondering where on earth he was. His head was pounding. When he finally looked up, he saw he was in some kind of massive cave, filled with strange glow. He woke up inside one of those pods. He tried to force his way out, pushing with all his strength, but the goo was too thick and stretchy. It wouldn't break. That's when a voice from another pod told him to stop wasting his energy. The young man looked around, confused. The voice belonged to a lizard man trapped in the pod next to him. He explained that this was the Toad's food storage, and there was no way out. The young man just stared, and for some reason, that made the lizard man furious. He started yelling at him not to ignore him, but then he just laughed it off. He admitted it was strange to get angry when they were both about to die anyway. The young man looked around at the other prisoners. He asked the lizard man why the Toads didn't just kill them immediately. The lizard man's answer was simple. They were being kept alive to create a dungeon. The young man had no idea what he was talking about. A dungeon. The lizard man explained that a dungeon is known as a land of darkness, a place where monsters are supposed to appear forever. But he said that in reality, it's impossible to create an endless number of monsters. The real secret is that dungeons steal and use the energy of living beings. All that stolen energy has to be compressed and stored in a core, which acts as the dungeon's power source. That's why the Toads were keeping everyone alive in the storage area. They were planning to use them as fuel to create the dungeon. The kid looked terrified. He asked if there was any way to get out. The lizard man's response was brutal and simple. He just told him no. The lizard man warned him not to even think about fighting back. He explained that the more they moved, the faster their energy would be drained and absorbed. The young man felt completely defeated. He believed this was all happening simply because he wasn't strong enough. He started apologizing to his master, Hansel. But hearing that name, the lizard man's eyes shot open. He asked in shock if the kid was talking about Hansel from the Ali mine. Confused, the young man confirmed it was him and asked how the lizard man knew that name. That was all the lizard man needed to hear. He started thrashing wildly, screaming that he had to get out of there immediately. The kid was completely lost. He asked what he was doing, reminding him that he just said struggling would only make them die faster. Far away from the cave, something else was happening. A creature let out a powerful roar. It was one of the ghouls, pushing himself to the absolute limit during his training. Hansel told him to start his push-ups over from the beginning. The ghoul screamed back in complete exhaustion, saying he'd rather just die right now. The training was just too much. After the workout, Hansel noticed someone was missing. He asked where Blog was. One of his companions explained that Blog went out to hunt for a slime because he forgot his resistance band. Hansel just said he should have asked, since he had plenty of extras. But one of the women with them looked worried. She pointed out that it was weird he hadn't come back yet. Hansel just smiled, completely confident. He told her not to worry, saying Blog was strong enough to take care of himself. But the older man with them wasn't so sure. He warned Hansel that they were in enemy territory, and it wasn't a good idea to be so comfortable. The older man just stood there, holding a giant rock, completely stunned by the suggestion. But Hansel just grinned and told him that if he didn't want to be comfortable, he should just do 100 squats. The older man looked completely broken. This training was just too much for him. Just then, a small creature started explaining their next mission. It said their target was a toad named Cork, who was planning to turn the area into a dungeon. It warned them not to focus their efforts in just one place, because that might accidentally end up helping the enemy. But Hansel wasn't thinking about strategy at all. The only thing he heard was toad, and he immediately started wondering about the protein in frog legs. The ghouls overheard him and went absolutely wild. The idea of a new food for muscle growth got them all fired up. They all crowded around the little creature, demanding to know where they could find this new source of protein. The mission had officially become a hunt for gains. The creature explained that it didn't know the exact spot, but the toad lived somewhere in a cave. The ghouls immediately came up with a plan. They would split into groups and signal each other by flexing their chest muscles. Hansel sighed. Of all things, he hated doing cardio. That's when the older man stepped forward, volunteering for the job. He told Hansel that searching was his specialty. He was practically begging, desperate to prove he could be useful. Hansel just smiled and asked him a simple question. Had he finished his 100 squats yet? The man's face fell. He admitted he wasn't done. With a cheerful grin, Hansol told him to finish his workout first. No excuses. The old ghoul closed his eyes and agreed. He was ready to do whatever it took. Miles away, one of the toads was dragging a heavy sack through a dark cave, singing to himself. He finally reached his destination, a hidden base deep underground. He went straight to his boss to report that the job was done. The boss pointed to a strange orb that looked like it held a galaxy inside and ordered him to put the captive in. The toad grinned, telling the person in the sack that they'd be meeting a lot of new friends very soon. Then he dropped the sack into a glowing pit, explaining that the captive would become food for the dungeon. Deep inside the prison, another captive felt the new arrival. He trembled in fear, whispering that the Reaper had come. Down in the pit, strange, worm-like creatures crawled through the darkness. Their red eyes glowed, searching for their next meal. Above them, 2 more captives were being slowly dissolved by some kind of green acid. The worms just waited patiently below. One of them opened its mouth wide, ready to eat whatever fell. It wasn't just the worms. Other prisoners had already started eating each other to survive. Meanwhile, far away from the dungeon, Hansel and his followers were resting by a fire. One of the ghouls turned to him, looking worried. He pointed out that Blog hadn't taken any chicken breast and asked if he'd be okay without his routine. Hansel just smiled. He told the ghoul not to worry about Blog, explaining that his body was blessed. The ghoul looked confused. He asked if that meant Blog was just born naturally strong. Hansel shook his head. He explained that Blog's blessing was that he had the worst sense of taste imaginable. Then he added with a grin that this was actually a bad thing. He explained that having a bad sense of taste just meant that Blog wasn't a picky eater. Then he started shouting with this crazy energy. He yelled that there was nothing Blog couldn't eat, except maybe his parents. To drive the point home, he slapped one of the ghouls right across the face. The ghoul just took the hit, drool dripping from his mouth. He looked up, ready for the next person in line. Far away from Hansel's campfire, deep inside that dungeon pit, the newest captive was in a bad spot. He was stuck to a cliff by some kind of green slime, with a swarm of strange worm creatures waiting for him to fall. The prisoner trapped next to him started screaming in disgust. Turns out, Cross was just eating the green slime that held him to the wall. But Cross didn't seem to mind at all. He just closed his eyes and smiled, feeling the moisture finally spreading through his body. The other prisoner was yelling that it was impossible to break free, but with a single flex, Cross just ripped himself right out of the slime. The other guy couldn't believe what he was seeing. Cross stood there, completely free, his eyes glowing with a strange energy. He didn't waste a second and immediately started climbing up the rock wall. He pulled himself over the edge and looked back down into the pit, thinking about his next move. But he wasn't looking for an exit. He pointed down at the worms below and wondered which one he should eat first. The other prisoner would have been horrified. Cross just smiled, drool dripping from his mouth, already looking forward to his meal. Far away from that dark pit, the sun was shining. A group of ghouls were out for a run. One of them called out to Mr. Gurud, asking if there was anything good about making a dungeon. Gurud explained that dungeons are basically automatic systems designed to gather power. He showed them a map, explaining that once a dungeon is established, its territory expands, and it absorbs energy even faster. It lets you create your own little kingdom that no one can challenge. That made one of the ghouls wonder why humans don't just create their own dungeons. Gurud told them it's not that simple. Humans run on weak personal energy, and trying to drain that from people to power a dungeon would cause a massive rebellion. He shook his head, adding that it's impossible to create one with a small population anyway, and even if you could, just maintaining it is a total nightmare. One of the women, Molly, pointed out that the place was damp and smelly, a spot where humans and even monsters barely lived. She couldn't understand why anyone would want to build a dungeon there. The little creature on her head, Al, piped up, telling Molly the answer was obvious. He explained that if a place looks like it can't provide any energy, there are only 2 possible reasons why. The first is to keep the area small on purpose, to avoid getting invaded. The second is when the creator has a goal that's different from just making a dungeon. He pointed out that both situations make it incredibly hard to succeed. Then he asked how they were planning to pull it off. Miles away, in a totally different place, a toad in a suit was singing as someone poured a drink straight into his mouth. Another toad, this one wearing a monocle, leaned in with a smile. He asked his friend if he knew why alcohol was so great. The first toad guessed it was because you can make friends easily. The fancy toad confirmed he was right, explaining that because of alcohol, they could all come together. The fancy toad explained that because of alcohol, they could make all sorts of different friends. Then, he pulled out a long contract. He asked his new friend if he'd thought about signing it. The guy with the goggles looked nervous. He stammered for a second, then just suggested they keep drinking instead. With that settled, someone announced it was time to go to the factory and make more alcohol. The whole group started heading out. They all walked together in a line, looking a little out of it. Suddenly, one of the horned guys started screaming. He was completely losing it, demanding more alcohol and threatening to destroy everything. The fancy toad didn't even hesitate. He knocked the guy out with a single punch. He calmly stood over the body. He said the guy was broken and ordered him to be sent to the toad prison. The lead toad announced it was time to go mince some meat. He explained explained that they needed to make sandwiches so their friends could work comfortably. Then the scene changes completely. Now, one of the toads was outside, showing another how to dig. He told him to put his weight into it. The toad kept digging while the others chanted his name. In the background, a ridiculously muscular guy walked by, carrying a huge sack on his back. The muscular man dropped his sack and walked over to join them. He grabbed a shovel and started digging with insane speed, working right alongside the toads. He suddenly stopped and pointed. He asked the toad who was approaching, mentioning that his back muscles were getting a great workout. One of the toads wondered if it was a friend. The other just stared blankly and agreed, not looking too sure. The muscular guy just grinned. He announced that break time was over and it was time for the next set. Then he grabbed two of the toads by their heads, ready to start his exercise. The toads dug with everything they had, chanting their own name like a war cry. Hansel wasn't digging with them. He was coaching, yelling at them to keep a rhythm and feel the contraction in their chests. And somehow, it was working. They started digging even faster. He shouted more instructions, telling them to relax their triceps and imagine the shovel was a dumbbell. The workout was so intense, one of the toads started sweating, which shouldn't even be possible. Finally, two of the toads just stopped. They were exhausted and asked why they should even be listening to him. Hansel's response was strange. He got on the ground and told them they should never neglect their exercise equipment. Then he stood up with a huge grin, cheerfully announcing that they were going to start over from the beginning. The toads were horrified. The toads finally had enough. They yelled that Hansel wasn't their friend at all, just some crazy person who had lost his mind. Hansel looked completely lost. He asked what they were talking about, reminding them they had agreed to be workout buddies, but they weren't listening. Screaming that he wasn't their friend, they charged forward and swung their shovels right at him. The shovel slammed into his chest and shattered on impact. He didn't even move. Hansel just looked down at them and calmly said they shouldn't be swinging exercise equipment at people. The toads stared at their broken shovels, totally stunned. One of the toads just smirked. He said there was no way a skinny twig like Hansel could have taken their attack. That's when Hansel's body lit up. A huge wave of power exploded from him, and his muscles started to swell to an insane size. His eyes glowed with red energy. He looked down, a single, dangerous thought forming in his mind. He towered over them, a mountain of pure muscle. He wondered if he'd actually heard them right. There was no way they just called him a skinny twig, but Hansel didn't punch them. He grabbed two of the toads by their heads and started to lecture them about muscle growth. He told them that proper weight training was important, but it wasn't the only thing that mattered. Then he pulled them apart like a giant resistance band, explaining how important it was to stretch. One of the toads collapsed, completely exhausted, but Hansel just kept going, warning them that stretching too much could actually make them weaker. He told them they needed to use just the right amount of stretching to make their muscles longer. He explained that exercising with better form was the most important thing, especially, he said, if they didn't want to stay skinny twigs forever. With a terrifying look in his eyes, he screamed that they absolutely needed to stretch. The toad instantly broke down, tears streaming from his eyes. He stammered an apology, promising he wasn't a skinny twig. Turns out, Hansel had tied another toad to a tree. He was using the poor creature as an anchor for his resistance band training. The toad screamed for help, completely unable to escape. Meanwhile, in a hidden room somewhere else, a group of toads in fancy suits were holding a meeting. The one in charge seemed very pleased with some news he'd received. He realized that with Hansel and his new trainees, they could create a dungeon on their own without needing help from someone called Oculus. He declared it was a day for celebration and raised his bottle for a toast. Jumping onto a table, he yelled for all the drunks to gather around and get the party started. The entire room erupted in cheers. It looked like the whole town had shown up for the occasion. Someone walked into the toad boss's office. He was just sitting at his desk, taking a drink. He looked up and asked if his guests had arrived yet. Turns out, the guests were executives from the Redhead Gang. One of them, a wolf-like guy named Kabord, was already trying to start something, but his partner, Killity, told him to cool it. More members of the gang filed in, each one looking tougher than the last. The toad boss just grinned, happy to see them all together. The toad boss raised his glass. He declared it was time for everyone to enjoy themselves and announced the start of a drinking game. A massive magic circle suddenly lit up the entire area. They were transported to a huge storage room filled with barrels of alcohol. The game was simple. Grab the goods. A strange floating die appeared. It introduced itself as 4 Eros, the one in charge of the game, and announced that everyone needed to pick a side. The die scanned the whole area, detecting 380 people. It then announced that it was dividing everyone into 2 teams based on their personalities. The floating die thing, 4 Eros, laid out the rules. It needed 5 people from each team to play its game. If nobody volunteered, it threatened to give everyone a penalty related to their blood alcohol content. Hansel had no idea what blood alcohol content even meant. But then he started thinking. He remembered that alcohol doesn't directly cause muscle loss. The problem is the liver. It has to break down the alcohol first, which means it puts off making protein. That delay is what messes with building muscle. On top of that, the whole process uses up water from the muscles, which makes you weaker and your workouts less effective. The thought of losing even a little bit of muscle was horrifying. Without a second thought, Hansel slapped his hand down, volunteering to join the game. Someone else was about to join too, but his teammates suddenly rushed in, yelling at him to stop. The man warned him that this was enemy magic and could easily be a trap. He argued it was smarter to hang back and see what happens instead of jumping in blindly. Gurod thought it was fine to just press the glowing button, but his teammate Weirdo screamed screamed at him not to touch it. Too late. The system announced that Weirdo was now a participant, and he let out a terrified scream. Garrod figured if they didn't join, the enemy would think they were weak, so he slapped his hand down and entered the game too. That's when a small, cat-like creature started explaining the situation. It told them this was a special kind of enemy magic. It warned them that this type of spell doesn't have an immediate effect. Instead, it sets up conditions that could lead to much worse penalties later on. Hearing this, 2 others decided it was better for the 5 strongest to participate. They both pressed the screen, volunteering to join the game. With the last 2 spots filled, the clown's face lit up. It announced that all the players had been decided. It then revealed the lineup for Team A: Yu Hansol, Garrod, Rutinda, Puri, Weirdo, Line, and Reina. The clown then announced the members of Team B: Cork, Randiv, Kabord, Killed, and Tailcack. They looked like a pretty serious group. With both teams decided, the clown announced it was time to pick the game. A glowing golden envelope appeared out of nowhere and floated down. The envelope transformed into a golden pyramid. The name of the game was Bunny Bunny. The clown explained that the rules were simple. All the players would become rabbits, but one person on each team would secretly be a carrot. The goal was pretty straightforward. Each team had to protect their own carrot while trying to catch the other teams, and the penalty was serious. If a team's carrot got caught, their entire team's blood alcohol level would instantly go up by 0.1%, which was like chugging a whole bottle of soju. Catching the carrot was way more important than catching the other rabbits. Then he announced that even the people watching could join in on the fun. With a huge, creepy smile, the clown yelled for the drinking game to begin. One of the toads on Team A looked incredibly smug. He was sure they were in luck, but then he realized he had no idea who their team's carrot was supposed to be. Just then, a massive explosion ripped through the nearby forest. A moment later, one of his teammates came running up in a panic. He yelled that they needed support right away. The teammate pointed out that over 10 people had already rushed past him. He suspiciously asked if he was even the carrot. The toad just flashed a huge, crazy grin. He admitted he didn't know who the carrot was, but it didn't matter because they had Hansol. He was already going wild, and the toad knew their secret weapon was just too strong for anyone to handle. Turns out, Hansol wasn't fighting to win the game. He was screaming because there was absolutely no way he would accept muscle loss from the alcohol penalty. Yu Hansol and his team were sprinting through the forest, but they weren't alone. From the shadows, figures with glowing red eyes were closing in fast. He completely lost his cool, screaming for his teammates to protect him at all costs. It turns out he was the team's carrot, the one person everyone was trying to catch. One of the ghouls, built like a tank, was leading the escape. They sprinted through the trees as fast as they could, but then Garrod stopped. He looked back, wondering why the enemy wasn't chasing him anymore. Gyod, one of the ghouls, explained that Garrod was sending a Morse code signal. The message claimed that Garrod was the carrot. He realized that's why the enemies had gone to catch the fake target. But Garrod was confused about how the enemy knew not to chase him. Gyod explained that he was just going around shouting it. Garrod completely panicked. He screamed at Gyod, asking why in the world he would shout that. With the plan ruined, the ghouls took off running again. They yelled for someone to stop the dangerous guy up ahead. Suddenly, a new enemy burst out of the trees. He was moving at an insane speed, his eyes glowing red as he charged right at them. The ghouls thought he looked weak, with skinny legs that looked like they'd break easily, but he was way more agile than they expected, dodging their clumsy attack with a perfect side lunge. He easily jumped right over them, calling them slowpokes. The ghouls could only watch in shock, completely unable to keep up. One of the ghouls decided he'd had enough. He started gathering energy for a massive attack, combining his kettlebell swing and heavy blunt skills into one huge blast. The attacker saw the huge ball of energy flying right at him. He warned the ghouls that if he managed to dodge this one, the fight was basically over. But instead of dodging, he reached out to stop it. Just then, a bright blue symbol flashed in front of the blast, stopping it dead in its tracks. It wasn't his power. A woman with a sword had appeared out of nowhere, blocking the attack completely. The green-haired guy was just as surprised as anyone, and that's when everyone felt it. A huge wave of power. Hansol stood there, his back to them, with a fiery aura exploding from his core. The fiery creature roared, explaining that his magic was fueled by alcohol. The more he drank, the stronger his flame armor became. He then poured even more alcohol over himself, roaring for a real fight. He unleashed his special move, the Crescent Moon Fire Wagon. A huge wave of fire shot straight toward Hansol. The attack slammed right into Hansol's back. The fire user mocked him, yelling that he was going to burn to death. But Hansol wasn't thinking about the flames. He was horrified by the thought of muscle loss. He refused to accept it. He flexed every muscle in his chest with all his might. With a massive push, like doing a cable fly, he literally threw the flames off his body. The force of it knocked the wind out of the attacker. When the smoke cleared, Hansol was just standing there. He had somehow absorbed the entire fire attack right into his abs. While Hansol was dealing with his opponent, the game was still going on elsewhere. An announcement declared that Kabord from Team B was officially out. Turns out, Kabord was just a rabbit. That meant Team B's real target, their carrot, was still hiding somewhere in the game. Meanwhile, one of the other players was far away from all the fighting. She was just lounging in a room, complaining that she was thirsty. A moment later, a ram-headed guy named Killiday brought her a drink. She looked annoyed and asked Killiday why she had to bother with such boring tasks. Killiday calmly told her they had no choice. It was part of their contract with someone named Mr. Cork. That wasn't what she wanted to hear. She started screaming that she hated it and just wanted to drink and have fun. Killiday just tried to calm her down. He promised he would handle everything himself, so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. He tried to cheer her up, asking if she liked the new rabbit doll he'd brought. She admitted it wasn't bad, but she was getting really tired of just sitting around in the room. Then, all of a sudden, she changed her mind. With a huge, crazy smile, she announced it was time to go hunt them down. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, a different fight was going down. A woman with red hair unleashed a powerful kick. Watching from nearby, a man with green hair smirked. He could tell her opponent was a strong one. The woman told her opponent not to dare look away from her. The green-haired man knew she wasn't talking to him. He was looking somewhere else. That's when a toad in a suit appeared right behind him, and an announcement declared that Mr. Cork had arrived. The toad in the suit just smirked. He told his opponent to go ahead and tell everyone that the carrot was right here. But his opponents were already running away. The toad yelled at them not to leave while he was talking. That's when a woman came flying through the air, aiming a kick right at him. She boasted that she could handle his level easily. Her kick slammed into the ground with incredible force, creating a huge crater. But the woman just stared, completely shocked by what happened. A massive shockwave ripped through the entire area, showing just how powerful that one attack really was.